Welcome to the absolute very last remaster, which is only 2 years late. Today we are turning what many consider the worst of the 5th edition modules, Hoard of the Dragon Queen and Rise of Tiamat, also known as Tyranny of Dragons, into a fresh and updated Mystara module, proving that everything gets better once you put things in the known world. There's a lot to fix, convert, and improve, as the first 5th edition modules set the bar really low. Many people didn't like the long caravan, the overpowered fight at the beginning, and the general railroaded feeling of the adventure. Fortunately, Mystara loves its caravans. The fights can be adjusted, and boring, stale, Forgotten Realms monsters can be replaced with fresh and beloved villains native to the known world. Is this going to save the module? No. But thanks to the person doing it, being me, I can at least make them better. I'm Mr. Welch, and today we're finishing what I started. The basic plot of Tyranny of Dragons is there's a cult trying to summon Tiamat into the material plane. This plot includes a plethora of reptilian kobolds, half-dragons, and similar, none of which are found in Mystara. Plus, how many times can you summon an extra-dimensional whore and keep it fresh? Tiamat would not be welcome crossing over into Mystara space, even if she could. If she got there, she would be facing all the immortals who take deity-level trespassers very seriously. And when Ixion and Thanatos agree upon something, it's not going to end well for whoever pissed them off. So it's time to Mystara this thing up. Now we're mixing up our conspirators. This continent-spanning adventure is going to include Nithian mercenaries who think they can restore their lost empire to its former glory, even if they can't remember what that looked like. Then toss in some baddies from House Ithil who are willing to sell even more of their souls for power. And lastly, dragon-loving Glantrian mages who fit in perfectly for the theme of the module. And of course, cultists working for the big boss directly. But what to replace Tiamat with? None of the Draconic Immortals are even remotely close to her in personality, treachery, or ambition. It's time to head to the Immortals-level monsters to find someone worthy of being the module's big bad. Only without being as lame and cliché as a 5-headed dragon who can't even kill a bunch of first-level adventurers. We're looking at the monster rulers, in this case the evil dragon ruler. Every monster species has an extraplanar or exalted version of it, with all of its stats seriously pumped up, including dragons. So Tiamat becomes the draconic ruler of evil dragons, fresh from her plane of evil Dragonlandia. Instead of 5 heads, she only has 1, but she can still use all the dragon breaths as Tiamat would. For maximum effect, she changes colors when using a specific dragon breath, like when Godzilla lights up before dropping atomic fire. She wants into the Prime Plane. This is usually frowned upon, but if she can dupe some cultists into opening up a portal, it makes it much easier for her to manifest without the immortals stopping her. Monster rulers aren't banned from crossing over like gods or archfiends, but unannounced visits are frowned upon. We can name the new big bad after my favorite twin from the TV show Sister Sister, and my 6th favorite doctor after Tom, Patrick, Chris, David, and Sylvester. So gone is Tiamat, and in her place is Tiamat, complete with a hyphen and an extra T. Totally different characters. Tiamat wants to establish a dragon kingdom in Mystara, something the immortals would instead not like to see happen. The problem is, that's not technically forbidden. She's doing what she can to increase the power of her kind, she's not asking to be worshipped as a deity, and movement from the nearby plains to Mystara has always been possible. She's not dragging the hells with her and freely recruiting from the locals. In short, she's skirting the rules as much as she can without breaking them. This might amuse the Great One, but immortals like Ordana, Vanya, or Ka will not be amused. So they send word to some of their agents, and the party is going to get involved, though probably without knowing precisely why they are getting involved. The immortals love to work behind the scenes. That way, there's far less paperwork afterwards. We've got our plot, we've got our villain, we've got our minions, and we've got our setting. Let's get this show on the road. A side note, Tyranny of Dragons was released as a single book with some changes a few years back, so you don't need both books anymore. However, I'm not spending any more money on these, so I haven't read the updated version and won't be covering it, sticking to the books I bought in 2014. I'm a completionist, not a masochist. The adventure starts with the party arriving at the lovely halfling village of Greenest, which has a delightful college and has won Village of the Year I don't know how many times. The problem is they're being attacked by a blue dragon, which is typically located in a desert environment. As this was supposed to be set in Faerun and not Athos, desert halflings are supposed to be rare. So for Mystara, we're flipping the atlas and moving this entire scene to Yalarum, to the village of Parsa. Now, quickly looking at the Yalarum Gazetteer to see what it tells us about Parsa.
Nothing! Absolutely nothing!
God, I love that clip. The one thing we do know about the village is it's located on a major trade route into Darrican. That will be crucial later. The attackers are a dragon that is beyond the scope of first-level characters, cultists, and kobolds. Now that we've moved the setting into an arid environment, we can't just have our cute little chihuahua men running around in the desert. They would be panting like mad. So switch them to human bandits representing the Nithian mercenaries. They're the same threat level, and they can show that some raiders are here just for money rather than fanaticism. The cultists at this stage are all Nithians, who have been promised by Tiamat's minions that their people will rise again, even though she has no way to actually do this. There is a half-dragon there to kill a player character in an absolutely unbalanced fight, and since Mystara does not do half-raises, and more importantly, dragons do not do lesser creatures, we needed a replacement. Grab a Cis-Thick or a Desert Scourge, level her up to be a challenge, and there you go. Cyan Wrath is now one of the reptilian humanoids that plague Yalarum with their raiders, only she's a little bit more smarter and signed on to this all the way. Likewise, Resmir, the half-black dragon, is now another Cis-Thick with extra levels. Keep the guard drakes. These are not creatures native to Mystara, but were sent by Tiamat to help her cause. It's one of the signs that the threat is now extra-planar. Then the players head to destroy the dragon eggs, and to keep with the Yalari theme, the monk is now a dervish that you have to rescue. The cult's dragon cleric follows the sphere of energy. Not all evil clerics follow entropy. Tiamat wants to conquer the world, not destroy it. Winged kobolds are still human bandits, but now give them a crossbow to compensate. They're still cannon fodder. If the characters decide to keep the eggs, the authorities back in Parsa will claim them in the name of public safety. But this will reach the ears of the Dragon Knights, who will look favorably upon the characters in the future. The party discovers that most of the stolen loot was already sent on a wagon towards Selenica and Darrican, and they need to play catch-up. This takes them back through Parsa, where they can return the stolen loot they already found and turn into dragon eggs. If they do return the eggs, reward them with 2 Yalari riding horses, which are 50% faster than a standard horse. Then they arrive at Selenica, where 2 groups will approach them, the Darrican Diplomatic Corps and a small group of Faris from the Yalari Order of the Rose. These groups are sworn to protect their respective nations and frequently cooperate. They know something is up with the dragon attacks, and they seem to be heading west towards Darrican City. The party is hired to track the cultists down and find out what they can. The DDC isn't known for its combat abilities, and the Faris blend in as well as Arlie Ermy at a sorority pillow fight. This is where being set in Mystara helps. Instead of trying to get hired on but to one of the caravans, the DDC provides them with jobs and easily verified covers. If a character is a merchant, prince, wizard subclass, they're going to have spells that make this part of the adventure far easier. Again, the benefits of being Mystaran. You can convert the various members of the caravan without much effort. The gnome becomes an agent of House Ithel, the kicker being she has no idea who she's working for. When she passes the message up to her chain of handlers, it will go through at least 7 different agents before it finally reaches an actual Ithel family member. The Red Wizard is replaced with a Glantrian Dracologist, who's a better fit for the module than the random Thayan, who is not suspicious at all. Considering Dracology is a secret craft of magic, there's no way of casting Detect Stuck-Up Germanic Dragon Wizard. The rest of the NPCs just convert to Mystara-friendly races, which isn't that hard as there's not many rare but ubiquitous tieflings in 5th edition yet. Then we move on to converting the rest of the adventure. There's an encounter with a golden stag that can be easily explained by turning it into a puka who is running around jacking with people with their ability to be invisible to just select persons. The Oathbreaker the characters will find will be converted to a member of the Adventurers Guild who was hired to find out anything he could about the conspiracy, only he got discovered. The gnome and the Glantrian joined the caravan right around Nimiston, with the gnome having orders to keep an eye on the cultists. Ithel House might be working with Tiamat, but they don't trust her other agents in the slightest. The party reaches Darrican City, gets paid, and is told to keep an eye on the cultists they're following. The villains are now headed north towards Cornglane, and the party receives papers from the DDC making them guards on the northern caravan. The party arrives at Swamp Castle, and due to the fact that it is neither burned down, fallen over, nor sunk into the swamp, it is at least the 4th of the incarnations of this fortification. Replace the bullywugs with goblins, which replace the crazy aspect of those monsters with the loyal aspect to the Elven Dracologist, who has hired their services in exchange for gold, and also not killing them. None of the other monsters would seem out of place in Mystara, so I'm conceding allowing Shambling Mounds and Odiugs. Yuan-Ti can be replaced with evil lizardmen, or even a snapper or 2 if you want a challenge. Clean out the castle, gain your level, and then move on. The party discovers the castle portal, and finds themselves high in the Grey Peak Mountains. So we need to find an appropriate mountain range in Mystara. And if there was ever a moment where this module was more Mystaran than any other setting, it is that moment. Okay, which one of the over 12 mountain ranges found in the known world wants to be the location of this teleportation circle? The winner is the Silver Sierras. Time to hit the hunting lodge. There's not much to change as all the monsters are found in Mystara, though switch the kobolds to bandits is normal. Follow the plot, with the cultist leader being honest about trying to open up a portal for Tiamat in exchange for the party killing all her superiors. The party then makes their way to the Flying Castle, a classic cloud giant base, and it's no different here. Change the kobolds to Nithian mercenaries, and here, nothing wouldn't be found outside of the known world. A cloud giant, wyverns, griffins, human cultists of varying degrees of competency, and the big bad who was already established previously as a Sisthik. This ends the first part of the adventure. The railroad has finally pulled into the station. The party will be 8th level, probably really tired of walking, and has gained the respect of several nations keeping a close eye on this conspiracy, which is rapidly becoming a rather poorly kept secret. Now we move on to the all-Tiamat portion of the module, and this is where it gets political. That means we have to make a few more substitutions. The Emerald Order is now the balance in all things. They're a Druidic order, nothing needs to be changed. The Lord's Alliance is now the Western Alliance, comprised of agents from most of the known world nations that aren't Thyatis. The Zentarum are a shell company for House Ithil, who is starting to reconsider their role in this mess. So let's finish this. The second book is just as much of a railroad as the first. You only have to do side quests or play nice with the factions to get the easiest ending. The Dragon Knight should be a part of this, and possibly one character will be invited to join. They're not going to play a significant part as they aren't a large organization, and worse, their numbers are scattered across the globe. But more than a few dragons respect the organization since they speak with the voice of the Great One. The Knights of Ebony don't have a role in this adventure, as Tiamat is similar to a Spirit Lord. She doesn't come from the upper or lower planes, which is required for their intervention. The party finds itself back in Darrakan City, talking to all the power players who want the Cult of the Dragon stopped. To avoid the 5e trap of having low-level characters doing all the work while surrounded by adventurers twice their level, steal from Red or a Black Shield. When the players arrive, the council is giving orders to mini-adventurers, as the plot is continent-wide. The players won't have to fight the Dracolich Barbershop Quartet threatening the Bardic College of Irendi because higher-level adventurers have been dispatched to handle them. Throw out 3 to 4 fake missions and give them to other parties so the characters don't feel like they're having to do everything themselves. They are, but don't let them know that. The first mission they get to sends them to Norworld to get Macath the Crimson back from the clutches of the cult. From what I could tell, she's the module's only tiefling so far, which is rather refreshing considering later they were added to every module by the dozen. Still, Mystara doesn't like fiend-touched conspirators, who are obviously there to usurp the will of the immortals, so she has to be changed. To reflect that, she's now a fire genasi. Nothing else about her is altered, as elemental creatures are allowed in Mystara, though not welcomed in most regions. Replace the kobolds with more human equivalents. We're not having those little lizard men running around Nunavut. That's silly. There are talking ice toads. Chalk these guys up as variations of the non-talking variety, thanks to the power of Tiamat. Macath is Glantrian, but she's not tied to the corrupted dracologists that Tiamat has in her employ. And Macath's safe return will win the character's points from the Magocracy. The next part of the adventure is a twofer, where you have to capture a dwarven dragon cultist from a bunch of Yuan-Ti, because Faerun can't do a module without them. For Mystara, a decent replacement is hobgoblins of varying types, as the kind of creature the dwarf is being held by doesn't really matter. The second part of this section of the book has characters fighting a green dragon and discovering the secret identity of another cult leader. In the book, he's the son of the Elven King, but Mystara doesn't have any Elven princes or kings that would qualify for this. So instead, we're making this elf the son of a Glantrian noble who turned his back on his family. Instead of being a Sylvan elf, he's a Belcadiz elf for maximum effect. The party should be surprised when, instead of fighting another dragon cult wizard, it's an elven eldritch warrior named Jorge Cortez who will taunt them with his rapier. Returning him alive to his family will earn major points in that faction. After that, there's a few political negotiation scenes. House Ithil offers to switch sides and gives the allies information on the cultists. They do this in the guise of a merchant consortium that the cultists hired. Their front organization, of course, will have multiple degrees of separation from the actual power players, so you're not tracing that back to their leaders as usual. The consortium will still be held with some suspicion for having worked with the cultists in the first place. There's a meeting with metallic, or at least good-aligned dragons, and then with Glantrian wizards, and an offer with a cultist turncoat. None of these need much tweaking, and you can go right into the grand finale. So now it's the ultimate and most awesome battle ever, where your allies show up and there's a colossal throwdown with the fate of the world in the balance. You might want to scale it down as there's somehow thousands of cultists formed into an army. That's a bit much for an independent military force to recruit without anybody noticing. If the party made nice with the Western Alliance, they will get military units from at least half a dozen nations. The Order of the Sacred Rose will bring a surprisingly large number of the Yalarm military, as they've been fighting the cultists the longest. If the party took House Ithil's offer, several of the Dragon Cult's senior officers will develop a sudden case of fatal death. The DDC provides all the information the characters will need. The Druids will also bring multiple Fey creatures to aid in the fight. If you want to aim for awesomeness, early in the adventure the party would have been given an offer of aid by various devils. This doesn't work in Mystara because obviously devils aren't welcome. But if you substitute them for, say, nightmare creatures, who send a speaker in the form of a Rexen, who offers their services on behalf of their unnamed master. Their unnamed master is the Archfey Mob, who does not like Tiamat at all. If you take her offer, add a host of murder elementals and high-octane nightmare fuel creatures set to liquefy to the player's army, which might make the rest of their force a bit worried. Now you've got the big throwdown between the Dragon Cult and the forces of the known world. Keep the battle flowing with lots of awesome stuff happening in the background if the players stop to look. Use your imagination. You got elves, dwarves, Hen, Swiss pikemen, Serbian heavy cavalry, Arabian paladins, Viking warriors, Scottish Highlanders, and a lot more fighting against a host of cultists. As I described above, the party gets to where Tiamat is manifesting, defeats the evil ruler of dragons, and retires their characters to play another, funner module. But at least they will have something to brag about rather than complain about with the Tyranny of Dragons Mystara version. This adventure works far better in the known world because a large chunk of its focus are things common in Mystara compared to Faerun. That's Tyranny of Dragons. It was the first 5th edition adventure released, and it hit shelves before the rulebooks did, or at least all of them, making for some scrambling on behalf of a lot of DMs. After 10 years of 5th edition and a long list of adventure releases, the first adventure is still at the bottom of every ranking I've ever seen. That being said, I think I've improved it. Not just by moving it from the Forgotten Realms to the far superior Mystara setting, but by making changes to the tedious parts. I had to redo this video in particular because it was the only one I did live all those years ago because my computer was out, and the quality well and truly sucked. And I cannot stand anything short of absolute flawlessness. This time we're looking at Descent into Avernus and Out of the Abyss. I'm Mr. Welch, and we are week 2 into the quarantine. Well, technically I'm not. My job is deemed essential by the state of Texas, so I'm still working, though it's only half days. But thinking about Curse of Strahd for a moment, it shows a perfect example of how a setting defines an adventure. The adventure is just the original Ravenloft with some extra bits strapped on. Ravenloft is considered one of the greatest D&D adventures by a huge number of people, and more than a few of them rank it at the top spot. So even if you shave off all the extra bits that were added onto it by wizards, it still is a fantastic module no matter what the addition is. It also serves as a perfect example of a module you just can't lift out of a specific setting and drop it into another one. Ravenloft at its core is about isolation and control. Strahd has ruled Barovia for so long that people have no memory when he wasn't their lord. They can't flee because of the killer mists. They dare not ask him for help. All they can do is live in fear. Those two features by themselves are easy enough to transplant, but together it makes it difficult to reskin it into an established setting. Sure, you can replace Barovia with your own made-up nation in Draculastein, where it's the same place with the serial numbers filed off, but that's not making any changes beyond the superficial. Mystara has 2 Slavic-themed areas that could fit the feel of Barovia, with Karamikos and Moldavia, but outside their Slavic field they don't have the same limitations Ravenloft has. Karamikos isn't controlled by a vampire lord that doesn't let you leave, and while Moldavia is vampire-controlled, he also shares power with the other Glantrian princes, so his control isn't monolithic. Ravenloft only works in Ravenloft because the history is so intertwined with the actual mechanics and the lore of the module. Now we skip over to Out of the Abyss, which was the module that I was trying to convert, and I realized as much as Curse of Strahd is a Ravenloft module, Out of the Abyss is forever tied to the Forgotten Realms. It requires so much Forgotten Realms lore and creatures that it's almost impossible to set it anywhere else, though I think Greyhawk might be possible. The inherent problem with the conversion is that kitchen sink settings are like AB positive blood. They can take practically anything and make it their own, but reversing it isn't always possible. You have to start taking out specifics to make it fit into other settings, but the more you take out, the less the module makes sense. Forgotten Realms modules, especially in 5th edition, have so much variety and diversity that they dwarf the variety of other settings. Look at the menagerie of NPCs the party gets saddled with at the very start of the module, for example. You've got a Darrow, a Quaggoth, a Dwarf, several Deep Gnomes, an Orc, a Drow, a Kuatoa, and a Myconid for the races. That's 8 different races, and only 2 of those races are canon in Mystara. Sure, Mystara has insane dwarves in the Modrigsworg, but the Rot Dwarves and the Darrow couldn't be more unalike if you tried. Shadow Elves make poor substitutes for Drow because they don't have the Drow love of cruelty and subjugation. Mystara doesn't have anything close to a Deep Gnome. I mean, you could use a Geonid, but those are very different creatures. The substitution problem starts showing up in the opening pages of Out of the Abyss. It's not just Mystara that would have a tough time cramming all these creatures into its lore. Dark Sun is completely alien compared to the Forgotten Realms. They have no concept of the Underdark. Dragonlance and Birthright would also be hard-pressed to explain where all these new races came from. In Out of the Abyss, you're walking through the pass of the Underdark and occasionally taking a boat to go to all these different places. In Mystara, the world below isn't a place you just walk from one place to another. A lot of it is only passable if you fly there. Mystara's world below, which is the closest thing the setting has to an Underdark, is very unstable geologically. So it's not someplace you just walk from point A to point B. You're going to have to fly some places. You're going to have to avoid all of the hazards that are inherent in it. It is far more treacherous, and because of the inherent danger to it, you're not going to have the large populations of people living underground like you do in Forgotten Realms. The most famous city in the Underdark is Menzoberranzan, which is protected by all these magics, and all the drow live there. The most famous city in the world below is Oinkmar, located beneath the Broken Lands, and it floats on a lake of lava, just to give you an example of how they're different. The plot of Out of the Abyss is also very much trapped in the Faerun style of adventure, where most modules threaten the world with destruction. Other game settings, the adventures that will lead to the destruction of the world if the party fails is a once-in-an-era event that has major implications on the political scale across the globe. Planet-threatening adventures that could destroy the entire setting in Faerun are called Tuesday. Then look at the core plot, with it being entirely about an invasion of demon princes into the world, and that flies into one of the core themes of Mystara, which is a cold war among various power players. The entropic immortals don't invade because they know the other immortals would intervene against them. The same goes for any of the other spheres of power. Energy, for example, is trying to gain more power with the Radiance, so the other immortals are trying to stop them. A demon lord invasion of Mystara would be considered an active war by the immortals as a whole, and then the war descends from the heaven on the trespassers. In short, Out of the Abyss is a Forgotten Realms module. Trying to convert it to Mystara is going to require a lot more adjustments to the module than the module could bear and still be recognizable. So we're on to the third module, Descent into Avernus. This one should have been a Planescape module. It would have been a fantastic Planescape module. I think this could have been the book to finally bring Sigil into 5e. But no, it's tied to the realms like almost all the rest. The module has two parts, one part in the material plane and one part in the hells. Leave the part in the hells alone. There's no conversion needed. You're going to an alien realm with nightmarish rules. That's already laid out for you. What we're converting is the not hell part of the module. Step 1, find a city to replace Baldur's Gate. There's two cities that you need to adjust to the module, the other one being Elturel. You need to find a human cosmopolitan city, so the module is not going to be set in Ethengar or Etrugan. If you don't mind a Roman theme for the start, Thyatis has a large number of cities that would be the perfect size. Port Lusinius is a great substitution. For Elturel, you don't have to change much. Just rename the city to something similar to the nation that you're putting it in. So if you have it in Thyatis, you give it a Roman theme like Ocelia. While if you put it in, say, Irindi, it could be like Manatupa or something similar. Elturel doesn't actually play a major part in the game while it's on the surface. When the adventure shifts to it, it's pretty much unrecognizable as a surface city anyway. The Cult of the Dead 3 that start the module can be easily replaced by any cult-worshipping an entropic immortal. Alphax or Thanatos are perfect for this. You can replace the devils with creatures like Mugina, Boot, Bargda, or Iron Golems are again perfect. Imps can be replaced with greater familiars. There's a few and you have a great selection, though they're close enough to those creatures I don't really bother that much. Again, switch out Drow with other elves, though Shadow Elves would be a poor choice because these guys are living on the surface. Skip over to Candlekeep, and you can use any local center of learning. If you're doing it in Thyatis, use the Great Library, for example. The artifact shield that you will get can be replaced with a Hupzine of incredible power. That's a sentient, inanimate construct with magical abilities for those not familiar with Mystaran monsters. Of course, just change the Tiefling to another arcane-using race to keep with the setting. After that, you're going to find the Hollyphant, and then the party goes to Avernus. After that, you don't need to convert any further. You're going to have to explain why Zerial got permission to raise an army to fight in the Blood War, which is usually not allowed by the Immortals, but it gives you an out because perhaps she signed a contract with a powerful lawful immortal, say Ixion, and he gave her permission. She broke the contract, Ixion wants revenge. Cue recruiting the party. That's going to conclude this week's Welcome to Mystara. Wanted to go a bit meta with what makes a module specific to a setting. That's why Out of the Abyss is almost impossible to run in Mystara, any more than running Red Arrow, Black Shield, and Faerun would make sense. Some adventures lose their purpose if you force them into new settings. Welcome to Mystara. I'm Mr. Welch, and today's word is Gotterdammerung. First up is Princes of the Apocalypse, which suffers the same fate as a lot of 5th edition modules in that it's located entirely in a single region of Faerun, specifically the Sword Coast. Faerun is a massive place, yet more than half of the modules take place in a very small stretch of land comparatively. Rather than stick every module into just a random temperate zone that's going to cause the adventurers to start to have a sense of sameness, it's time to start looking at other parts of Mystara for settings. Remember, this video is specifically designed to help Dungeon Masters, so players beware, I'm not labeling spoilers. The module has evil worshippers of all 4 elements in a small location, so I need to find a place where fire, water, earth, and air can be easily found. This leaves 2 locations, Irindi and Minrathad. Because of the diversity of the villains and the creatures found within, I strongly suggest you set this module in Minrathad. It turns the sandbox into a bit of a bottle. You're on an island now, you can't go too far to the left or too far to the right, or bad things will happen to you. Minrathad is a perfect setting for an elemental module. You get the sea, volcanoes, mountains, and strong coastal winds for a perfect match. Converting the monsters is straightforward. Of the 4 big bads, only the tiefling stands out, but there's a fantastic opportunity to make her truly Mystaran. Instead of a tiefling, she's now a Solix, the creatures from the plane of fire that are the sworn enemies of the Ifrit. Only with Vanifer something went wrong. Maybe she was captured by the Ifrit and tortured. Maybe she was always wrong in the head. Regardless, she's unrepentant evil and looking to watch the world burn. The air big bad Arisi only needs a minor tweak. Instead of posing as an Avariel, instead she becomes an Eeyore from the distant arm of the Immortals. They would be highly unusual in Minrathad, but as it's a merchant nation, they wouldn't be unheard of. The starting town of Red Larch can be easily explained away as just a small hamlet somewhere in Minrathad. If you wanted to put some space between the 4 evil hideouts, put each of them on a different island in Minrathad. Fortress Island with its mountains and rocky shores is great for the Earth Temple. Fire Island is obviously fire. Black Rock Island with its high peaks serves as the base for the Air Temple, and Open Isle with the reefs and shoals that surround a good chunk of it is home to the Water Cultists. So now you've got the party running around the nation of Minrathad, heading to a new location after every temple, but it keeps them close enough to avoid a lot of travel time. Mystara has a ton of elemental creatures that you are almost required to sneak into this module. Some of them are great substitutions for Faerun creatures. Kinku can be replaced with Evil Faenir from the Top Ballista expansion, or Winged Warriors from the Living Statue line, or Kalmaru from a purely elemental twist. The Air Cultists especially would be using Winged Warriors as much as they can. Replace Drow and Dwergar with regular elves and dwarves, of course, as normal. Aarakocra are switched out with Faenir without pause, and Sahuagin are now Sharkkin. The overly religious Kuatoa become equally fervent Karakara, especially since you're in the islands and that's their primary domain. The Aboleth that serves as one of the elemental lords is now a Kopru, selling his services for future power. Be sure to add in as many Mystaran elemental creatures as you want, because you are spoiled for choice. The evil Pyroform makes for a fantastic sub-boss, as they love to set things on fire, and especially things that scream. For a water equivalent, you've got the sadistic Hydrax. Fundamentals of all types make for cheap cannon fodder if you just need to add more bodies to a fight. If you want to spice up the fire temple, add a lava ooze or a plasm. Mystara loves its elementals. Unleash them with glee. Tying the adventure to Minrathad is beyond easy. Minrathad doesn't like chaos. Evil cultists are bad for business. Things that are bad for business have a bad habit of dying in Minrathad. The guilds are going to hire adventurers to take care of the problem. Discreetly. Discretion is good for business. The players have to take care of the bad guys, but they can't level cities fighting cultists. What they do in the cultist hideout is between the party, the bad guys, and the immortals. If the party stops the cults and keeps it quiet, they're going to get paid, and they're going to get paid well. Remember, nothing about their job is to leave Minrathad. Minrathad handles evil cultist infestations the same way Russia deals with leaking nuclear reactors or China deals with virulent strains of pneumonia. Bad things happen to those who spill state secrets. That finishes Princes of the Apocalypse. I'm not here to review the modules, just to convert them. So this kicks it over to Storm King's Thunder. This is the one you have to change the very reason for the module, because the Ordning is not a Mystaran concept. It started in Greyhawk and was promptly assimilated by the Forgotten Realms. Mystaran giants don't hold other giants in any sort of pecking order, though a few like the Hephaeston get honored because of their special abilities. Still, if a Hephaeston gave an order to a hill giant, the hill giant's under no obligation to follow the order. That being established, the first order of the day is to find a location for this module to be placed. This one is fairly easy because there's only one place that really fits all the terrain requirements for the various giants you're going to be facing. That's going to be in Vestland. You've got mountains for the fire giants, hills for the hill giants, tundra for the frost giants, and coastline for the storm giants. You've also got berserkers for the angry tribe folk as well, if necessary. Now to rewrite the story and make it much smaller in scale. Instead of a worldwide crisis, this is a family squabble restricted to the northern reaches. King Hecaton rules over the local giants after beating down the other giant tribes in a war decades past. The other giants owe him fealty, though grudgingly. His oldest daughters are tired or waiting for him to die, but they don't realize that he's the reason there is peace among all the giants at all. It doesn't take much to set the adventure in Vestland. It's an emerging mercantile nation, so there's going to be a lot more diversity in the races than if you set it in Sildurfjord. Now, humans are still going to be the dominant race by a massive margin, but it explains why there might be some hin in the villages. Mystara has a lot of races, but not much in the way of race mingling outside of a few specific areas. As always, replace non-Mystara races with Mystara races. Reading through all of these books makes me wonder if somebody at Wizards of the Coast has a serious fetish for tieflings, because they're supposed to be a rare race, and they appear in almost every single town you encounter. Once you finish the starting adventure, you get to replace the next 3 towns. Fortunately, you've got a flying castle, so you can spread out all over the map. But if you want to keep the setting in Vestland, all the better. The original adventure sends you up and down the Sword Coast, but it's also a world-spanning event. For distant Bryn Shander, it becomes the furthest north of Vestland, possibly onto the Heldonic freeholds or even Norworld itself. Golden fields can be set further inland, possibly as far as Runa. This is where large fields of grain can be found, as well as a large number of apiaries for mead and more exotic crops gained from the new trade Vestland is enjoying. Tribor is a trading post. It can be literally anywhere in Vestland. Remember, when setting this in Vestland, the majority of the population is human, but there is a sizable minority of dwarves and gnomes. Not many races of any other type is going to be found in large numbers. You'll find individual elves, Hin, Lupin, and Rakasta, but not enough to be considered a community. The Uthgard of Icewind Dales feature heavily in the module, but they don't have a good Mystaran equivalent. The closest you can get is Sildurfjord raiders, and they're going to be invaders rather than native to the land. Still, they can serve as good bad guys that are looking for a fight without much explanation. To add a couple of Mystaran twists to the module, first, change Harshnag into a mountain giant, a race of giants pretty much exclusive to Mystara. Mountain giants are known for working with the smaller races. In fact, a large number of them find employment fighting alongside the dwarves of Rockholm. Harshnag's motivation is now that he's tired of the raiding and the chaos caused by the other giants trying to break their fealty to King Hecaton. So instead of being a noble goal as his sole motivation, he's using this as an excuse to bust some heads among the giants he really can't stand. The second major change is that the Eye of the Allfather becomes, instead of a temple to the god of the giants, it's actually the home to a very old and very powerful Hephaeston. Remember when I said these guys hold a special place in giant lore because of their abilities? Now this is where you show it off. The Hephaeston is not just a respected giant. He forges artifacts for Odin himself, especially scrying relics, hence the Eye of the Allfather. The Hephaeston has been sought out before by various giant rulers. He uses his relics to answer their questions. The dead giant ghost you encounter was slain by his father for opposing his father's plans, once learning of the answer to their question. The Hephaeston answers their questions out of boredom, or you can require a price for each answer. The Oracle should be forging new artifacts while he answers the questions. Never once does he even stop to look at the party. He is just so wrapped up in his work. The search for the relics, instead of being a religious quest for the giants, is now an arms race. Each of them knows of an artifact created by the Immortals, a Hephaeston, or the Modrig's work that would put them on top of the other giants in the region. If more than one succeeds, it's going to turn into a bloodbath, as the giants will be more than happy to turn their new relic on their rivals. The airship of the dragon cultist instead turns out to be a Glantrian airship run by a dracologist and his retinue. The wizard is more than happy to hire the party to help them deal with the giants as they're disturbing his research, though that's up to you to determine what he's researching. The actual dungeon crawls for the giants don't need a lot of alterations. The motivations of the giants have been altered, but their methods haven't. The Yakvolk village can be used as is if you want to keep them, but if you want to substitute monster, the entire village is begging to be filled with Baldanar. Those creatures fill the same purpose as the Yakfolk and have largely the same sort of powers as well. When you get to the part where you have to find the ship the Grand Dame as part of the plot, this is a great chance to introduce Pao Ming, though instead of hailing from Karatur in the realms, she showcases the strange caste system of Ochiloa. Ochiloans have a very strict gendered caste system. If a woman wants to be a warrior, wizard, or general adventurer, they're forbidden from doing so. Because of this, she will often flee the nation to pursue her dreams. This is why most Ochilian adventurers outside their own nation are women. It has very little bearing on the actual adventure, but it's also a nice tie-in to other lands. For the same reason, you can change the Morkoth's first mate from a half-orc to a Thule to give the module even more of a Mystaran feel. For the final showdown, you need a desert. Unfortunately for Mystaran players, just south of the northern reaches is Yalarum, home to one of the largest deserts in the setting. I'm not sure how you go from Sweden to Arabia in the space of a few miles, but just blame a wizard and everybody's happy. There, replace the Yuan-Ti with Sithik and run the adventure as normal. And that ends Storm King's Thunder. It's not as grand a scope as Faerun's world-ending version, but no less difficult. I am currently in lockdown as I wait for a test on someone suspected of being infected, though that's looking more and more like a simple case of the flu, so I'm not really worrying there. I've got 5 books left to convert, and you do seem to be enjoying these conversions, so that's what I'm going to keep doing. I won't lie, they are challenging to do because of the difference in the settings. Faerun is all about world-spanning emergencies that always seem to happen in a very small geographical region. And Mystara likes to keep things centered around local events. Today's subjects couldn't be further apart, quite literally, as we are doing Dragon Heist, which is ensconced firmly in the Sword Coast, along with almost every other 5th edition module, and then heading over to distant Chult for Tomb of Annihilation. So without much further comment, let's fix the modules by setting them in the best D&D setting. I'm Mr. Welch, and we are going exploring. First up is Tomb of Annihilation, and it provides a quandary because its location is originally Chult, which is themed heavily on Central Africa, something Mystara has but not in the same style, so we've got to get creative. The first choice people would have in setting this module would be the Isle of Dread. To make this module work, you need jungles and you need dinosaurs. The problem is the initial city that you run across is far more built up than anything done on the Isle of Dread, so it's time to go back and revisit an old module for the setting. We're going back to Quagmire. The location of the module is going to be set in the Serpent Peninsula. It has the jungles, it has the dinosaurs, and it's largely unexplored. The African-styled nation of Tanakumba is a secretive land that doesn't have many dealings with outsiders except for in rare circumstances. They're not going to have a trading city open to random merchants and adventurers. But that area is known for having quite a few city-states, so Quagmire returns. The city of Cabanera is perfect for this. Just explain to the players that the city's name translates into Quagmire in the Thaatian tongue. It's right on the edge of jungles and swamps, so it fits perfectly for what we need. The capital of Tanakumba translates into Thanopolis in canon, so it's an established pattern. I do suggest making the city a city-state because the Tanakumba people as a whole are distrustful of outsiders, so this avoids a few continuity snarls otherwise. Quagmire gets changed from a small city built inside of a giant shell of just a few dozen people to a thriving trading post of thousands. The shell city never made much sense anyways. It was supposed to be this thriving trading post originally, but there was nothing in the original Quagmire module to remotely reflect that. There's a reason why that module got retconned. Of special note, if you're playing in Quagmire, remember the citizens of the nation are known for being shorter than average. It doesn't affect their stats at all or anything like that, but for immersion, remember the humans in the party are going to be a head taller than the average citizen here. Now that we've got the location set, we have to adjust the scale of the module to something more believable. That's a major problem with 5th edition modules. The sense of scale in the adventures don't add up in a lot of cases. When you're dealing with a world-spanning emergency with earth-shaking consequences, the players are going to ask, why does a bunch of newly beginning adventurers from the start have to be the ones to deal with the possible end of the world? Why isn't every major champion of the setting running to find the cause of this emergency and stop it? If the Borg are invading, you don't send a single scout vessel, you send the Enterprise. If the scout vessel gets orders to stop the Borg invasion, they're going to be looking at their commanding officer like he's crazy. It's all about a sense of scale. The bigger adventure, the less likely it's going to be ignored by established high-power characters. Now, this has always bugged me for a while, especially with the focus on world-ending disasters that dominate the 5th edition modules. There are ways to do it to keep the suspension of disbelief. Look at Red Arrow Black Shield. Yeah, it's a flawed module, sure, but it addresses the problem of what the high-powered adventurers are doing in this massive crisis. The war is across the map rather than just a single region. So when the party gets asked why the high-powered people aren't dealing with it, the Darrican General tells them coldly that they already are. The party is the highest-powered characters that can be spared for this particular adventure. Makes them think that there's a lot of heroes out there doing the exact same thing as the party, just somewhere else off-screen. That being said, Tomb of Annihilation is not threatening the entire world now. It is a local curse, only affecting the people of Quagmire and the surrounding area. This prevents the DM from having to explain why, if someone is soul draining the world, why the Alphatian Grand Council of Wizards isn't showing up all over the place looking for the culprit. Lower the threat level so the party is the right scale for the challenge. So on to the meat of the module. As always, replace Faerun creatures with Mystara creatures where necessary. One advantage of having the module set in a remote area with little in the way of detail is that if you want new monsters in the area that are new to Mystara, it's not going to be a problem. The grung might be endemic to that location, and the party's going to experience them for the first time ever in the setting. But if you want to replace them with wood imps, the players will never notice. Replace the Yuan-Ti with Gatormen, because the module is perfect for Gatormen, and you're set. You're going to need to replace the ever-present Forgotten Realms faction with the Mystaran equivalents. The Red Wizards should be replaced by Alphatian Wizards from Blackheart. They're ruthless, and they care more for looting than studying, compared to what a Glantry Wizard would be there for. The Flaming Fist can be replaced with a Thyatian Legion or Auxiliary. Thyatis is trying to make Quagmire a protectorate, so there's going to be legionnaires patrolling the jungles when necessary. The rest of the factions can easily be replaced with just the equivalent religions, mercenaries, or similar groups. There's a minor subplot about people chasing after a guy with a magic relic, but you can cut that part out of the book with no impact on the plot whatsoever. The trip to the actual dungeon is fairly straightforward. If you want to use the monsters there, it needs no conversions. If you want to use Mystaran monsters, you just switch them out. Fire Newts become Elemental Drakes, Grung turn into Cayman, Aarakocra are now Fener, Pateramen or Darkwings, though you'll have to increase the number of Darkwings because they aren't as powerful as an individual Pateraman. Tabaxi, of course, are now Rakasta, and one minor change that I'd use is the Frost Giants become Mountain Giants because they're far more mercenary for this role. So you've made it to the final temple, and now there's a major chance you're going to have to make, but it's a critical one. The 9 gods that are contained within are changed to spirit lords. Powerful spirits, but spirits regardless. Mystara has nature spirits that these gods fill the role of exactly. So while they claim to be gods, they're just really powerful spirits. The trap with the devils can easily have nightmare creatures emerge instead, like Malfera, Mugina, or Soul Eaters. Those are just as nasty. The dungeon's pretty typical. You're not going to be facing anything outside of monsters and previously mentioned NPCs, so there's not a lot to convert. Now we leave the dangers of the tropical jungle and head over to the urban jungle with Dungeon Heist, which is more of a treasure hunt where you're going to try to stop the heist instead of actually stealing the gold, because of reasons. This is set in Waterdeep, so setting this one was a bit tricky because Darrican City was the obvious choice with the guild house being the apparent target, but Darrican doesn't fit well in for a couple of reasons. First off, it's landlocked, and Waterdeep is a port, and that plays heavily into parts of the adventure. Second, Darrican is not racially diverse. The Gazetteer clearly states that Darrican is almost all humans, with only a small section of demi-humans, and explains that the demi-humans in that area tend to go to their nations of Rockholm, Alfheim, and the Five Shires. So it's almost all entirely a human city. Don't get me wrong, the nation of Darrican has no problem with demi-humans. They don't really have a problem with anybody outside of humanoids. It's just that the populations tend to prefer their own nations in that area. Like I've said in previous videos, Mystara might have a lot of races, but they don't mingle much across most of the world. So where do you put it? There's only a few cities in Mystara the size of Waterdeep. 2 of the most prominent cities in Mystara, Alpha and Thyatis, dwarf Waterdeep in size. Minothrad would be a good choice, but I've already done Minothrad in a previous conversion, so I want to keep it fresh. So looking at the port cities that are similar in size to Waterdeep and possess a diverse population, there is one that sticks out, and that's Slagovich. While it is smaller than Waterdeep by quite a bit, it's still the best fit. The city-state is a major port in the Savage Coast because it's a crossroads city to multiple nations, so it's going to have a large number of different races present. So out with Waterdeep, in with Slagovich, and let's start converting this module. Dungeon Heist is memorable for having 4 possible villains, and those do need to be addressed. Since there's not much about Slagovich written aside from a dungeon article and a blurb in Champions of Mystara, you've got some leeway in making the module fit. Remember to scale down the city since it's only about 20,000 people instead of the 100,000 plus of Waterdeep. However, there's going to be tens of thousands of merchants and traders in the city, at least temporarily, so you don't have to do too much. Okay, back to the villains. The 4 villains are a Beholder crime boss, a Drow swashbuckler, a family selling their children's souls, and an evil wizard. The wizard and the Beholder don't need changing. They're common enough in Mystara not to warrant many variations. Just shave off the names and you're good. Jarlaxle the Drow I never really did anything with. I think he tripped over his own feet and fell down some stairs and broke his neck in my adventure, and the party cremated him according to his wishes that they just assumed were his wishes. At least he didn't choke to death on a chicken bone like Drizzt did in the beginning of another adventure. The Drow are easy to replace. Either go with Belkady's elves or elves from the Savage Baronies. They're still swashbuckling, but with all that pesky daylight problems that plague the race, despite the fact that you find them on the surface of Faerun so often that they've had to change their mailing address. The fourth plot is the Castellanter family selling their kids' souls to devils, and that requires the most change. Taking out the devil, there's only one faction that would help the parents so easily in exchange for favors: the Unseelie. Switch out Asmodeus for Monotonous, the Unseelie Queen of the Hunt. Instead of the children being turned into devils, instead they're being replaced by changelings. The child that's already been replaced is now a Bloody Bones or a Rawhead or something equally nasty. Monotonous has kept her promise and now wants her payment. The fact that the parents are trying to weasel their way out is amusing the Dark Mistress of the Hunt. She will gladly take the gold and the souls that they're going to offer her. Not that that's going to stop her from taking the other children as well. She just wants the parents to feel like they're trying. She's chaotic evil for a reason. The module opens with a simple rescue mission that can be assigned to the party without having a famous NPC name dropped in the first few pages. Go here, rescue this guy, get paid. Simple enough. There's a lot of creature substitutions to be made in the module because the concept of creature rarity is lost in Forgotten Realms. There's deep gnomes tending bar, and drow sailors having a pub crawl. Use the normal replacements. You can use literally anything for the Kinku. The Zhentarim, who are scattered across the module, are now just a rival thieves guild to Xanathar. The module shares 5th edition's obsession with the Forgotten Realms factions, so you've got to address those if you want this to be Mystara. The drow become Belkades, like I said. Then they become one of Glantry's numerous secret societies. Jarlaxle becomes a Belkades Eldritch Knight named Wolfgang Hernandez. There's a story behind that name. It's actually a funny story. Emerald Enclave becomes the balance in all things, Mystara's largest druidic order. The Force Greys, the City Watch. Harpers don't have an equivalent outside of Faerun, but you can alter this by having a powerful NPC use the party as his proxy in the region. Etienne d'Amberville is a good choice, or for a lark, have the NPC be somebody evil in disguise, like, I don't know, Bargle. The Lord's Alliance is easily switched out by the Darrican Diplomatic Corps, and the Order of the Gauntlet is just another chapter of the Adventurers Club. Rather than repeating myself with that information every time I have to convert a module, I might just want to write that down and hand out the conversion sheet. They would save so much time. I know the factions are for League play, but they don't translate well outside of League play, just like when it was the RPGA. I have horror stories about that group. But back to the conversion. Moving the story along, you've got the explosion and the investigation at the start, and you've got the scene with Wolfgang. For added Mystara cred, use the submarine out of the Book of Wondrous Adventures. You'll need to explain the Slagovich politics resembles nothing like Waterdeep. It's a single ruler, though the nobles below them can serve as like a Lords of Waterdeep to keep the plot flowing, especially if you turn the nobles into like a conglomerate of economic interests in the city, and getting kicked off their board is a quick ticket to bankruptcy in Slagovich. When you get to the Dragon Season chapter of the book, that's when the book gets complicated because of the splitting story arcs. Every single section of the story has 4 different entries for the 4 villains. It gets a little tedious in conversion. For the alley scene, there's only a few suggested changes. The Intellect Devourer becomes a Brain Collector, because Brain Collectors are cool. Don't have Wolfgang show up in every single scene as Jarlaxle does, because it gets tedious, and it's one of the most common complaints about the Forgotten Realms, that the famous NPCs constantly show up in every single adventure to upstage the party at some point. Instead of Wolfgang showing up, he just sends somebody in disguise to impersonate the noble, one of his underlings. For the drow gunslingers, you can actually keep the guns. Slagovich is close enough to the Savage Baronies that guns aren't uncommon in the area, though finding smoke powder and shot is going to be prohibitively expensive. There's little else to be changed for the rest of the generic plot. Most of the creatures are found in Mystara or can be easily replaced. The Xanathar chapter needs quite a few substitutions because it reads like a Faerun's rogue gallery. One good change I highly recommend is replace the Mind Flayer with a Hypnos Majin, because the party is not going to expect a psychic free-willed construct to be part of a criminal organization. A trained Decapus can stand in for the Grell on a lark, if you want to change out the Grell. Kuatoa can become Gnolls if you want to go with the Madness theme, because Mystara and Gnolls are not known for their tenuous grip on reality. The Castellanter chapter needs a lot more conversion, because you are going from devils as your enemy to Unseelie. Unseelie queens don't do worshippers that often, and Monotonous prefers prey to parishioners. The biggest plot twist is the party is going to realize that the payment that the Castellanters thinks was going to save their remaining children is a bald-faced lie. The Archfey has no intentions whatsoever to honor her new deal. She's still coming for the children. The only way to save the children is to kidnap them and get them away from their family. This means Victoro and Amalia are going to end up being hunted for sport by a pissed-off Unseelie Queen, but that's the price of doing business with the Dark Fae. Like I mentioned before, replace the Chain Devil, that was their son, with the Bloody Bones, which you'll need to create, but there's a few stats for Bloody Bones out there. The temple below the villa gets changed from a temple to Asmodeus to a social gathering along the lines of a Bacchanalia. Remember, this is taking place during a festival. The guards and their society friends know exactly what's happening, so their reactions are going to be just as hostile. The Wolfgang Hernandez storyline gets moved to the lower level of Slagovich, where the ships normally dock. There's actually not a lot to change here aside from the drow, since Mystara has most of the other creatures in this section, and since Mystara has more rules about ships than almost any other setting, it actually covers this section quite well. The last section is the Manshun chapter. Instead of Manshun, just pick literally any wizard you want. Make up your own. Instead of Manshun, now the party is facing Dave the Invoker or something similar. There's nothing really to convert in this section because it's a straight-up dungeon crawl. The wizard's motivations are pure greed, and sometimes the simplest plots are the best. That's it for this week's conversions. Both modules were very Faerun-centric in their creation, though Tomb has the world-threatening plot and Heist is more of the throw every single possible race into a single city without explanation. They aren't easy conversions, but they weren't impossible. Then again, I'm also that good. I'm Mr. Welch, welcome to Mystara, and let's do the compilations. All the compilations. A few caveats before I dive headfirst into this review. First off, there's going to be spoilers. Be warned. Not every adventure gets an actual review. Not every module needs to be converted. I'll address the reason why I'm skipping a module, because maybe it's not converting because the rewrite would alter the module too much, or because the module doesn't need conversion in the first place. These are mostly older modules. Many of them were written during the period when Mystara was still in print. You just have to remove the Faerun influences that permeate almost everything 5th edition, even if the module is set in another land in its own history. Because Faerun spreads across every setting, it never stops. It's the kudzu of Dungeons & Dragons. Picking up Yawning Portal first, you get Sunless Citadel, a 3rd edition module that is one of the better introductory modules in that edition. It is technically a Greyhawk module, as one of the characters worships Pelor, but that's the only real sign that the module is set in Greyhawk. This module needs no conversion apart from turning the kobolds back into their proper form of dogmen. The module is a straight-up dungeon crawl that keeps it simple and concise. No special monsters, and the nearby town is generic enough it can be anywhere. The only requirement is to put it near a swamp, so Barakin or the Five Shires near Malfegi Swamp is a prime location. Okay, first module done. That was easy. Next up is Forge of Fury, the sequel to Sunless Citadel. It's another low-level dungeon crawl like its predecessor, with orcs occupying an old dwarven fortress. You can keep it in the Shires. The dwarven fortress is left over from the dwarven occupations of the Five Shires. There's a few changes that need to be made. Duergar are just regular rockborn dwarves, though of a less than savory nature. If you don't want Grix in your adventure, look at Rockfangs from the Five Shires, or the Decapus. Similar role, just use a creature that's native to the area. The rest of the module is pretty much just stock monsters. Just assume the Orog are larger orcs than the rest, like Black Orcs from Thar's Legion. The 3rd adventure in the Yawning Portal is the Hidden Shrine of Timoachin. Just from the name, you know that this is going to be in the Tiger Clan territory in Etrugan. This is a classic 1st edition module, so older players might already be familiar with it. Read this module a few times before you run it, because if you're like me, your knowledge of the Nahuatl language is a bit rusty. Because this module came around during the golden age of TSR, that's where Mystara was getting its start, there's hardly anything to change. Well, change the Were-Tiger that represents the Were-Jaguar into a Were-Jaguar, since Mystara has that creature. You have Thorn Slingers, which are almost identical to Mystara's Archer Bush, so just rename it rather than replace it. There's no Mystaran equivalent of a Coatl or a Gibbering Mouther, but those monsters are integral to the module. The Coatl is a major part of American Indian lore, so that fits right in, and the Gibbering Mouther is weird enough to might as well be Mystaran. So it's some minor tweaks and an easy setting placement, and you're good to go with this one. The 4th module is the classic White Plume Mountain, one of the best modules ever written. It's less of a dungeon crawl and more of a lethal amusement park. The author is Lawrence Schick. He's one of the co-creators of Mystara, and you're going to find this module really easy to fit. It's a bottle dungeon set under a mountain, and since mountains are Mystara's favorite terrain type, it's actually harder to find a nation that this module can't be placed in. But if you want to throw this module on its ear, put it in Irendi as a Safari Island adventure. The characters are tourists, and death isn't permanent in this custom-created dungeon just for them. The module uses mostly giant animals. The only creature that has a Mystaran equivalent is the Kelpie, which can be any one of these shape changers like the Scamille, but the module is pretty short, so there's nothing really to convert. The 5th adventure in the module is Dead in Thay. This is the only module I've ever had players ask me to stop. It's a massive dungeon hard set in the nation of Thay. It was designed as an encounters module, and it shows. The module consists of 108 rooms, and it's pure hack and slash. It was a gimmick module that it was designed to be played by multiple parties at the same time. In the module, the players are dealing with a power struggle in Thay, and Thay doesn't have a good Mystaran equivalent. The module has a very bad reputation for being a total slog. It borders on Mega Dungeon, and the plot's really not that engaging. Nothing stands out about it. It's a fetch quest with over 100 rooms you have to explore to get the right keys and turn off the bad keys. It takes forever to run. Like I said, it has 108 rooms, which is about triple the size of every other module in this adventure. Because it's a hardwired Forgotten Realms module, and also because it's a bad module, I'm just going to move on to the next module, which is far better. Against the Giants is a mega module that combines all 3 of the G series, which is one of the most beloved lines from 1st edition. Because of the fact that the module is old school, almost all the monsters are commonly found in Mystara. I mean, giants are giants. The modules are begging to be placed in the northern reaches because of the cold and mountainous terrain that makes it perfect for all 3 of the modules. The only 2 modules that need changing come from the Fire Giant adventure. That's taking out the Drow and the Mind Flayers. For the Mind Flayers, replace them with Brain Collectors, just upgrade the spells to make them more formidable. For the Drow, I'm going to go off on a lark and suggest replacing them with the Schattenalfen, which are the stuff of legend in the northern reaches. Normally, these are only found in the Hollow World. These elves are the servants of Azantiotle. They are utterly evil and depraved, but they don't follow in the typical Drow methods because their plan isn't normally conquest and machinations. Schattenalfen love evil for the love of evil, just like their immortal likes it. Normally, they're not good replacements for Drow, because Drow, no matter how evil they are, don't burst into flames when you expose them to sunlight like vampires. Since Drow are all over the surface of Faerun now, you can't replace them in all the modules with the Schattenalfen. Outside of the northern reaches, the Schattenalfen are never seen, and even in the northern reaches, they're pretty much the stuff of legend. That makes them appropriate for this module because they're never going to be above ground. This brings us to the last module in Yawning Portal, Tomb of Horrors. So there's one way to handle Tomb of Horrors. First, go into the central hallway. Go straight to the chest with the poison needle and the pit directly below it. Follow that hallway, fight the gargoyle, go into the maze of secret doors. Doesn't matter which doors you follow because you're going to come across the door with the buttons. Just push all of them at once and you avoid that trap. When you get to the Hall of Spheres, head straight to the black sphere on the floor, go through the illusionary wall into the passageway to the next part of the module. Then ignore everything in the room except for the coin slot on the southwest part of the door. Drop a coin in or a magic ring, proceed to the hallway with the doors and the pit trap behind each door. When you get to the 3rd pit trap, drop in it because that's where the secret door to the next area is. Then you follow the passage to the next hallway immediately, casting Detect Magic to find the next secret door. That takes you to the library where you need to smash the middle vase from a distance because of the acid within. Grab the first key half, smash the vase with the gray ooze in it, kill it, get the other half of the key. That gives you the first key. Take the exit to the south. When you get to the pit in the hallway, find and disarm the trap at the bottom of the pit, and then go 60 feet onward to find the secret door on the north side. The next room is trapped because the floor is going to buck randomly. Don't grab the tapestries because they turn into green slime if you tear them. Instead, just run to the northeast corner. Find the secret door behind that tapestry. Get out of the room as fast as possible. Follow the corridor. Watch out for the pit trap at the intersection. Go north to the secret door and watch out for the pit trap right after it. Again, drop into the pit trap. Find the passage at the bottom leading north. This passage takes you to the adamantine door with slots for 3 swords. You put swords in, the door opens up. This brings you to the famous Hall of Pillars with the throne and the crown and the scepter. Don't touch anything. Not the pillars, not the walls, don't do anything. Go straight to the throne. Take the scepter, touch the silver end on the crown impression on the thorn. Leave the crown on the throne alone. Head to the foyer, grab the second key, even though it's got a spell that makes you afraid of it. You're going to have to find somebody with saving throws. Open the southern door with the gold into the scepter. This takes you into the false treasure room. Ignore everything. Find the secret door on the east wall. Go through it and head north. Take that hallway where it curves and take the door on the left. This takes you into the room with the siren that offers 2 magic bags, or you can free it. Take the larger bag. Yeah, she goes away, but small sacrifice to get out of this module. It's a bag of holding and you're going to need it. Go back to the door just south of the passage after the fake treasure room, and that's the actual big bad. He doesn't do anything unless you first touch him or his treasure. Then he pops up and starts sucking souls. Instead of doing that, quickly put the bag of holding around him and then cut the bag of holding. You've beaten the Tomb of Horrors after facing just a gargoyle and a gray ooze. I hate this module. I hate it with a passion. It is a pointless meat grinder with killer traps that provide no clues. The treasure is mostly cursed, like the scepter that you have to leave behind or you're going to be attacked by a greater demon as soon as you leave. The actual treasure at the end is, well, but you never were going to keep those, so the 160,000 gold pieces that those gems were worth were completely worthless because you have to use the gems as ammunition against the Demi-Lich because those are some of the only things that can hurt him, because nothing the party possesses can hurt him. To actually hurt him, you need spells that are way beyond your level. You need magic items that a party of your level is never going to realistically possess. To kill the thing, you have to think outside the box, but you have to think fast because he's going to eat one party member a turn, no save. And even if you do kill it, all you get is some minor gems and a bunch of magic items where half of them are cursed. The module punishes you even after you somehow beat it. This module was made to kill characters. It is a terrible adventure that should never be played because it sucks all the fun out of the game as it just kills one character after another for making mistakes like walking through the wrong door, touching the wrong part of the crown, or opening a door that offers no clue on the actual key. It exists to kill characters and it does so without warning or mercy. The worst part is this was written by Gary Gygax, who told you in the Dungeon Master's Guide you never kill players with traps without warning. This module ignores that advice more times than I care to count. But since I just spoiled the entire module for you, you don't have to play it. You can actually go play something fun. You're welcome. And now it's time to move on to Ghost of Saltmarsh, the module that should have opened up the Greyhawk setting to the guild like Curse of Strahd did with Ravenloft, but apparently Greyhawk wasn't good enough for the guild. Saltmarsh covers a single region of Greyhawk, much like Curse of Strahd did with Ravenloft, but nope, no Greyhawk for you. These modules are easy to convert because they are old school modules, so there's a lot of overlap with the monsters and the setting. Plus, one of the adventures was written using the original Beckme rules, so that one is the closest thing Mystara has ever gotten to a new official adventure in 5th edition, or at least a new reprinted one by Wizards. First up is the module that introduces us to this quaint little town, The Sinister Secret of Saltmarsh. First, you need to place Saltmarsh. The book recommends Karamikos and the Blight Swamp, but Athenos and Darrican is right next to Malphagian. That works just as well. Points to Ghost of Saltmarsh for actually including Mystara as a recommendation for every module that actually needed a physical location. Most of the bad guys in this module are just simple human bandits, animals, or some stock D&D monsters like hobgoblins and bugbears. Only when you get to the pirate ship do you need to change the one thing in the module, and that's to turn Oceanus into an Aqua Rindi elf. Instead of a Greyhawk sea elf, he's a Mystara sea elf. There's a few racial differences between the two types of elves that you have to adjust for, but mainly just leave a tub of water in his room so he can breathe. Other than that, module's fine as is. Skip on to Danger at Dunwater, the immediate sequel to Sinister Secret. This module deals a lot with lizardmen, which are of course quite common in Mystara, so no worries there. There's a fair bit of creature substitution for the aquatic races, so grab your copy of the Sea People's Creature Crucible and you'll be completely fine. The Sahagin becomes Sharkkin easily enough. Lokatha, or the aquatic hobgoblins, can be replaced with evil tritons, though tritons are pretty much just merfolk with legs. To do this module in Mystara properly, you're going to need the Sea People book, but it's on Drive-Thru RPG now as a PDF. The module's a dungeon crawl, so not much else to convert. Salvage Operation is the third adventure in Saltmarsh, converted from Dungeon 123. It's a module around a shipwreck, and it takes place mostly at sea, so it doesn't need to be set anywhere in particular. This one doesn't need any conversion because all the monsters are just giant spiders and such. It's a quick little side adventure, works well with any nautical campaign, or if you just want to spice up an adventure with a lot of travel time. Isle of the Abbey goes back to Dungeon 34, and it is written entirely using monsters only from Beckme. Needless to say, this one's not going to need conversion. The book suggests placing this in Minearth Head, but it's a small island you can put anywhere you want, even on a large lake if you need it. You've got bandits, undead, some living statues, and that's it for the monsters. It's a short time killer, or a one-shot if necessary, but if the module doesn't need changing, don't change it. The final enemy is the third and last module in the Saltmarsh trilogy, picking up right where Dunwater left off. You've got lizardmen and merfolk, but you can substitute tritons for merfolk if you want them to have legs, but that's just flavor. The standard replacement I mentioned earlier still applies, so get some Sharkkin ready. After that, it's a straight-up kill-em-all dungeon crawl. There is a bonus for not raising an alarm in this dungeon, but slaughter is a very viable option for the party. For Dungeon 106, you get Tamarot's Fate, another island-based adventure. There's a visit to the village of Uskarn, but it's generic enough to be placed anywhere. Then the party gets the quest and heads off to Firewatch Island, a tiny speck of land where the bad guys are. They will be attacked by a giant Periton, but if you want to switch it out, I suggest taking a Fey Wing, pumping up its stats a bit, and unleashing a 3-headed dragon on them. Once you're on the island, it's a straight-up dungeon crawl. The Chul you'll find are basically magical giant crawdads, so blame that on a wizard for the rest of their powers. The last adventure is the Styes from Dungeon 121, and this one needs a new villain as the Aboleth is replaced in Mystara by a whole host of other similar creatures. The setting of the module is a small, dying coastal city. The perfect location for this is Marilenev in Karamikos. Lady Marilenev has long since abandoned her lands to ruin out of spite for Duke Stefan, so having it devolve into a crime-ridden cesspool that she cares nothing for to rule over makes perfect sense. With a little tweaking, change the Karatoba from Night's Dark Terror to a sentient monster, or at least a more intelligent one. That's your big bad. It's an eldritch horror with unknown powers. The creature has a poison that turns people into the scum in the module before they dissolve into primordial paste. It turns the final fight into a nightmare scenario, as it's a cross between Lovecraftian horror and the reactor scene from Aliens, as the creature attacks from all sides with its numerous tentacles. That's it for the compilation conversions. 18 adventures, reset in Mystara. Well, 16. Dead in Thay is a repetitious slog through Faerun's magical badlands, and even played in its proper setting, it's just dull. Tomb of Horrors is a terrible module with an undeserved reputation that does nothing but punish the party for wrong choices, while forcing them to make one blind choice after another. Some modules need no conversions at all, like Isle of the Abbey. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. I tried turning this into a Mystara module, but it's so formulaic, it's so repetitive, it's so predictable. I'm glad most of this adventure is staying in the Forgotten Realms. But for the sake of completion, I'm going to try to salvage what I can for Mystara. I'm Mr. Welch, and today I'm turning what parts of Dungeon of the Mad Mage that are left into a Mystara module. Mad Mage is supposed to be a mega dungeon in the same vein as Castle Greyhawk, but it comes across as just a bunch of numerous unrelated dungeons stacked on top of each other, with the levels having very little to do with each other. Most of the levels are contested by 2 factions, and almost every level one of those factions are drow. To be totally honest, you could call this Dungeon of the Ever-Present Drow, because if you go through this entire dungeon and burn everything to the ground, you are going to be the #1 cause of death for Dark Elves in the Forgotten Realms. So the trick is trying to find out which levels can be turned into Mystaran dungeons. You have to consider the fact that only a few of the levels have anything to do with each other. You have to carve up the module like Jenga blocks, and don't worry if the overall dungeon collapses. It's not like there's really a plot here to begin with, rather than kill everybody between you and the staircase. Before I go too far, let me tell you what levels are being left out because they are so filled with Forgotten Realms monsters or plot points they don't translate into other settings. So we're crossing off the list level 3, the Sargoth Lair, level 4, the Twisted Caverns, Slither Swamp on level 8, level 12's Maze level 16, the Crystal Labyrinth, level 17's Sea Deeps, and level 21's Terminus level. There's a few that could go either way, but if you twist them hard enough, they might fit. Most of those adventures are drow-focused or involve extraplanar creatures to the point where you couldn't explain them away in Mystara. It's your game, your rules, but those are the levels that are the most Faerun-centric. So let's look at what's left of the 23 dungeon levels of this book. Starting at level 1, it's called, well, just the dungeon level. The 2 factions you're facing are Bandits and Xanathar's Guild. You can side with one or the other, or just kill everybody if you want. There's not a lot of monsters to replace. Girls can be replaced with any number of Mystaran worm-like creatures. If you want to make this a standalone, making it an abandoned settlement or a castle where one group has set up a toll booth, and the other side is trying to claim the castle for themselves. Then head down to the Arcane Chambers, which is Goblins versus Were-Rats, and the Thieves Guild. The Goblins have set up a trading post where the party can resupply, which makes putting this dungeon in Mystara an easy task. It's set on the border between Broken Lands and Darrican. Similar to the first level, you can side with any of the factions, kill any of the factions, or just kill them all. There's more Forgotten Realms monsters to replace. Drow turn into evil elves, or unseelie She if you want. There's plenty of disruptive humanoids to replace the Nothics with. Going down a few levels to level 5, it's Willowwood, and this one's fairly easy to convert without much work. It's a druid against a dragon with werebats for flavor. You can easily move this adventure outdoors if you want, and it's more straightforward as the druid isn't evil compared to the dragon. Kill the dragon and the bats, and it's time to move on. The monsters here are fairly universal for D&D, so it's a straightforward romp. Then you head to the Lost level for Dungeon level 6, and it's Duergar versus Umbra Helks. It's actually set in a lost temple to a dwarven god, so you can switch out the Duergar for evil dwarves and make it easy. Change the demon statues into something nightmarish like Malfera for best results. course, the Dwarven god is now Kagiar, or pick one of the more obscure immortals for a deep delve into the Mystaran lore. Kill the monsters, find the stairs, and hit the next level. That's where you're going to find yourself caught in a fight between stone giants and a fairy dragon in Madgoth's castle. There's actually a hidden castle that gives the level its name, but overall, this part of the dungeon is a bit bland. You can kill the giants, or you can deal with the fairy dragon. The actual castle and its wizard can't be seen by the giants, so if you kill the wizard and clean out his castle, it doesn't have any real bearing on the rest of the level. This is one of the few levels you can walk through without much combat, or any combat if you play your cards right. Skipping to level 9, you come to Dwemer Core, which is an adventure set in a college of wizards, with the two sides being the headmaster in the form of a daemon and the night hag. There's a lot of substitutions that need to be made for this one to work in Mystara, but you can take the level and easily put it in most parts of Glantry. The headmaster can be any sort of unnatural but intelligent creature if you want. One suggestion was a Magan, or you could use a Mugina, or even an extraplanar creature like a Helion. The only question is, does the party side with the hag or the headmaster, or just flat out kill everybody? There's no good guys on this level, it's just a lot of backstabbing students and teachers. Level 11 is one of those iffy levels, because you have to replace all the drow, and there is a ton of drow to replace. The rest of the creatures are troglodytes, which is Mystaran. But here's the fun kicker. Replace all the drow with Thar's Legion. You can mix and match the drow with various creatures that can serve any role you need them to have. This lets you experience the Thar's Legion in full force as you fight troll berserkers edged on by kobolds with torches. You can be attacked by bugbear assassins and ranks of hobgoblins that work together to hound the party. Goblin Wokani provide the magical support. This completely changes the initial design of the level, but for the better. Since this is the 4th or 5th level where you're fighting drow, I recommend this even if you're not running it in Mystara. Skipping past another drow-filled level. Is this module Dungeon of the Mad Mage, or how many ways can you get attacked by dark elves? Seriously, with every level capable of being anything, it seems fully half the levels are dominated by drow. Seriously, show some originality here. But this brings us to lucky number 13, Trobriand's Graveyard. This one's a fun little level with a gnome fighting hobgoblins using mechanical creatures to hold his own, including a massive clockwork purple worm. You need to swap out the Myconids. I do suggest Geonids for those guys, but this is one of the easiest dungeons to take out of the module and put it into Mystara. After the gym that was level 13, we had Arturia Doom on level 14. Here's where you get to face fire giants, hobgoblins, and of course, even more drow. You get to hide from the hobgoblin patrols, avoid the fire giants, and get out of the dungeon with as little combat as possible. Or just kill them all and let the immortals sort them out. Replace the drow with any intelligent creature. Literally any of them. A Nagpa and his minions, an evil wizard, a scheming Efreet, several hundred squirrels with evil intentions, and an appropriate number of trenchcoats to hold them all. Seriously, we're on the 14th level of a mega dungeon, and you've got one race in half of the dungeon. It's the biggest dungeon in the Forgotten Realms, but so far it's just one drow after another. No Darrow, no orcs, just drow. It's great if you're playing Vault of the Drow, but this isn't Vault of the Drow. It's supposed to showcase the madness of Halistar, but it's just one level of drow after another, and it's getting tedious pretty quick. Level 15 ties in with the Council of Intrusion, as you have to save a bunch of Githzerai from a beholder while a portal to the elemental plane of fire threatens everybody. It's a pretty generic adventure, but it does give you a chance to showcase Mystara's distrust of creatures from other planes. The Githzerai know they shouldn't be there, and apparently Mystara's got the reputation of bad things happening to extraplanar creatures that show up unexpected, but they need the party's help to get them out of the dungeon. Bonus points if the beholder is a bounty hunter tracking them down for whatever immortal wants them dead. So we have to skip down to level 18 for the next adventure in Vanrock Doom, where you need to lift a curse off a good dragon against the cultists that seek to exploit its power. A few things have to be changed. First off, change the cultists to literally anything that's not a cultist. That's another Forgotten Realms bad guy staple. They've got dragon cultist, elemental cultist, vampire cultist, demon cultist, and probably cult cultists. Well, stop it. Come up with an original idea. For the dragon, remember Mystaran dragons can be any alignment, although it's uncommon. Still, if you uncurse the dragon and restore it to its original form, you can shock the hell out of the players by having him turn into an evil chromatic dragon. That's actually not evil. Level 19 is just an example of introducing Spelljammer in Mystara. At least it's a way to introduce things like Mind Flayers for cameos. You don't want to keep them around permanently like the Realms does, but it's a good distraction. This is a short level compared to the rest. Mostly you're going to be killing oozes and trying to figure out what a Mind Flayer actually is. It's a great way to get the party their own Spelljammer vehicle if you want to set out and visit other realms. Finally hitting level 20, you face the Runestone Caverns, which is a straight-up fight between undead and golems. This needs little in the way of changing the plot, as it's pretty straightforward. There are some creature substitutions, but nothing difficult. It's a kill-em-all. There's not much of a plot past total slaughter at this level. which is a welcome change from the rest of the module. The penultimate level is Shadow Dusk Hold, where you deal with a mad family that has seen things that should not be. For Mystara, this of course is the Plane of Nightmares. This is a high-level adventure, so just throw anything and everything from the Nightmare realms at the party. It can be a cross between Castle Amber and Hellraiser, so don't hold back as the party is going to be dealing with things that will shatter their mind long before it shatters their bones. Finally, we get to the last level. You get to fight Hallister himself. He's just a very high-level wizard. You get to use a Mystara high-level wizard of your choosing, be it Barrymore from Yalarum or a random Archmage from Blackheart. There's not much to change here, so it's a bit of a weak adventure for a level 20 character until you get to Hallister. Then there's some high-level undead to soften up the party, but you're there for the boss monster beatdown. Kill the bad guy, win the dungeon, congrats. That wraps up Dungeon of the Mad Mage. It's lacking in a lot of aspects. This isn't supposed to be a review, but this read less like a module and more like just playing every dungeon magazine back-to-back in order. You don't have to change every module to play it in Mystara. This module is a great example of that. Both of these adventures come from the seemingly lost medium of the boxed set, with mines coming from the very first 5th edition product, the D&D starter set. The Dragons of Icespire Peak came from the Essentials kit released a few years later. Both of these were steals for what you got. They got a 64-page adventure, character sheets, full set of play dice, more importantly, and some other player aids. It's well worth the price of admission for both of them. I'm not covering the other box sets. While I find Rick and Morty funny on occasion, the crossover really didn't do anything for me. And the Stranger Things box set, while including a pair of Demogorgon miniatures and a basic adventure, did not include even one single picture of sweet, lovely, doughy-eyed Winona, the only reason we even watch Stranger Things. But enough about the embarrassing lack of Winona in D&D products. Let's get to the conversion. First up, Lost Mines. It's considered one of the best adventures written for 5th edition. It's tightly written. It keeps the party moving forward while not railroading them. Gives them enough variety in monsters so it's not just wash, rinse, and repeat. To start, we have to place it in Mystara, but the town of Phandalin isn't much of a town as it's a small village of only 1,000 people. I say small because the obvious replacement would be Threshold, but that's 5,000 people. Penhaligon is 4,000, and that was the next obvious. If you're going to place this in Karamikos, the closest town in population and similar geographic features is Verge, which is just south of Threshold. So practice your Serbian accents, everybody. There's 5 parts to Lost Mines, with the first part being a classic goblin cave that can be put pretty much anywhere in a setting with goblins. It's a straightforward prisoner rescue, doesn't need any conversions at all. Everything is just goblins and a bugbear, so there's nothing to replace. This is a starter level module. Part 1 has the gloves on for a reason. To be fair, if the party is all new players and have never played before, the goblin ambush can be quite deadly, so remember that part. Just like Castle Caldwell, this is meant to teach new players, not traumatize them. Veteran players might steamroll this part because they know the tactics, but remember, this wasn't written for them in mind. The second part of the module is the town of Phandalin, where the players get to restock, heal up, not like that's difficult in 5th edition, and practice the social aspects of D&D, where you have to talk to people to get information rather than beat it out of them. At least I hope they do the talk part instead of the torture part. There's not much to change in Part 2. Strip out the annoying factions from this small town and just give out the quests normally. Okay, going off on a tangent, I think the factions in 5th edition have been really overused, and that might be the reason why everything in 5th edition, module-wise at least, is the Sword Coast. You've got 5 factions that were primarily used for the Adventurers League that appear in almost every module so far, but they're regionally based. The Lord's Alliance isn't going to have any pull in Thay or Mulholland or Unther on the other side of the map. It would be like visiting Grants Fall, Oregon, and constantly meeting members of the New York Firefighters Union. Faerun is a massive setting that spans thousands of miles, and the Forgotten Realms players are only allowed books set in an area the size of California. I've been coming to realize that that's one of the biggest problems with Forgotten Realms. Even the people that love Faerun around here have been complaining that they are sick of the Sword Coast. Move on to the Moon Sea or someplace different. Granted, when D&D video games first came out, it was all about the Dale Lands and Cormyr, so I guess that's always been a problem with certain areas getting all the attention. But back to the review. One of the quests you get from Phandalin is a simple kill-em-all dungeon quest. There's human bandits for the most part, so nothing to change here. There is a Nothic, and if you want a Mystaran creature, you need to find a cave-dwelling nasty to replace it with. For a real twist, throw a snapper at them. Similar hit points, you lose the magic part of the monster, but you replace it with pure tanky goodness. Everybody thinks, what's a turtle doing here? Then suddenly the turtle opens its snapping turtle mouth, and everybody realizes this isn't the friendly kind of turtle man. After you take care of the dungeon, it's time to head overland to face new threats. It's mostly just regular D&D monsters, with the parties walking from one encounter to the next. They will make it to an abandoned castle in Cragmar Castle, but that doesn't really need a location because it's the size of a manor house rather than an actual large castle. There's a Grick inside that you can turn into a Mystara worm easily enough if you are so inclined. Then you get the party to face their first owlbear. Remember to give bonus experience to the player that tries to saddle break it, and then stare at them disappointed if they just flat out kill it. The last part of the module is another kill-em-all dungeon, with only a single drow needing to be replaced. Any evil elf will do. It doesn't even have to be an exotic race. A Belkades bandit will work in a jiffy. The rest of the module is basic monsters, nothing out of the ordinary. Kill the bad guys, get the treasure, level up, the end. The module is 64 pages, same size as the early Gazetteers, and it stands up to the older modules. It's well written, the encounters tend to be balanced, and it's a good starter for both a beginning DM and players. I do wish 5th edition would include monster stat blocks with the encounters like the modules of old, rather than requiring you to keep another part of the book or the monster manual bookmarked or have to buy the monster cards from Gale Force 9. That's a personal preference that everybody else should share. If Wizards would make smaller modules like this instead of the huge $50 campaigns that they tend to release, that would be fantastic, because this module blows away most of their hardback adventures. More stabbing, less explaining. Moving on to Dragon of Icespire Peak. This is a compilation meant to be played one adventure at a time rather than overarching storyline. You can't actually play all of them because once you finish enough of the encounters at a certain level, it locks out the other adventures at that level. This lets you replay it without repeating a lot of the adventures. As it's just a compilation, most of these adventures are a little more than encounters than actual adventures. I'll just go over the changes needed and skip the ones that can be played with little changes. The module is set in Phandalin again, so we're going back to Verge. You've had plenty of time to practice your Serbian accent, so that's not going to be a problem. There's 14 different encounters that are anywhere from 1 to 4 pages in length on average, though they're introduced in alphabetical order rather than in escalating difficulty, and that was something that bugged me. But starting in alphabetical order, let's go down the list. Axholm is the first one. It's your standard kill-em-all dungeon with basic monsters you can put anywhere. Just have the party run across it when you need a filler dungeon for an evening. Butter Skull Ranch is a 2-page encounter that's pretty much just a single combat encounter. Kill the orcs, and the rest of the buildings is empty except for the guy you were sent to rescue. This can be slotted in anywhere, even as a random encounter in another module. The third encounter is another short one with Circle of Thunder. You'll need to replace the evil Cleric of Talos with something Mystara related. An Entropic Immortal or an Evil Energy Immortal will work. The big bad is an actual animal spirit, so if you've got a player running a spirit shaman, this is their time to shine. Dragon Barrow is another short encounter. It's just 2 pages. Not all the encounters are 2 pages, but a lot of them are. This is another Wandering Monster style encounter. Nothing fancy, just kill some monsters to score some sweet treasure. Attach this to any adventure that's dragging in the combat department. Another 2-page encounter is Dwarven Excavation, a very short dungeon with some traps and, of course, orcs. If you need a short adventure because you had to work late on your adventure planning night, then send them into this dungeon so they can kill the bad guys and take the treasure. Nothing fancy here. Falcon's Hunting Lodge is meant to introduce the players to a friendly NPC that gives them plot information. There's no combat in this encounter, just get the information and leave. Ignoring all that, there's a nice map of the hunting lodge that you should steal for further use. If the party saves some random noble later, give them the hunting lodge as a reward and a base of operations. Make the campaign personal by giving the party something they can call home. Don't have to be murder hobos now that they have something to protect. Nomengard is one of the largest adventures in the book, coming in at a whopping 4 pages. Ignore the wild magic part of the adventure. Wild magic is a Faerun problem. Mystaran magic is far more stable. It's predictable and superior in all aspects. It's a straight-up dungeon crawl that, since we're in Karamikos, you can set near Highforge for maximum gnome-licious adventures. Icespire Hold is the final adventure in the book, at least chronologically, where you get to kill your way through an isolated castle to fight the titular dragon. Replace the mention of Tymora with Raven or Tyche, then set the party loose and watch them kill en masse. They are 5th level at this point, and the wizard is just itching to try out the new fireball spell that was just acquired. Verge is south of the Black Peak Mountain, so there's plenty of spots to put this castle. Then you have to find out a way to take the castle away from the PCs, because it's a very nice castle that's going to be short on owner a few fireball spells later. But that's your problem to figure out. After dealing with a dragon, it's time to get back to boring stuff, because you're going to send the party to the Loggers Camp encounter. There's an evil druid the party's actually not going to likely be encountering, and a whole bunch of Ankhegs in this short encounter. Ankhegs aren't Beckme related, but they were mentioned in 2nd edition briefly during that time period. So if you want to keep Ankegs in Mystara, that's not a problem. But if you're doing this as Beckme and you want to keep with the traditional Mystaran monsters, go for the old standbys of Megafauna. Hyenodons or Phororhykos, which is the giant terror birds, are similar in challenge rating to an Ankeg, and since the party is near the Lost Valley of the Hutakans, why not? Mountain Toe Gold Mine is a rat-themed kill-em-all 2-page dungeon. It's a one-shot and one-nighter for the party that you can squeeze in anywhere. Simple enough. Shrine of Savros is another short kill-em-all with some orcs. The Mystaran equivalent to the Faerun God of Fate would be Skuld or Tyche, for those wondering. The rest of the module is just you stabbing orcs, so it can go anywhere on the map. The Tower of Storms is a 3-page encounter that doesn't need much changing, other than the evil god of storms is replaced by an insane cleric of Odin or a similar villain. Other than the unique villain, there's nothing much to convert in this adventure. Umbrage Hill is a 1-page encounter where the party gets jumped by a manticore. That's it. Kill the monster, and you can reach the merchant and buy all the cool stuff. It's not much of an encounter, but I guess they had a page to kill. Making page count is a thing in designing these modules. I'm not faulting them for the brevity of this one. Sometimes you gotta pad because the books have a specific number of pages for the printer to work properly. That's why books like this always have their total pages divisible by 8. And I have talked way too long about an encounter with a single monster. Last encounter is the Woodland Manor. It's 4 pages, a lot of druids, and a nice follow-up encounter if you drive away the bad guys. Again, the party is left in possession of a nice house once the bad guys are disposed of. It's up to you to decide whether they get to keep it or not. After looking at both of these box sets, it's easy to see why Lost Mines is considered the far superior of the two, and that's because it has a coherent plot rather than just a bunch of encounters that read like an issue of Dungeon Magazine. There's nothing wrong with Dragon of Icespire Peak. You get your money's worth and then some, but it's more like a DM's aid rather than actual adventure. Cleric gets stuck with babysitting and you have to run an adventure shorthanded. Throw the rest of the party into a quick dungeon with some orcs and that's already written for you. Books like this have their place. They aren't meant to be full adventures, but more like emergency encounters that you don't have to worry about taking the time to make it your own. Plus, the rest of the stuff you get for your $20 is outstanding. In short, nothing stands out to me. But how do we fix it? Well, I've got 320 pages to figure that out, though the main plot doesn't start until page 170, leaving me 150 pages to try. Oh, and the adventure is over on page 262, leaving me 92 pages to figure this out. I'm Mr. Welch, and it's time to thaw out Rime of the Frost Maiden. I might as well get this out of the way first, as I have rewritten this entire video maybe 3 times now going through this book. Forget this module's overarching plot. Run it as a complete sandbox like it was Isle of Dread. Ignore the angry ice goddess. Ignore the dwarven plot. Take the several dozen subplots and let the players run around solving the ones they want to, and just let them explore the frozen north. Ignore the perpetual winter arc. It's just regular winter in a region where it's dark 24 hours a day for months on end. They have shown up in the far north looking for adventure and riches, and now it's winter. Nothing supernatural about the dark, just regular Arctic winter darkness. It's not like the winter goddess plot is the end of the book. It still keeps going for 2 chapters after that. This book's layout is a complete mess, and when a Mystara player tells you that the story's flow is all over the place, you know you've got a problem. This was easily one of the worst 5e modules for me. The balance of the encounters and the flow of the adventure seems almost random. It does have some good encounters and some minor adventures. You can take out the entire plot and just run this as mini adventures and you won't miss a thing. You'll probably actually have more fun. If the rest of the review seems a bit out of place, I moved this part up to the front because it's been bugging me all day. First up, as always, we obviously have to change the setting, and the obvious location for this module is Norwald. It's frosty, isolated, and cut off from the rest of the known world. Since the province is still being settled, you can hand-wave all of the small settlements as new towns just being established in the far north. In the rhyme, the villain is the cruel and vindictive Auril, the ice goddess, and that isn't going to work in Mystara, naturally. Mystara doesn't have an immortal devoted to cold, because that's kind of an idiotic thing to become a patron of anyways. Who decides, when lined up for picking your domains as a god, that they want to have temperatures below 40 degrees Fahrenheit? That is a wasted decision. So who do we pick? Of the immortals that have cold as their domain, we have 3 of them. The Elemaster of Water is true neutral and doesn't bother with the prime material plane. Stotos is a minor immortal who looks like a toad and is trying to bring around the heat death of the multiverse. And finally there's Hell, the big bad of entropy. Unfortunately, none of these work for a variety of reasons. First off, immortals aren't allowed to use their powers to directly kill mortals. No wiping out another immortal's followers with a wish spell, much less a control weather spell. That's hardwired into the restrictions on immortal magic. Second, the other immortals are going to intervene if another immortal goes out and decides to freeze a portion of the planet. That's not something you can hide. Lastly, killing your own followers is a terrible idea that will get you a visit from any number of powerful immortals, even if you lead your sphere like hell does. For the real villain, we're ordering off menu, stealing from Finnish folklore and getting us a more powerful fey creature, a Halileska or a Snow Queen. Yeah, I'm butchering that name badly, but close enough. You can find the stats for one over on the Vaults of Pandios, that you're going to have to ramp it up to Archfey status, which just means bigger powers and more hit points. The more powerful fey creatures can warp reality around them, and the Snow Queens, by and large, are very isolated creatures that experience loneliness more than any other. And while they are pining away, their powers make it very deadly to be near them. The sadder the Snow Queen is, the more powerful her aura of cold is. She might not even know she's freezing a huge chunk of the continent, or that other fey creatures are using the eternal winter to create absolute mayhem. As all the various names for the Fairy Tale Queen are about 20 letters long each, I'm just going to refer to her as Queenie. The basic premise is the same. Norwald is trapped in an eternal winter because Queenie has had her heart broken and her grief is so powerful that she's radiating cold for hundreds of miles. She's not doing this maliciously, but it's the curse of the Halileska that they don't understand their frost powers harm those around them. They don't feel the cold, and people who get close to them don't feel it either, though they're still freezing to death. They just don't feel the cold. The start of the adventure is the chapter that might as well be called the Hurry Up and Level Up to the Point that you can actually go on the actual adventure we wrote section. There are 10 micro-adventures, each linked to a specific town, with a couple of adventures that can be placed anywhere. The first is called Cold-Hearted Killer, that has a reputation of being overpowered because the bad guy has a ton of hit points, multiple attacks, regenerates, and deals 13 points of damage on average with an attack. Also, he teleports, and you face him at first level if your DM doesn't know what he's doing. And he's challenge rating 3. People have made videos saying he's not that bad, after running the combat 30 times so they can beat him no problems. Actually, that's a huge problem, because if you run the combat 3 dozen times, the players know what he's capable of. If the cast of Predator knew what the bad guy's power were, you can be sure they would have planned differently on how to tackle him. The repeat players are winning through meta-knowledge, which is not necessarily a bad thing. It's practically unavoidable. After I realize a 12 misses the bad guy and a 13 hits him, I've got an idea what his AC is, and I'm going to figure out how many hit points in short order if I face enough of them. But if that's the only way the party is winning, that's the problem. The book says don't let this guy be the first adventure they face. Then it presents him as literally the first adventure they face. The guy can overkill wizards in a single hit because of the amount of damage he does on average, and he's got 2 attacks. The DM's options are play this guy dumb or have him jump on tanks, and even that's no guarantee, because if he hits both rolls, the fighter is going to go down. No fighter has 24 hit points at first level. The other option is to fudge like mad. I have no clue how this guy got past playtest. To make him Mystaran, change him from some undead guy standing up for his goddess to an unseelie she who likes to murder for sport. That's easy enough. The second and less TPK-filled starting quest involves a mage hiring the party to track down a bunch of Schwingas. No, not those. No, and definitely not those. The nature spirit Schwingas. Yeah, those. Granted, if the party wants to track down the first bunch, they're going to have to drive to Houston, and if they're tracking down the second bunch, they're not going to get paid, though it might be more fun for them. Assuming the party is looking to score some gold rather than just score, Schwingas are a harmless nature spirit that are even good-natured. Make them actual spirits instead of elemental, since Mystara has the spirit realm. It's a bit of an investigation adventure without a lot of danger, but it's designed to teach the players about that part of adventuring. Afterwards, they want to track down the newbie McMurder machine at 2nd level or 3rd level, they're more than welcome. The 10-town sections can be flipped through with a few minor changes, like taking out races that don't exist in Mystara and replacing them with those that do. Replace the allegedly quite rare, yet surprisingly ubiquitous tieflings that you'll meet in every town, either with humans, or for bad guys, throw the party for a loop with Baldendar or Buttes that you can find in the Monster Manual of Mystara. Duergar are all over the module, and they can be replaced with Dwarven conspirators from the Repossessed faction. Essentially, they're in Norwald to strip mine what they can and use the newly acquired wealth to hire a force to overthrow Rockholm. Add in various monsters and mercenaries to build up their strengths and to give some variety in their dungeons. These are smart opponents, and they will retreat if pressed. If you need one with magical powers, throw in some one-shot magic items to simulate spells. For the awakened plants and animals that the party's going to find all over the place, throw on the spirit tag, and that's easily explained. If you're playing an Ethengar Spirit Shaman, remember to thank your dungeon master for doing this. There's going to be kobolds. Remember, Mystara kobolds are dogs, not lizards, because you're in the frozen north, you're not going to run into lizards. If the kobolds are supposed to have wings or magical effects, go with gnome-designed winged harnesses and one-shot magic items. The 10-town sections can be converted fairly easily, with several of the towns requiring no changes at all. Or skip over all of it and just start your players at 3rd level, since those adventures seem to be nothing but starting dungeons to get you to that level anyways. After the starter quests, you've got a whole bunch more filler quests with no impact on the plot whatsoever. There's a crashed mind flayer nautiloid, run by some gnome squid-like things that seem to be out of place, even in the Forgotten Realms. They even have a laser pistol. If you want to leave this one completely out of the game, nobody will notice. The party can run across an upside-down ruin trapped in ice. It's an interesting dungeon, just change the Netheril origin to Nithian. Then you get the bonus of no one recognizing anything because, like everybody else in the world, their memory of Nithia is wiped. There are 2 rival Goliath camps, which aren't native to Mystara, so instead of Goliaths, change them to Creons. Cryons? There's no actual official pronunciation, so let's just go with Creon. These guys are a Mystaran native Arctic humanoid that I don't think has ever been used in a module. You don't have to change much. The Creons care mainly about their survival, and you can keep the 2 rival clans' plotline as the Creons fit into the story seamlessly. Okay, after 9 minutes of me talking, we're actually at the start of the plot. They could have just as easily said this module was for levels 5 to 11, skipping past everything I just talked about. I don't think anybody would have noticed. But let's get this part over with. The party has to choose between taking on a dwarven fortress or stopping a dragon that's raising the town. If they don't go after the dragon, bad things are going to happen while they're having fun killing dwarves. The dragon is, I believe, challenge rating 13, and since the party is right around level 7 or 8, the party is going to have a really rough time fighting that dragon, especially since the tactics in the book says it breathes fire, and then it flies out of spell and arrow range, recharges its breath weapon, and then goes back around for another pass. Of course, this leads to another one of my pet peeves with the 5th edition modules by, once again, having a world-threatening cataclysm and deciding the only people that can save it are first-level adventurers. Considering this module was written for the Forgotten Realms, and they have, I don't know how many god-level NPCs running around, which is kind of strange because you usually run into all of them in every 5th edition adventure set in the Forgotten Realms. But, once again, we have another world-threatening apocalypse, and the only people that seem to be able to do anything about it are first-level adventurers who just learned their sleep spell or how to swing a sword. You would think after a few years of missing summer that the 10 towns might put out a call to hire high-level adventurers, especially with all the epic-level NPCs just hanging around in bars and signing autographs. Maybe one of them would be willing or able to fight a goddess. So the Dwarven Fortress is going to be part of the repossessed plot. The dwarves here are mining this place as fast as they can so they can get the wealth back to their leaders without King Ericol of Norwald being any the wiser. What they're doing here would severely damage relations between Alphatia and Rockholm, not to mention tip off King Everast of Rockholm to what's going on with the repossessed faction outside of his borders. That makes the characters loose ends that need to be tied up. Replace the Quaggoth with snow apes, and the Barb Devil becomes a Mugina, the Myconid becomes a Fungoid, and other creatures get similar changes. There's a tortured mind flayer that can easily be turned into a tortured brain collector. If the party decides to go after the dragon instead, that's a straight-up fight once they track it down. Of course, the dragon is way over the level of most parties, so more than likely they're going to need to level up at first, either by grinding all the unrelated adventurers or cleaning out the Dwarven Fortress, which allows the dragon to destroy most of the surrounding towns. So you're going to end up with something along the lines of Baldur's Gate 2, where Imowen gets captured in the first few minutes, and rather than carve your way straight through to your missing companion, instead you go and solve every single problem that you can find in the city before you run out of problems to solve, and then you finally go and rescue your lifelong friend, who's been sitting in a jail cell for the last 6 months getting tortured by an evil wizard, while you're running around hiring a sculptor for a temple, clearing out a circus, or helping get a gnome laid. So no, take your time. Imowen can wait. She's not going anywhere. You go and have fun. She'll be there when you finally decide to go get her. While pulling that crap is perfectly okay in Baldur's Gate 2, in this game, players are going to expect time to march on, even though they're doing all these minor quests to get higher levels. But what does stopping a dragon or cleaning out a castle filled with dwarven cultists have to do with confronting the cause of the eternal winter? Not much. But now we've killed 195 pages of this module, so we've got to be getting there because I'm running out of pages before we get to the appendices. So now you have to find the lost city that holds the key to stopping Queenie. Again, Netheril becomes Nithia, which is fine because Nithia loved flying pyramids and such, and the Empire was spread out all across the continent, and more so. You're going to run across a wizard who's part of the Arcane Brotherhood in the Rime of the Frost and Maiden book, but you don't have to make them part of a conspiracy because this is part of Alphatia, and you can't throw a dead cat without hitting a wizard in Alphatia. This wizard, instead of having precise information, will instead have rumors and ideas of where the ruins came from, all of which are wrong, of course, because you aren't allowed to remember Nithia. Eventually you're going to have to come across Queenie. You're supposed to stab her to death, but that's boring. Since Halileska embody the human emotion of longing, instead you might try to pacify her somehow, to bring some relief to her. It will be difficult because you have to figure out what caused her loss. It might be an elven lover who died after centuries and she can't control her sorrow. She might have lost an heirloom. But it would be more work to have the adventure end peacefully, but it would also be much more fulfilling to have the endless winter end as you've warmed the heart of a Fey Queen who doesn't know her own strength. If you think the adventure ends with ending the eternal winter, you would be wrong, because there's 2 more chapters after you beat the main quest. And they're both dungeon crawls. You're going to come across a lost city, make this one Nithia, because that means you get to explore an ancient Egyptian city frozen in ice, and that's cool. You need to change the slot out because Mystara doesn't do outer planar creatures. Considering the cold nature of the setting, the evil elemental Hydrax would be more than perfect substitutions. Replace the weak and feeble Magan of Forgotten Realms with the pure and wholesome Mystaran Magan. In other words, let them talk. Then the party just has to kill everything until they get to the magic switch that will teleport the entire planet back in time. I'm not really sure how that works. The more I think about it, not really sure how that could even possibly work. Some guy in Norwald pushes a switch and tomorrow a hen farmer wakes up and finds, instead of his calendar reading 1005 AC, it's now 750 BC. The more you think about that, the more your head's going to hurt. But enough of Rime of the Frost Maiden. It was one of the weakest modules for me in 5e. It was a bunch of unconnected adventures stapled together with no rhyme or flow between them. You do the starter quest and suddenly a dragon attacks, but you also have a dwarven fortress to conquer. Then you get to face a trapped goddess. Then you discover there's a lost city unrelated to anything previously mentioned, just like the goddess wasn't related to the dragon who wasn't related to the starting quests. This reads like somebody took a setting book and decided to run every adventure Hook suggested without thinking if the adventures have anything to do with each other. My advice? Cherry pick this book for the good adventures, and there are several fun ones to play early on. Just ignore the bad ones. Like those traitorous dwarves that are going to plague the party throughout this adventure, mine this module for everything you can and discard the rest. But the actual point of this video is to convert Candlekeep Mysteries into Mystara. Consider this also a bit of a review, as I acquired a copy for review, and I didn't want to wait months before I talked about the latest release. This video is mainly for Dungeon Masters of a Mystaran bent, so there be spoilers, players. I'm Mr. Welch, and it's time to book it. First off, Candlekeep Mysteries is 17 adventures with a small section prefacing the Candlekeep library beforehand. Yes, the same Candlekeep you start Baldur's Gate in. These are supposed to be mysteries, though for several of the adventures, the mystery part is slim at best. I've always been a mystery fan, though pulling it off in an RPG that it isn't designed around an investigation mechanic is tough. One of my first jobs was forensics, specifically blood spatter analysis. Not that that knowledge will pay for a cup of coffee anymore, thanks to technological improvements in the field. The actual library doesn't play much of a role in the Mystara version, but accessing the books is really easy to do in this, so don't worry about it. The books actually serve more of a framing device for the various adventures. Think the portraits in Rod Serling's Night Gallery. As always, I will be offering suggestions to replace the tired and stale Forgotten Realms monsters and locations with the fresh and original Mystara versions. First up is The Joy of Extra-Dimensional Spaces, a starter-level adventure that I will give major props for, as this adventure is the first one to address a pet peeve I've had since the start of 5th edition. When they talk about a monster, they put the stat blocks next to the encounter. Not for the already established monsters, but for the 2 new monsters. When you get to that part of the dungeon, there's monster stats already ready for you on that page. I don't know whose idea it was to finally implement that. God bless you, because you're the only one in the book that does it. The adventure is a first-level starter dungeon where you get trapped in a mansion that requires you to solve a riddle to get out. It's a scavenger hunt, but the encounters aren't too difficult. You can switch out some of the imps and such for planar familiars if you want, but this one is a pretty solid adventure. The fact it's set in Mordenkainen's magnificent mansion lets you put this adventure anywhere you want. Mazfrost's Mighty Digressions is up next. You will find this adventure when a book tries to eat you. Turns out somebody's been replacing rare books with man-eating book monsters. They aren't that difficult, but the people who bought those books would really like to know where the real books are. So the party heads off to find the culprits, where they have to get a clue from one of the very rare yet quite ubiquitous tieflings in the Forgotten Realms. You will meet the villain right after that, who really wants the real books as well. You'll find the actual culprits, who are not the villains, and they're actually jackalwares who are playing nice and selling the copies to raise money for a resurrection. If you want to make them Mystaran, there's a real nice option you can use in the form of the Adapters, a race of shapeshifters looking to acquire as much knowledge as possible. Their motivations are instead, take the book, leave a decoy book, though they don't realize the decoy books are becoming hostile. At 3rd level, you are facing the Book of the Raven, which reads more like it should be in Ravenloft. It has Vistani as an introductory element, where they are only mentioned and don't actually appear in the adventure at all. The actual plot is a standard haunted house with a lot of interaction with were-ravens. However, those are primarily a Ravenloft creature, and I have too much respect for the Domains of Dread to steal from it. So grab the Fainir from Top Ballista and you're ready to go. The adventure is pretty straightforward, if not a little underpowered, as the monsters are low-level undead. It's good for a filler adventure if you need to level up players or just kill a game night with minimal prep time. Then you've got a deep and crawling darkness, where you get to explore a seemingly abandoned town. There's not much to this adventure as far as lead-up. Something drove out the people and you're looking for answers. The monsters in this are almost exclusively meanlocks, but for maximum fun, replace them with wood imps. Lots of wood imps. Have them striking from ambush with traps everywhere. Individually, they aren't dangerous at all. In large numbers, they will have the players cursing them for days on end. Mix in garden and bog imps for variety, maybe a redcap or two. In short, the module becomes little dudes with attitudes. Shimshime's bedtime rhyme is for 4th level adventurers, and this time they have to undo a curse in the form of a killer earworm. First, we gotta replace the Kopru with a cool Mystara monster. For cube points, just throw in a Phanaton to be different. The rest of the adventure needs no changes, as it's a mystery to kill the unique big bad. Then you get to Fireball level with the Price of Beauty, which is the most Faerunian of all the adventurers so far. You've got 3 hags as the big bads, along with some extra planar buddies. For a deep delve, change the hags to the 3 witches from Rahazia. They've possessed 3 new smoking hot elves and are back in business. For a hoot, have Rahazia send them on the quest, especially if you ran Rahazia earlier. Replace the Cambion with a Stalwart for a kick. Stalwarts are obsessed with being physically perfect, so they don't have to change shapes, since they can pass for human to the unsuspecting. The very rare and quite ubiquitous tieflings are now just regular elves or humans. Changing the villains will require some work, but the theme between the hags and the witches are quite similar, and reoccurring villains are tight. The Book of Cylinders is a somewhat aquatic adventure, as it takes place mainly around some swamps and coasts. There's not a lot of conversions except for the monsters. Yuan-Ti are the host villains, and they don't do Mystara thanks to our plethora of reptilian options. So let's grab some of those replacements. Move the adventure to an oasis in Yelarum. Let's give the small city of Sulba some love. Now the Yuan-Ti are Cystic, the desert scourge. Upgun a few for the variants, and you've got a serious threat to the party. The frog-like Gripply that are asking for the party's help are now Cayman, who want to stand up to the Cystic, but what they possess in bravery they lack in the fact that they're only 2 foot tall each. The rest of the adventure will play out normally. Sarah of Yellowcrest Manor is a ghost story where you investigate the deaths of a noble's family and his servants. There's not a lot to change. The story's pretty basic. Investigate the murder site, head to the dungeon, kill the bad guys. Not the most original plot, but for a mystery it works. There's some grells that you can replace with Decapai. The one suggestion is to change the bad guy to a warlock instead of his stated class. Based on the story's background, it does make a lot more sense. Lore of LaRue takes you straight to the Good Kingdom. You're in a fairy world chasing after some invaders. There's a lot of sylvan and fey creatures running around the place. There's not much to change. The Grick becomes any one of Mystara's numerous worm creatures. If you want to change the Night Hag into a Crone of Chaos, that's fine, but hags do exist in Mystara, so that's up to you. Other than that, this adventure can slot into Mystara without changes. My one suggestion is grab the Fey section of Mystara's monster stats from the vaults and throw in some of the more obscure Fey creatures just for a cameo. Pukas, Shi, Sao, maybe some Wood Imps if you need some bad guys. They're not going to play a major part in the plot, but you gotta throw the characters a bone once in a while. With the next adventure, we are heading straight up with Candlekeep Deconstruction, as this is obviously going to be set in Serene. It's a mad gnome inventor trying to improve the architecture of the Great Library by adding vertical takeoff rockets. Instead of an earthquake rocking the city, it's a sudden lurch like the city hits turbulence. The party gets hired to find the source of the disruption, which leads to a wing of Serene's vast library. Remember, the chief librarian in Serene is a skull druge, which is kind of like a demi-lich, but smarter and less overpowered. And the druge is not happy with the party's presence. The rest of the adventure is almost comical, so have the druge follow the party. He can't hurt them, that's actually part of his backstory where he's geassed into not hurting people unless they don't return books. But he can mock every mistake they make, and constantly make literary references that the party won't get, letting him mock them even more. It's a comical adventure. The bad guys are a group of gnomes with a combined wisdom score, probably in single digits. So let the party have fun. On to Zikrin Zephyrim is another adventure that slots into Mystara almost without change. You've got to trap Genie, and to find him, you've got to find the wizard and stab him a lot. Again, another stock dungeon crawl. If you want to change the bronze dragon, pick out any other type of dragon. Metallics other than gold in Mystara are quite rare, but they're not extinct thanks to 2nd edition. The color of the dragon isn't important to the actual adventure. The villain is a Genasi wizard, which can be made any other race no problem, but the fact it's extra planar might let you introduce the Knights of Ebony, even though they don't normally deal with interplanar issues. The curious tale of Wisteria Vale is begging to be placed in Glantry, because this messed up tale is something that needs to introduce some of that nation's more fantastical enchantments. Specifically, we are dealing with the secret crafts of Glantry, in this case, high-level dream mastery. A powerful Glantrian wizard, possibly a prince, needs the party to go into a realm that they have created and rescue a friend that they've trapped there because of a powerful curse. It doesn't matter if the party refuses or not, they're going to discover this adventure was not a request. The constructed villagers are part of the dream magic rather than the actual constructs. This doesn't change the rules for them at all, just the creation. One bit of annoyance here is the lack of alignments in the character blocks, as it's important to the story. The fact that the target's alignment is mentioned in the text of the adventure proves that it's needed, or else they wouldn't have brought it up. Alignment, if nothing else, gives the Dungeon Master a guideline on how to run the monster in just 2 letters. The Book of Inner Alchemy is a pretty basic stock adventure with a wushu feel and a plot that borrows from the Doctor Strange movie. A bit too much for my taste. There's only one real place to set this in Mystara, and that's Ochalia, because the story has heavy Chinese influence. The adventure itself is beyond simple. Track down the thieves and kill them all. It's the stockiest of stock adventures, and it reads like it, with some eye-rolling boxed text that you're going to want to improvise if you don't want your players pelting you with dice. When you've got an adventure called The Canopic Being, and it's featuring a mummy lord, you know you're heading to Yalarum. For extra points, move it to the Nithian province, or possibly even Thothia on the Isle of Dawn. You know, Egyptian places. You can even run it in the Hollow World nation of Nithia, but that might cause some issues because of the heavy restrictions on magic inherent to that region. The adventure itself is a straight dungeon crawl with an ancient building that needs no conversion, as all the monsters are native or constructs created specifically for this adventure. The next adventure is the Scrivener's Tale, and this is a fairy slap fight from the very start. This one also requires a lot of conversion because it is very much set in the Forgotten Realms. There's an exiled Unseelie about to finish her punishment, and another Unseelie doesn't want to see that happen. The problem with this adventure is that the Forgotten Realms Fae and the Mystara Fae are radically different creatures. The party is racing to get to the final destination where they can destroy the MacGuffin tied to the exile Fae, who has also cursed them to ensure their cooperation. The setting doesn't really matter as long as you have a large city nearby. Replace the Fomorians with Bargda, and the Death Slot with either Malfera or Mugina, as the other high-level Fae is pulling out all the stops. You get the book to the end, the high-powered Unseelie pops out, and then you fight to the death. The end. Alcazar's Appendix has the party traveling to a blasted wasteland to help bring us all to rest. For this adventure, we're going to a place we've never been before. The Great Northern Wildlands, northwest of Glantry. What's there? Nothing, besides the adventure. It's never been written about in any source material, and it only ever appears on maps. Well, now it's got a roaming nomad culture and a half-buried golem. Why are the PCs there? You're the DM, not me. That's your job to figure out. Quick substitutions, Rakshasas become Randaras, and the Schwingas gain the spirit tag. The big bad of the adventure is a Dracolich, which is possible in Mystara, but might I suggest a Drolem instead? You know, the Frankenstein dragon, because that's so much cooler. Finally, we get to Xanthoria, and it's a 16th level dungeon crawl. I know what you're screaming at your computer right now. Shouldn't an adventure that high be more than just go into the dungeon and kill everything between room 1 and room 11? Why yes, my listeners, it should. 5th edition's common complaint that high-level adventures play exactly as low-level adventures, only with monsters with more hit points, is a very valid criticism. As far as adventures go, since it's just a dungeon crawl, you can place it anywhere. Ignore the ties to the demon lords and just kill everything from start to finish. Most of the monsters like Vrox are just close approximations to the unique fungal monsters, so you don't have to worry about replacing them. If you want to throw in a Ducino or a Fungoid for flavor, knock yourself out. Then you figure out how to kill the bad guy and you win the adventure. Yay. That's all of Candlekeep's Mysteries. It's got some great adventures, and it's actually got some bland ones. The good outweigh the bad by a large margin. Even the ones I called bad are more uninspired or derivative than unplayable. Most of them fit into Mystara without much effort. Mostly monster swaps and setting changes. You're not going to play them as a campaign like Dragon of Icespire Peak. Just play the good ones and ignore the dull ones. I love the first adventure putting the stat blocks next to the encounter. So more of that, please, people. The lack of alignments was annoying since they were largely mentioned in the text anyways. And replacing the 2 letters for alignment with 10 lines of motivations for the major NPCs wasted a lot of space. It's not a mind-blowing book, but it is a useful book for Dungeon Masters. 'Twas Brillig and the Slithy toads did gyre and gimble in the wave. All mimsy were the Boragos, and the Momras outgrabe. Truer words have never been spoken. It's time to turn the wild beyond the Witchlight into a right and proper Mystara adventure. Like my other conversions, this is not a true review, though I will provide my thoughts on the module as a whole. The point is, as always, to remove monsters that you wouldn't fit in Mystara normally, and replace them with monsters that are a better fit. This is made a bit trickier because most of the module is set in the Feywild, which of course is the inferior cousin of the Good Kingdom. But enough explanation. Time for a frabjous day. I'm Mr. Welch, and let's get galumphing. To set the tone, this module starts at level 1, because all 5th edition modules start at level 1. It goes up to about level 8 or so. You're not going to get to epic level on this one. It's filled with Easter eggs and member berries. That's actually one of the flaws that I will explain later. I don't mind a shout out, but try and get the nostalgia right. It's a bit silly in places. Reminds me a lot of Castle Caldwell and Beyond as far as the target audience. This module is for the wee ones. More experienced players might find it a bit sappy, especially with some of the early hand-holding. Kids are going to have a lot more fun with this module than older players. That's not a bad thing, but you have to play to the target audience, so just a suggestion. Please note this video is for Dungeon Masters. I'm not going to be hiding any spoilers. If you're looking for the monsters that I suggest you use for replacements, they can be found at the Vaults of Pandios, already converted, though you may want to tweak them a little bit further. If you can find a copy of the module Queen's Harvest, this conversion does reference that module heavily. There's a PDF of it for $5 at the Guild. It's not important to the final plot, but it will explain a lot of what I'm going to talk about. Enough with the build-up. It's time to jump in. But just remember, acting before knowing takes you right off the cliff. The book gives you 2 hooks to get started. Either the carnival stole something from the players at a young age, or someone is hiring you to find out where his patron is. You can go with either one, though for the sake of continuity, change the Warlock's quest to finding one of the MacGuffins. Or even better, Strongheart the Paladin Squire wants you to find him because he's been missing for a while. You might recognize Strongheart from the module quest for the Heartstone, or the Toyline. He's the future king of Irindi, so he does actually have ties to Mystara. And that's actual canon, it's not a conversion. He gets barely a cameo in this book, but it is a hook for an established character that you're going to run into. You get the characters to the carnival. They pay to get in, and then they get some toy fairy wings to walk around with. There's a lot of games and a few mysteries to solve, but there's no real danger. Veteran players are going to get bored with this part of the game real quick, because there's nothing but just random skill checks. Though they might try to stick around and win some of the minor magical prizes. There's a thieving kinku you have to thwart, like there's any other kind of kinku in these adventures. A better substitute for the kinku in Mystara is a tabby, since they also have a larcenous bent, plus they cast spells, which makes them even trickier to find. The 2 owners of the carnival need a little tweaking, as Shadukar are not something you find in Mystara, especially since outsiders have a bad habit of standing out like Justin Bieber at a Cannibal Corpse concert. I have 3 options. First up is making them actual Shadow Elves, but that one's problematic as Shadow Elves are the secret race, plus everybody's just going to assume they're from Minrathad. Second, and the safest, is to make them she. It's a carnival from the Good Kingdom, so that makes perfect sense. Third option is a little bit harder to roleplay, but it brings out the gonzo nature of the setting, and it makes them completely off the wall. Mr. Witch becomes a free-willed Magan. For kicks, making him a Galvan Magan, so he occasionally arcs electricity. Nothing harmful, but it just adds color. Mr. Bright becomes a Wooddrake, the shape-shifting, anarchy-loving fey creatures that can turn into an elf, a halfling, or a dragon-like creature. For kicks, you can have him assume all 3 forms to meet and watch the party, and they won't realize that they're all the same person. You keep the personalities the same, but this gives you humanoid NPCs that are more than a little bit off, but no one at the carnival considers them odd at all. The first part of the adventure is there to give your players a little background into the carnival, as well as to level them up to the point where the adventure actually starts, which is another annoying aspect of 5e. There is little danger in the first part. It's all exposition, and that might thrill newer players, but a veteran player will get the info, any treasure they can earn, and then bugger off to the next level. There's a subplot that if the carnival ever meets its darker twin that's currently farting around in the domains of dread, the owners have to swap carnivals. But that subplot's never brought up again. The game strongly suggests milestone leveling up, but it's your game, your rules. Anyways, on to the actual part of the adventure. The base goal of the adventure is that the Fey realm of Prismere has been taken over by 3 hags and has been divided between them. You have to go to each of the 3 regions, called Hither, Thither, and Yon, defeat the hags, and then go free the Fairy Queen. To do this, you need to find the various MacGuffins that will free her from her fate. It's a scavenger hunt. Again, the module reads like it's for younger players. Run it for your kids and everybody will have a good time. Run it for older players and they will more than likely spot all the tropes and exploit them. Noticing recycled plots, puzzles, and stories isn't metagaming. It means the authors might want to try and branch out a bit. Especially with an adventure that has a ton of nostalgia like this one, even if it seems out of place. I couldn't tell you how many times I had to bite my tongue listening to a DM recite a puzzle I've already heard dozens of times, because I wanted him to feel like he's trying. Granted, the last time I came up with an original puzzle, it took the players about a minute to figure out the answer was Euterbium. My point being, don't make puzzles about the atomic weight of the periodic table of elements when you've got a pair of chemical engineers sitting at the table. First up is Hither, and it's a swampy morass. There's a lot of rabbit folk around, called the Harengon, and it's up to you to decide whether your game has them, or if there's already been enough furry types to satisfy you. Or you could be one of the DMs who has discovered that these things have a lot of rules issues and will use something else. I haven't run them through Theory Hammer yet, but I've seen enough videos that mention they have a few exploits. If you want to replace them, switch them out with various she. This is their home turf, after all. There's a few set encounters in Hither. One minor switch for the game is to replace the animated armor that pops in frequently in the adventure with either animated statues, or for a real kick, a silver warrior. You know, the Fey created constructs. Though the natural invisibility might be too much for low-level parties, it's still very much a fairy thing to have to fight an invisible knight. The party will soon reach Sir Talavar, which is similar in nature to Sir Didymus in Labyrinth. He's an emissary of the Fey Court, specifically Titania. A side note regarding Titania, this is the Good Kingdom. There should be one impossible thing out of almost every encounter, even if it's just in the background. If the players arrive in Hither, let them see Titania's castle in the distance. Every room, hallway, and staircase flies around separately like a tornado of different parts. When somebody wants to walk from one room to another, the 2 rooms automatically connect to each other, then fly apart as soon as you cross over. It can't be reached in this adventure, but it was a unique idea from a game session that always stuck with me. You always want to have a huge sense of wonder if you're any place in the Good Kingdom. But again, your game, your rules. The party's going to meet Jingle Jangle the Goblin. I suggest replacing all the prime creatures they meet with Fey equivalents. This is where the Fey creatures are going to shine, and you need to make them appear as often as possible. A goblin stuck in the Good Kingdom is okay, but making her a brownie reminds you where you are. You will face a lot of bullywugs, which happen to be in formal dress, reminiscent of Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. While bullywugs aren't typically a Mystaran creature, there's not an equivalent that fits in with this scenario, as the Toad aspect is important to the story. Maybe Fire Newts. But you can stick with the bullywugs. The fight with the first hag is pretty run-of-the-mill, so there's no conversions necessary. Moving on to Thither, this appears as a decaying old forest. Again, replace prime creatures with Fey equivalents where available. This is the time where you want to show off Mystara's impressive collection of Fey creatures. You can do this with no explanation whatsoever. Have a Gakarak walk by without saying a word. If you want to scare the players or give them a shock, send the coach and bower hurtling down a path, with a headless coachman whipping the black horses as he rushes to some unknown destination. Move out of the way or take damage. That's the encounter. Just a random death coach who can't slow down or stop because of its mission. It's never mentioned again and it's gone as fast as it appears. Keep your players on edge. When you get to the Hag's Lair, there's a box of dragon wormlings that you can fill with pocket dragons instead, as they're a lot more fun, plus they aren't going to get any bigger and like to be adopted as pets. This is where the players get their first good look at the secret villain of the adventure, so I might as well spoil this now. It's Tasha from Greyhawk, Igwilf. Only instead of being the legendary mother of demons and one of the most iconic villains in all of D&D, here she's been changed to an archfey and is no longer evil. That's boring. Plus, I'm not going to take a character from Greyhawk when there's a far better Mystara character available. So replacing Tasha for this adventure, as the ultimate surprise reveal, is Ilyana Penhaligon, the bandit queen from Queen's Harvest. She was never a nice person, but she grew in power when she discovered a magical intelligent sword that gave her all sorts of powers. Of course, the sword is of Fey origin, and Ilyana begins to fall under the sway of the unseelie Archfey. Perhaps the Archfey is polymorphed as part of a punishment, and the sword is her new form. Stealing from the Vaults of Pandios, the evil Archfey is Anhaladin, and she was using Ilyana as her meat puppet, and nobody knows that. If you have characters from Karamikos, they can recognize her as Ilyana, but the lore behind who she really is has to be revealed through the course of play. So that's the final boss now, a possessed Ilyana Penhaligon. And that, my friends, is how you do a callback. You're going to find Elkhorn the Dwarf in this part of the module. The dwarf from the toy line. That dwarf. The one that appeared in Quest for the Heartstone. He's the first of 10 characters from the toy line to appear in the book, and to be honest, I have no idea why he's here, or why any of them are here. It's meant to stir nostalgia, but they're barely in the adventure. Unlike Heartstone, he's an NPC rather than a playable character. He's much more powerful than the PCs at this point, and he has no connection to the players. He doesn't have a connection to the old players either. I realize that they're force-feeding the old players member berries by including these guys, but there's not a lot of nostalgia for the toy line's backbenchers. When it came to the toy line, we remembered Strongheart, Warduke, and maybe some of the wizards. But good luck remembering anybody's name outside of Strongheart, because he was the headliner, and Warduke, because he was in the cartoon, as possibly the most competent villain in Saturday morning cartoon history. Plus, we loved his bitchin' winged helm, because it went along with his Camaro. But then they race-flip Molliver and give her plural pronouns, which makes no sense because the purpose of nostalgia is to show us the part of our past that we missed. This feels more like pandering. On a side note, I was disappointed they didn't include Melf the Elf. Yeah, the same guy that gave us Melf's acid arrows. Regardless of my thoughts about the differences between nostalgia and pandering, this guy's backstory was actually interesting. That wasn't originally his name, but the filler text for the toys were just the race, prefaced by either M or F to determine their sex. So Melf literally meant male elf, and they went to print with that mistake. Granted, looking back at the toys, you will realize that sometimes you've got the nostalgia goggles on too tight. Because the first thing you notice about the toys is they've got lifeless eyes. Black eyes, like a doll's eyes. And when that toy comes at you, it doesn't seem to be living, till he bites you. Then those black eyes roll over to white and... Wait, hold on. Where was I? Oh yeah, thither. Turns out there's not much more to this section outside of fighting the hag. Though there is an ad for Domains of Delight, which gives you the rules for the giant book-reading spider, which you have to buy for $8. It's for charity, so if there's any players listening, just start stabbing the spider immediately when you see it reading to the small furry animals. If you're good aligned, then the DM has to go out and buy the DLC, which benefits the charity. If you're evil aligned, then you get to slaughter a friendly spider right in front of all those cute furry little animals. It's a win-win situation no matter what. Yon is a mountainous region with defined paths. It's a bit of a railroad, but not enough to make the players feel herded. When there's only one path, there's only one direction. There's not much to do in Yon except for a few minor encounters until you get to Hag's Lair, which is a theater with lots of various NPCs to interact with. The point of the theater is it's been collecting people from across the multiverse. There's characters from every major old setting except Dark Sun and Birthright, and I might have just missed those. For some of the NPCs, the party is going to be experiencing certain humanoids for the very first time, like a tiefling. Play up her demonic appearance, the stench of evil, and the sinister countenance, and then remind them that she seems like a nice person. There's a lot of goblins you can replace with evil fae like imps. Goblins aren't a danger at all to the party at this level, so the change is mostly to focus on the fae of the setting. Again, you don't have to change anything about the boss battle at the end. But then you move on to the final act, the showdown with Ilyana, or more like the fae posing as Ilyana. There's not a lot of combat in this area. Most of the monsters are actually far below the character's level at this point. There's a few riddles and such. Most of the riddles in this module are pretty easy, so replace them if you need to. They might be tricky for younger players, but older players will recognize them from previous games often enough. Change the Slod you encounter into a nightmare creature, and the Lamia sent by Grazit can be replaced by evil Fae creatures sent by a rival Archfey who are investigating reports that Anhaladin has somehow gotten out of the Good Kingdom and is raising havoc in the Prime. You will encounter both Strongheart and Warduke and some of the other toy line NPCs late in this adventure, though by the time you get to them, the adventure's almost over. Finally, you get to Ilyana, get the chance to get the sword away from her, destroy the cauldron with the MacGuffin, game over. Granted, she's not a hag like Igwil, so you can make the cauldron whatever you'd like. Players smash the cauldron, win the game, yay, time to go take your players to Mr. Gaddy's for pizza. Okay, that was a bit harsh. It's not a bad module despite my criticisms. Modules like this have their place. If it gets young people interested in an old hobby, so much the better. I wish the module had a bit more wonder in it, and definitely more Fae. The Easter eggs felt more like pandering after all. They were definitely targeting the grognards like me. A new player is not going to laugh at Thaco the clown after all, they won't get the reference. And they definitely will not understand who the Toyline characters are supposed to be. Again, it's way before their time. The module seems to fluctuate between Alice in Wonderland and fairy tales. And I think that's largely due to the fact that there's different writers writing each chapter. But definitely ramp up the sense of wonder for the younger players, and you will be able to make them smile. And bonus points if you can make them smile while the Blink Dogs tear apart the Displacer Beast Cub. But until next time, remember, a little nonsense now and then is treasured by the wisest men. Welcome to Mystara, where we are taking the latest D&D offering and converting it from its intended settings to the far better and much more fun Mystara. This time it's the anthology Journeys Through the Radiant Citadel, where the focus is on settings based on non-European cultures. Fortunately for us, Mystara is filled with countries that are allegories for real-world cultures across the globe, because that's one of the reasons why we rock. So where are we going? Is my opinion of anthologies going to change? Time to put on your Surinamese national hockey team jersey. I'm Mr. Welch, and go Lesser Kiskadis! Seriously, those birds rock. They aren't all pretentious like Greater Kiskadis. So that's why Suriname picked it as their national animal. Sure, they aren't known for their hockey, granted, but you gotta take your D&D players where you can get them, even if the snacks every week are just tapas and stroopwafel. But you can't complain because they show up and play like clockwork. But on with the conversion. Radiant Citadel is 224 pages. The exact page count as the far superior and better written Mystara Player's Guide, but you already knew that. The premise is there's a floating city in the ethereal plane where all these different cultures arrived because life was terrible where they came from, and they decided to settle down. Everyone lives in harmony and there's no strife, crime, poverty, or apparent grasp of economics. It's meant to be a utopia, but the premise falls apart quickly if you even think about it halfway. They pay their taxes through high tariffs and don't have smugglers? Seriously? You tax the snot out of people trying to bring in products, and nobody tries to sneak past the guards to sell their goods at a much lower rate, guaranteeing they will make far more money than the merchants that have to raise their prices to counterbalance the taxes? Despite the book mentioning several of these cultures fleeing from very bad people, they don't seem to have an armed guard. People have compared Radiant Citadel to Planescape, but Sigil? This place ain't. There's not even 10 pages about the Radiant Citadel, which is far too short to give more than just a cursory explanation. It's meant to be a utopia where everybody heals quickly and death is temporary because you don't need to spend money for resurrection components. Utopias are boring. There's your first problem. This is meant to be a hub world, but it reinforces 5th edition's reputation for being pillow-fisted with the players. No threat, no thrill. Remember that when you're building adventures. Some technical points before we dig into the conversion. The writers' names are not attached to what they wrote anywhere that I could find in the book. I'm looking at these adventures blind, because I'm not going to go online to figure out who wrote what. That should have been in the book. They could have done that on the table of contents, on the adventures themselves, or even having an author's page where you get a snippet of each one's experience in previous works. But we get none of that. I don't know why there's no byline, but it is noticeable. If I tried to pull that stunt in my magazine, I would get skinned. For all I know, every adventure here was written by Aaron A. Aronson from Sanford, Gloucestershire, using 13 different pen names. I know art is objective, but the alternate cover art is the ugliest D&D cover art I have ever seen, and I've got all the 2nd edition Mystara stuff. It looks like something you would find at a Scholastic book fair written for a 4th grader. The interior art is pretty stock D&D, but this is where I wish they would have veered from formula. You're trying to showcase all these different cultures, then give me images of the adventures in the traditional style of those cultures. Hire artists from those nations. A picture is worth 1,000 words. And if you're showcasing writers of different cultures, pair them up with matching artists. Increase my immersion in your setting. This is a module conversion, so it is for DMs. There's nothing but spoilers ahead. The first adventure is Salted Legacy, and it's less of an adventure and more of a diversion. It's lighthearted, with the savage and murderous kobolds drawn up like cartoon characters. You're trying to solve a disagreement between rival market stall vendors. There's supposed to be gnomes and kobolds, and there is a Chinese vibe hinted at, but this is pretty generic. If you want to put it anywhere, Minorthrad's your best choice. There's a festival going on. There's actually a festival going on in the first several adventures, which is a rather odd editing choice to have at least a quarter of the adventures having similar backgrounds. The gnomes and kobolds become any races common to Mystara. You can turn the invisible fey creatures into, well, just about anything invisible, because their role in the adventure is pretty tiny. Just watch out for she players, because they can see the invisible fey naturally. There's a bunch of mini games, but no combat outside of a canned fight against some uppity giant crawdads. This is the kind of side quest you go through with the players that didn't volunteer to drive to HEB to get more Dr. B, and you have an hour to kill until the guy that's actually going to get you sodas comes back. The second level finds you in Written in Blood, which is based on the southern U.S., with the art depicting people apparently from New Orleans or similar. So we need to find a like area in Mystara, with a dark-skinned population and a Gulf Coast geography. So we got to head west, past Sin and closer to the Savage Baronies. But not too close because of the Red Curse and all. We haven't given Yavdalum much love in our past conversions, which does match the criteria. Specifically the city of Ngomo, which is far from the capital, so players don't have to run for the diviners. The problem here is the farmers are going crazy and attacking people. You can change one of the NPCs at the start to be a low-level diviner to keep with the Yav's theme. Of course, she's going to divine that the player characters are the ones needing to stop all of this. Remember to change a few NPCs to elves and give a few others elven features to reflect Yavdalum's interbreeding. There aren't any half-elves, because half-elves are a few hundred miles away, but elven features rung strong even generations later here. The bad guys are crawling claws, and the big boss is a bunch of crawling claws, merged into a bigger crawling claw. You're close enough to the Red Coast that maybe this thing was one of the numerous abominations found in that cursed region and just stowed away on a ship. Players stab it a lot, go up to level 3, and we turn the page. The Fiend of Hollow Mine is equal parts dungeon crawl and tavern crawl, as it's supposed to be Mexico during Day of the Dead. I know a few other countries celebrate it, but this is mostly based in Mexico. There are many Spanish names, and fortunately, there are a lot of Spanish-speaking allegories in Mystara. My Spanish is pretty limited, but as a Texan, I know enough for emergencies. So if the situation ever arises, I at least know how to say, "Mi culpa? Contrataste la prostituta con un problema cardíaco." So time to find the place closest to Mexico, the desert parts of Mexico. Belcadiz is right out because that's not desert, that's mountains. So we're headed to the Savage Coast. Grab some Cinebril because we're headed to Torreon. It's got a history of mercenaries, it's dirt poor, it's mostly desert, and they've got a reason to celebrate the dead. If you want to hand wave it, say the Red Curse is not in this particular part of Torreon, which would be the fortress city of Casanegra by the Terra Vermitha Desert. Say the players haven't been there for 2 weeks and the curse hasn't taken effect, or just come up with a legacy and affliction for all of them and give them some Cinebril. Casanegra is being affected by a curse. Well, not one of the usual curses, a fourth and brand new curse, because curses love the Savage Coast. For starters, everybody you will meet is a good guy. That's a reoccurring theme. There's very few evil humans in these adventures. Even the humanoids are all good. Of course, this is Mystara, so that last part is a lie, and we'll just change that as we go. The party is hired to find the source of the curse, which is demonic in nature, but rather than just some bird demon, we've got someone far better. Atzantiotl, everybody's favorite patron of corruption. Plus, the Immortal of Corruption sounds a lot better as a villain than the Demon Lord of Birds. There's an evil tiefling, like there's any other kind, but he gets changed to a regular human and you'll never notice the difference. There's nothing else to convert in the module, as all the rest of the monsters are standard baddies found everywhere, and the boss monster is exclusive to this adventure, so it's time for the next level. Wages of Vice is another festival and a murder mystery. This one is pretty short. As the general theme is wealth and greed, let's go off the map and head to the proposed nation from Skothar, Mototor. The allegory for Mali, when it was rich beyond measure. Hammer that point home. The guards are wearing mithril plate mail. Coins are worthless because the mines produce so much wealth. The local currencies are trade bars and paper money backed by jewels. Everyone is sporting excessive amounts of jewelry. It's almost impossible to be poor here. The streets are literally paved with gold. And the party arrives as part of a trade caravan, or maybe Serene brings them here for the festival. Remember, the nation's wealth is impossible to fathom, but theft gets you executed. The mines provide. Be happy with what you've got. This particular festival is a wine festival. And wouldn't you know it, the party finds a corpse and gets blamed for it. It's not for long. It's pretty easy to clear their names. The body was poisoned with a rare and expensive poison. There's no raising the victim from the dead, even in a nation as wealthy as Mototor. Without giving up too much of the plot, the killers are using spirits as an act of revenge. Use the rules for the various spirits from the spirit world, and it's super easy to convert this one. This isn't a bad little adventure for its length. It's short, concise, and it doesn't waste space on exposition. Sins of Our Elders is obviously based in Korea, and it's also got a lot of spirits. Mystara doesn't have a Korean allegory on the surface, but it does above the surface. We're going to Miyashima, to a place only mentioned in passing. We'll put Yaonido in the smaller confederation of nations facing off against the Empire of Miyashima. It's a perfect fit. All we have to do is turn everyone in this module into Warakasta, and done. Now let's take a look at the adventure. I suggest having all the commoners become domestic Rakasta and replace the Dragonborn with greater Rakasta, so you got Korean tigers leading the people. The rest of the module features spirits and regular monsters like gargoyles. Just remember, everybody's a Rakasta. Gold for Fools and Princes is our next adventure, and it fits best in Yalaran. If you want to stick it with the darker skinned population like in the original adventure, go with Nithya. You'll have to kick the Empress out because this is an emirate, not an empire. Sticking with Nithya, the Vizier has set up a new vouchery to handle the area's mineral rights. The princes are now rival Yalari nobles who want that vouchery and will play dirty to get it. At least the bad guy will. The evil cleric is now a bitter follower of Al-Khalim, who is more than willing to help the villain for increased status and wealth. Instead of becoming emperor, the winner of this conflict succeeds Anaya and gets to be in charge of mining all the gold. The Orm Vorox is essential to the plot because of its gold diet, so keep them around. Trail of Destruction has an Aztec vibe to it, but it's not a good fit for Tigerlands because those guys don't exactly play well with others. If you want everybody to be a native of Kuan Mitzli, be my guest, but otherwise we're going to need to approximate. And there's only one place where we're going to even get close to Mesoamerica. We're going to the Hollow World to hang out with the Oltecs. You're going to have to make some changes. Remember, teleportation magic doesn't work. You'll need a primary stat of 17 just to cast spells there, and it's all Bronze Age. Very few nations in that area know how to work iron, and the Oltecs aren't one of them. If you have to, you can make the characters part of the Lighthouse expedition to get around the pesky spell of preservation. All demi-humans are now humans. The Hollow World does not mix its races, except the Merry Pirates. There's a tiefling entertainer that screams DMPC that wants to tag along, but you can ignore him. The monsters in this adventure are normal Mystara monsters, with a unique big bad, so there's not much to change here. The Mists of Manavarsha deal with a tragedy on the last day of, wait for it, another festival. This is obviously based in India, and we just so happen to have Sind waiting there to get used. This adventure requires an area near a wetland marsh or swamp, and Sind just happens to have several places right next to Nimkim Yalanka, a massive swamp hundreds of miles across. So let's put this adventure right in the town of Nakashwar. You're going to run across some creatures called the Riverine, which are nature spirits, and river spirits in particular, so just attach the spirit tag for spell purposes, and there you go. Instead of a forest, you head deep into the Nimkin Yalaka, where the adventure largely plays out as written. And unlike other adventures so far, at least this one pays well. These adventures are pretty sparse on goodies, especially magic items. Between Tangled Roots is going to thrill my family because this is based on Filipino lore. Bet you didn't know I came from a traditional Welsh Filipino family. Aunt Vicky married into the clan, and now we have a traditional Filipino Thanksgiving, because her spring rolls blow away any turkey you might ever cook. The problem is we don't have a nation based specifically on the Philippines, but we've got the perfect place to put one. Time to head to the Thanagoeth Archipelago. The party is heading down on a merchant ship to one of the 1,000 islands here, and one of them happens to be Dayalongan. These are a collection of islands connected by sky bridges, essentially floating roads. Dragons built them in the book, but to make them Mystaran, just make them Nithian. Because what ancient mysterious thing isn't Nithian? When the Nithians went away, so did knowledge of who built the bridges, so they just assumed that the dragons did it. Then you're off to fight the Baka Noa, the sea dragons, or if you want to keep it Mystaran, just use the regular sea dragon stat. Then the party gets the treasure and finds one of my most hated D&D tropes, finding the monster-killing specific weapon in the treasure hoard of the monster it would kill. TSR did that, BioWare did that, and now WotC is doing that. Stop it. Shadow of the Sun has a Persian vibe, which normally puts it in Hul. Hul, like the Tiger Clan, doesn't play well with others, and their religious dictatorship doesn't mesh well with this adventure. So we have to go near Hul, where we encounter another festival, which is 6 adventures out of 10 so far? I don't know if it was an editorial decision or if about half the writers decided they want to set their adventure in a festival. It just seems like a weird commonality for an anthology. Or it could have been a subtle cry for a vacation. But let's find a place for the Brilliant Night Festival. We need a location with a desert near Hul. How about Budavik? It's a free village caught between Hul and the city-state of Zvornik. Nothing official about it, so it fits in perfectly. The festival is going great until the purple worms show up and make a mess of things. Then an actual angel appears, which will be a problem, because angels aren't allowed in Mystara without permission, and this guy certainly does not have permission. Since he summons even more angels, that's definitely not going to get past the Council of Intrusion. So we gotta find an equivalent fast. As this guy's only job is to give directions and get the actual plot started, a dragon could work. But grabbing from the Savage Coast Monsters Companion, you've got the only greater Shidu in Mystara making his appearance. He's more than capable of delivering his lines and then just flying away. The plot has two religious groups at each other's throats, but these are more elemental than divine types. There is a chance that the party will get lawful neutral manticores as mounts, and if you find that a bit silly, there's a whole host of actual flying mounts in Mystara available. Moving on to Night Sea's Succor, we have to find a new home for the relocated people who have escaped slavery trying to establish a new nation. Mystara has no shortage of slavers, but few can ravage an entire nation. But wait, Scothar has the Slaver's Coast, based on the Barbary pirates. So these are descendants of slaves from multiple nations of eastern Scothar, and they have formed their own island nation off of one of the numerous islands of South Scothar. In this adventure, you must find the cause of a bunch of undead plaguing the region. There's a race of seagoing creatures that live among the humans. You can easily make them sea elves for a Mystaran creature. The big bad is an aboleth, which is a race that gets stepped on in Mystara by the Knights of Ebony for good measure. So we need a replacement. For a real challenge, replace it with a night dragon. That'll throw your players for a loop. Now we headed to Buried Dynasty for Mystara's first and only mention in this book. Buried Dynasty is China. Every adventure in this book gives you recommendations on where to put it in various settings. The Radiant Citadel always gives you a suggestion, and you always get a recommendation for Forgotten Realms, because of course you have to include Faerun in everything. But in Mystara, you get told to place it west of Darrakan, so just past India and that weird Knoll elf underground country. Then past Central Africa and the nation of elf-blooded diviners just past that. Then skip past the collection of well-defined city-states where you have to head into the savage baronies. Then you just head past Spain, Portugal, Texas, second Spain, Argentina, Tres España, Brazil, and finally Spain number 4. Then make your way through the Saxons, the Gauls, the French dogs, the English cats, the shape-changing giant spiders, the Australian aboriginal lizardmen, flying raccoon mitten with a grudge, and then Samaria. And we've run out of room. Or we could just set this in Ochalia where they've already got a China allegory. You know, there's a meticulous Scottish cartographer who maps all this stuff. He even puts it up for free. Just saying, if you ever want to put something in Mystara again and you're looking for a spot, I know a guy. So, since Ochalia is a province of Thyatis and not its own empire, we've got to rewrite some stuff. Now it's the provincial governor. Ochalia is left to rule itself, but if the governor dies, Thin-Call gets to appoint a new one. Well, the current governor is getting old and needs a stronger push of longevity. His secretary is trying to hold his government together, but she's also trying to set herself up as a replacement. Ochalia might have strict rules about women's roles in government, but Thin-Call doesn't care. She's still loyal to the current governor, but she's also updating her resume just in case. Despite this adventure focusing on Chinese lore and mythology, all the monsters are straight out of the Dungeon Master's Guide. That's just a bit disappointing. Lastly, we get to the Orchids of the Invisible Mountains. This one is in Central America, so we're headed back to the Savage Coast. For this, we are headed to Estado de Guadalante. Well, more off to the side so we can get to the forest to match the terrain. Here reality is coming apart as the Good Kingdom and the Demiplane of Nightmares are struggling to break through. We're using the Demiplane of Nightmares instead of the Far Realms because that region is just as horrific and it's already well established with Mystara. All the new monsters introduced get the Nightmare tag for creature type. Again, assign legacies and afflictions as necessary, and remember, everybody's red. You've got to replace the Thri-Kreen as we're not cribbing monsters from Athos, and since we're in the Savage Coast, let's replace them with something from there. How about a Tortle riding a Niktu, which is a Tortle Centaur-like creature? You've got more Aboleths there, but you can replace those with Wormlings and their entourage for a really unique encounter. The more Thri-Kreen you encounter later, just change them into the Mithrin folk to keep with the Savage Coast monsters theme. After that, everything you're going to face is all nightmare creatures. That's all the adventures. Like all anthologies, they vary wildly in quality. If I had to pick my top 3, I'd start with Wages of Vice. It's very hard to do a D&D mystery, but this one got it right. It's short and well written. It avoids adding too many red herrings that serve no other purpose other than to mislead the party down too many dead ends, just for the sake of padding. Then you got Trail of Destruction. While it has monsters, it has a strong man versus nature vibe that you don't get from many adventures. It was refreshing to see somebody try this again, though I recommend losing the guy that decides he's going to join your party no matter what. Nobody likes escort missions, especially if they're escorting a bard. The Fiend of Hollowmine is pretty linear, but it does have an interesting twist at the end. The Day of the Dead tie-in is a bit cliche. Every holiday in Mexico seems to be Dia de Muertos. Why not try Dia de Reyes to be different from every other representation of Mexican holidays in pop culture? For adventures I had a problem with, let's start with the opening adventure, Salted Legacy. This reads like Dungeon Magazine filler. The plot is minimal, there's almost no real chance of failure, and success is almost given to the players. That's boring for me. Buried Dynasty has a sudden but inevitable betrayal that most experienced players will see coming from a mile away. The tag-along spy chick doesn't expect to be betrayed, despite the fact it's her job to figure out what people's motives are. To compound the issue, the advisor at the beginning does make it clear that success is not guaranteed and what you're looking for might not even exist. So why betray the party? Last on the list of adventures that needed to be better was Between Tangled Roots. It's an adventure based on the Philippines that only gives us one new monster? Come on, man! This is the place that comes up with monsters faster than Games Workshop creates overpriced rule books. Where's the Aswang? The Mankokulam? The Mananangal? You gotta represent! If you want to expand on the setting, just write down the names of all the monsters you can think of, sort them out alphabetically, cut it off at a good round number, say 350, get the art, make some rules, give the backgrounds for all the monsters, and when you're finally done with that list of 350, then you can move on to the monsters that start with the letter B. I do wish this book had more room for expanded adventures. They don't even need to drop any. This is a short book. It's only 224 pages. It's 32 pages shorter than Witchlight. If I'm playing in a setting, I want it to be immersive, not a 3-page gazetteer and an 8-page adventure. Not like the price changes. You're still looking at $50 for 30 additional pages. There's not enough background on most of these regions to tell me anything outside of what I can infer. The Philippines adventure is 10 pages. The Philippines gazetteer is 2. If I need a writer to explain a new setting to me, at least give him enough pages to make it interesting. 8 pages minimum to write about the new setting. I don't care if they will have to expand on it in future products. In that case, give me the expanded background first so I can get interested in the adventure. Expanding the book could have given us a few more pages for each setting. Maybe drop 2 or 3 adventures to make more room for the rest. 2 pages isn't a taste of what's to come. It's not even a sniff. This is catching the tail end of a commercial as you flip channels. There's been a lot made about the advertising campaign of pushing the writers' races on us instead of telling us, I don't know, what they've done in the past. I have no idea who wrote these adventures, much less their skin color. As far as I know, they were all done by the same ginger nut in West Country using multiple nom de plumes. If I'm hyping artists, I'm talking about their achievements and their prior works. I wasn't going to say anything about this until I got my hands on the book, but now I got my hands on the book. When I write something, I want to be known for the quality of my work, not some physical attribute. These are the days of the internet. You can call yourself any name and no one will be the wiser. I find that advertising your authors using their skin color rather than their bibliography is off-putting and a marketing stunt. I know they're trying to stir up controversy. Controversy sells. Come buy the book the other side doesn't like. Great. What happens if they give the book to a total amateur who screws up their assignment, like what happened with Candlekeep? People appreciate quality. That's all they appreciate. There are a lot of really pretty games out there that are complete garbage that nobody reads. There's a lot of authors from the same background competing for shelf space. Pick the best one only because of the quality of the work, not because of some physical characteristics. The book is average in my taste, but that's been my opinion of almost all the anthologies so far. Saltmarsh and Yawning Portal get a pass because those are more of a best of than an actual anthology. Some of my points are purely objective, like using traditional art from those cultures instead of stock D&D art. For the love of God, put the writers' names next to the titles. The gazetteers are too short to be of much use for long-term purposes. The book needs to be larger. The Citadel section is not even 10 pages long. I would have put the gazetteers in the first chapter to separate them from the adventures. But those are technical suggestions. Just remember, for the most fun, play it in Mystara. This week is converting Dragons of Stormwreck Isle from the dull and blasé Forgotten Realms to the hip and happening Mystara. Stormwreck is the latest box set adventure like Lost Mines of Phandelver or Dragons of Icespire Peak, but without many of the bells and whistles of the Essentials kit. This video is to help you get over your disappointment of opening up the box and noticing this is set off the Storm Coast instead of Theatis. That's right, we're still stuck in the Remembered Realms. I'm Mr. Welch, and it's time to set course for the known world. Before we start, do you remember the module Death's Ride? The one with the awesome art of the skeleton warrior riding a blue dragon over a lake of fire? Some of the greatest 80s van art ever created. Remember how disappointed you were when that scene appeared nowhere in the adventure? Get ready for more of that disappointment, as the cover of this adventure shows probably the same blue dragon facing off against Hank the Ranger and Diana the Acrobat from the 80s cartoon. Then, in the book itself, there's Eric the Cavalier, about to get himself involved in a dragon fight. Presto the Wizard makes an appearance on page 6 in the art, along with Hank and some random chick they added because they needed a cleric for the miniature set. Lisa the Thief, Bobby the Barbarian, and Uni the Unicorn don't make an appearance at all. But they're all just there for nostalgia. They don't appear anywhere in this box set in the rules. It's obviously them. They're wearing the same clothes and weapons, though Eric gets a sword, and God forbid you show Diana's midriff in 5e. They could have easily made a cameo, or even better, make them the pre-generated characters that came with the set. But no, they're just there in the art, and they don't appear anywhere in the adventure. Color me disappointed. Stormwreck Isle is for levels 1 through 3. It's a beginning adventure. I figured you knew this already, as all the box sets are low level. James Wyatt was the lead designer, Carl Kopinski did the cover art, Mike Schley is the cartographer, and there's a laundry list of interior artists. It's 48 pages long, it's a series of connected dungeon crawls, and it's only available at Target for the next few months. So if you're looking to buy this and you are, say, in like Greece, you'll have to get somebody in the States to ninja shop for you. If you're a friendly local game store over in Swaziland, you're SOL until Wizards remembers that the local stores are the ones that actually support the game and carry all the products that you're not going to find in a big box store. When was the last time you went to Target to buy a gnome wizard? But enough complaining about the absolute garbage way these box sets are distributed, and let's take a peek at the real adventure. Stormwreck Isle is a small island located in the ocean near Sword Coast. There's only one landmark to identify where it is, a sliver of the high road visible on the edge of the map. The module is self-contained, all the chapters are on a different section of the island, so we can place this anywhere there's a coast in Mystara. Where haven't we set a conversion yet? How about making it one of the smaller islands around Irene? A tiny island, so you wouldn't count it as one of the core ones. You don't have to change anything about the island. It's rocky, it's got caves, there's no actual settlements outside the dragon's village. The island is ruled by a bronze dragon named Runara, who appears in human form. Bronze dragons are pretty rare in Mystara. You can port her over to a gold dragon, no problem, or possibly even a good-aligned gemstone dragon. If you want to make her into a bit of a gossip, I suggest a sapphire dragon. A jade dragon fits the bill if she's more into the arts. She's got a bunch of vicious evil kobolds following her around, waiting to betray her and skin her corpse. But those are Faerun kobolds. Mystaran kobolds are mammals, not reptiles. So flip those kobolds to gnomes, you got the same motivations, only the gnomes aren't going to pretend to be your friend and then Julius Caesar you in the morning while you're reading your mail. It would be best if you replaced the mention of anything Faerun related with Mystaran, of course. Bahamut isn't welcome here, so the temple to him becomes devoted to the Great One. There are evil kobolds on the island, with a winged kobold as their boss. Stick with the theme that the kobolds use weird devices as weapons, mostly stolish gnomish designs. The winged kobold is wearing a gliding suit, similar to Wile E. Coyote, but everything else remains the same. If you wanted to throw the characters for a loop, instead of a dragon, the island's ruler could be a drake, the shape-changing fey creatures with a pseudo-draconic form. The only problem with doing that is she wouldn't be able to do the big damn heroes moment when the players screw up, like the adventure suggests. The island is a monastery for helping people come to peace with their various problems. It's not a refuge, but more of a sanitarium. The Rest and Recoup Sanitarium, not the Insane Asylum Sanitarium. Every one of the pre-gen characters is there for a specific reason, and the residents have their own quests that need doing. If you're using your own characters, they will need their reasons to come here, or if you want, give them a reason to be here already. But remember, this module starts at first level. They aren't going to be here because of PTSD for being the only survivor in a massive battle against Hivebrood or anything else that would have made them higher level. That's a common error in background building. You're a rookie. You have rookie experience. Act like a rookie. The first quest given to the party is to figure out what's bugging the Myconids that inhabit the island. As Myconids are not normally part of Mystara, we need to find a replacement. The best place for an enigmatic subterranean creature is another enigmatic subterranean creature. Time to bring up the Geonid again. The Mystara Geonid, not the replacement Geonid, which became an elemental creature in the Toral package PDF. Now they speak through Morse code by clicking rocks together instead of just venting fungal spores, so you can leave the nasal spray at home. You can replace the spore-infested octopus. A fungoid is a good option, but let the players get a chance to sneak by it, because it's a boss-level monster for most first-level PCs. The problem in the cave is that the poisonous fumes are building up, attracting some nasty creatures, or just dumb monsters that like the fumes. Make the fumes sulfuric, you can use the fume drakes if you'd like, or grab some low-level elementals like the fire fundamentals from the Mystara setting. These things aren't very dangerous, but they can be numerous. Clear the blocked passage, deal with the fire snake, and everybody goes up a level. Yay! Next, we're headed to the Cursed Shipwreck. This is about an elite U.S. Special Forces operative assigned to a crack unit comprised of the best that the U.S. military can provide from all the military branches. He's woken up after spending years in a coma, but is tortured for information he doesn't know, and the only woman who can provide the information died years ago in that same battle that rendered him unconscious. And I am apparently reading the summary of the G.I. Joe episode, There's No Place Like Springfield. This version of Cursed Shipwreck is about the players dealing with zombies they encountered at the start of the adventure. Looking through the adventure, there's a shrine to Orcus. Remember, Orcus in Mystara is a different guy. Just as evil, just not a demon lord. That information is just for fluff, it doesn't impact the story. The adventure really needs no conversions, it's all zombies and a harpy. It's a straight-up dungeon crawl, and it doesn't try to be anything but. Then you get to the Clifftop Observatory, the final third of the module. This building was once a structural marvel for all sorts of science, which explains the gnomes. The small dragon here has a small force of kobolds as minions, which also explains the gnomes. You've got some winged kobolds. Remember to put them in the wingsuits so you don't have little evil bat chihuahuas. The rest of the adventure is a bit of a hunt and peck for clues for various puzzles, then a fight with a dragon wormling at the end. It's not a complicated dungeon, which, considering this is an introductory adventure, that's a good thing. More experienced players might find it a bit empty, but remember, WotC didn't write this for you. If you're a veteran player who has to play through this, default to the standard fun way to play starter modules. Speed run. See how fast you can beat this by just playing off the stock plot points you will find. Alright, that was Dragons of Stormwreck Island, and I'm running way short. The YouTube algorithm doesn't like it when you run short. It makes it angry. You wouldn't like it when the YouTube algorithm gets angry, would you? So I need something to keep this video going. Remember when I mentioned using Geonids? Did you know Geonids are part of 5e? They were one of the 3 additional Mystara monsters that got bored into Faerun in the Extra Life PDF, the Turtle package. It raises money for sick kids, so it's a good purchase. But we can make those sick kids even happier by taking this adventure back to Mystara, where it should have stayed. The Turtle package is a $10 PDF that you can get from the DM's Guild or similar, and was the download that gave us playable turtles. Not as cool as the turtles from the Mystara Player's Guide, but a decent copy. This adventure takes the turtle, the topi, the decapus, and the geonid, and drops them squarely into Chult after the spell plague. Well, now we're sending them back to the Turtle Lands on the Savage Coast, like in the dungeon adventure Turtles of the Purple Sage. Turtles go back to not having an adventurous bent, unless they are total freaks and actually like to do something other than fish. All the Faerun Pantheon gets dropped for Mystaran Immortals. There's no Yuan-Ti, the nearest human settlement is hundreds of miles away. Just ignore all the references to Tomb of Annihilation and it works much better. The main adventure is a short dungeon crawl. Well, what did you expect for $10? It's got a lot of Faerun imagery with many references to Umberlee. You can switch her out for Proteus. He's not an evil immortal, but he's not exactly the most caring either. The long-dead captain of the ship is devoted to him, and he was as evil as all get out. But Proteus is militantly neutral. He doesn't care who worships him because the sea doesn't care. If you want an evil immortal instead of Proteus, you can switch out Umberlee with Slizark the Lurker, the patron immortal of Kopru. Though there's probably half a dozen that would be an easy fit. Slizark is a bit obscure, but definitely an evil ocean immortal. Again, it doesn't have any impact on the story except for some cosmetic changes. That's going to wrap up the latest conversion of the newest product. It's a starter dungeon. It doesn't try to be anything more than a starter dungeon. So it gets a lot of passes on the lack of content you're going to find within. A good chunk of the art is recycled. It has a separate book teaching the basics of the rules and has some black and white art and some more pictures of the D&D kids. You get some dice, because that's a constant with every starter set. It's not an adventure for players that have been playing for a while. They will get bored with a limited number of encounters and chew through this module. If you're a DM looking for an adventure and you're tired of Phandelver, it might be something to pick up, assuming you live close to a target. So that gives me some breathing room, because the next box set up is Spelljammer, and I don't do setting conversions. Unless they decide to do Mystara, and then I have my work cut out for me. Of course, they could hire me to convert Mystara, in which case I've got a hell of a head start, and I do have reasonable rates. Welcome to Mystara for a conversion video, possibly the last one for 5th edition. I know I was done with this system, but since I got a free copy of the collectible version, and enjoy converting other lesser settings to the far superior Mystara, I figured one more for old time's sake.
Just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in.
Of course, it's an anthology, so the quality is going to be all over the place, but this time it's about heists, or the second part of the heist. You know what? This video is going to be an omnibus on how to run a heist in Mystara using the Golden Vault as an example, or a warning. I'm Mr. Welch, and Nobnar, what have I gotten myself into? Before you pick up a copy of this book, go out and buy a copy of the Thieves' Handbook from 2nd edition. PDF or print doesn't matter, it's actually not that hard to find. TSR had its problems, just like Wizards, but where Wizards doesn't give decent DM advice on how to run an adventure, be it horror, space, or heist, TSR excelled at that. The Thieves' Handbook has master-level suggestions on how to run an adventure based on various types of crime, and it does it right. It gets that heists are equal part planning, stealing the thing, and getting the specialists and tools needed to steal the thing. There's not a decent heist story that starts with the heist. The build-up is just as important, if not more important, than the actual job. DMs, that's where you will have to use your skills to pad these adventures we're going to be talking about. Think of all the best heist movies. Ocean's 11's, Kelly's Heroes, Logan Lucky, and Adventure of the Four Crowns. They all shared the same premise. Get to the super heavily guarded area and steal the nigh impossible to get item. They needed a crew of specialists, each trained to get around a specific task. Yin was a contortionist that could easily infiltrate the Bellagio's vault. Oddball had the Sherman's Kelly needed to get past the Tiger tanks. Clyde and Jimmy had to break out Joe Bang from prison so they could get the best safe cracker. JT Stryker had to train his crew relentlessly so they could work suspended from the ceiling because they couldn't touch the floor. Recruiting crews and acquiring MacGuffins make up most of these stories. You need to talk to your players about restrictions that tend to come up during a heist scenario. It's not about restricting things that don't exist in your setting, like tieflings in Mystara or practical clothing in Faerun, but more pragmatic limits. Heists are all about stealth. Classes like barbarians or paladins will often find themselves standing watch outside while all the rogues have the fun looting and pillaging. It's entirely plausible to have an all-rogue party. The Thieves' Handbook explains such a campaign in detail, and quite well. However, 5th edition rogues tend to be able to master all of their abilities quite easily, so the separation of talents is not as common in 5th edition. But going the 2nd edition route, every rogue specializes in a different area, and everybody gets their moment in the spotlight when it comes time to do the one thing that they were hired for. At least until Jimenez breaks his neck getting to the chalet and Gilpin has to take over his job. If you're going to focus on a heist campaign, you should only need a single adventure to assemble the characters, unless you want to do a Where Are They Now intro later. That's actually a decent way to take a break after a particularly successful adventure. Don't overdo it. You don't want them to go on their own ways after each level up. Getting the right gear or inside information should always be a factor in your games. You have to bribe the staff, steal the floor plans, or get the special tools required to tunnel under Darrican's merchant hall. Getting the right equipment should be an adventure unto itself. The party has to get everything they need before they can even begin to think about robbing the place. Feel free to nix characters that aren't cut out for a heist. You're not carving through guard after guard to steal the treasure. That's not a heist for most characters. That's Tuesday. You need stealth, you need fast talking and lockpicking. Spellcasters can help a lot, but if you want to ban classes that aren't fun to play while everybody else is making all the rolls, do it. You're not banning the classes from your table, but some builds aren't going to have much to do. Characters will only be needed if they have the skills required for a heist adventure. Anything that relies on heavy armor is probably going to have a bad time. After all, changing disguises on the spot is a classic heist skill. You can play any of the adventures as a one-shot. They don't tie together well. The Golden Vault is presented as a plot device to give you the various adventures. It's a new group and has a Mission Impossible vibe, but there's better Mystara options. Much more thematic and can provide a sense of gravitas to the mission. Try the Pragmati, the Assassin's Guild that doesn't do a lot of killing if another way works better. They need you to do the thing because the thing will destabilize, buy off, or otherwise get rid of a problem. They give you the basics, and you have to figure out the rest independently. Try to keep the body count down. Bodies lead to questions, and questions lead to upset clients. Before I go into the adventures, can I take a moment to complain about the art? Several of the pictures in the Golden Vault were digital creations, and they were some of the worst pieces of art in 5th edition, in my not-so-humble opinion. These two images on the screen are not altered in any way. That's how they look. I don't know if this was a time or a budget issue, but it's pretty noticeable. Then you get this piece of art, and I can only put this down to art direction. Is that supposed to be a ghost's severed head suddenly appearing to warn the party about the upcoming threats they face? I can't say what my player said when they first saw it, because YouTube won't like that. But the safest was, "Help me, Archdruid! I'm stuck on this tree stump at crotch level. What are you doing, Archdruid?" On the positive side, 5th edition has finally discovered short-sleeved blouses for women, and you can actually see a shoulder in one of the pieces. Alright, enough complaining. At least about the book's initial shortcomings, and the art, and the abbreviated adventures. Let's get to looting the known world, or Savage Coast, or any other part of Mystara that fits the bill. Not every adventure will be an easy fit. Some of them can be put anywhere in Mystara with a little conversion. Fair warning, you will need to memorize the stats for the guards and veterans NPCs. They are used heavily across the book as stock antagonists, even as the party levels up and becomes grotesquely more powerful than they are. Seriously, some of these adventures later on, you could probably solo it if you're doing a stealth run. And others, there's no reason why you don't just clear out the dungeon. Of course, that leads to embarrassing scenes, like, "Oi! The city guard's outside! How'd they find us?" "I don't know. Must have been the mile-long trail of corpses we left." And we will replace the always-present tieflings, as usual, with the Mystara-friendly characters, all 17 of those tieflings. There are 12 elves scattered across this book by comparison, and one half-elf that I could find. And no Asimir. Wizards does love its edgelord demon boys. If you haven't seen one of these videos before, this is a video for DMs, so it's all spoilers from here on out. The first adventure is the Murkmire Malevolence, the most basic heist adventure. Sneak in and steal the thing. You're on a time limit because the thing isn't going to remain the thing for long. The party gets handed a map to the museum, which isn't accurate, instead of acquiring it independently. It's an easy enough adventure to convert and replace the non-Mystara characters with just normal characters. The adventures have a lot of mixed races for some reason, with elves, dwarves, gnomes, and tieflings randomly appearing, but no half-elves, because this is heavily based on Faerun, and Faerun is the Mos Eisley Cantina. As it's set in a museum, you need to find someplace metropolitan, and you've got a lot of choices. For fun, set it in Serene. as the Flying City has numerous museums, and the gnomish exhibitions can be exciting diversions. Moving on to the Stygian Gambit, this is the one with all the tieflings. Well, most of them. This adventure would have the Knights of Ebony stocking up on flame spells if you ran them through it. But fortunately, Mystara does not need tieflings, and we've already got a far superior replacement. It's a casino job, and as presented, the casino is based on the Nine Hells. As devils aren't tolerated in Mystara, most people won't even know what the hells are. But what we do have is the Dimension of Nightmares, and it's time to get awesome. Enter Glantrian Prince Jarek Virayana, master of the 5th Circle of Dream Mastery. He's hosting a soiree in the Plane of Nightmares and has invited some of his most magical friends. All the tiefling guards, cooks, entertainers, public notaries, food taster, crosswalk guards, rocket engineers, horse whisperers, and flatulists are now diably explicitly hired for this event. As a side note, one of the games the characters can play is 3-Dragon Ante, but it doesn't give you any special bonuses if you actually are trained in that game. So let me fix that real quick. If you have proficiency in that specific gaming kit, roll 2 extra dice and drop the 2 lowest. You can similarly improve other casino games. Populate the casino with all sorts of nightmare creatures as well. Malfera and Muzina can work as security. Unspeakable horrors can deal the cards. The point is, the prince is putting on a show for high-level wizards, and he is sparing no expense. I know what you're saying, and yes, I would be more than happy to interview the Wizards of the Coast spokesman on the fate of Dungeons & Dragons, but I don't know if he could answer the Morgan, Alina, Ariadna, Marybang, Kill starting question. I know what you're saying now. And how does a party stand a chance with all these high-level monsters and wizards running around? Because they're low-level characters. They are beneath notice. These are Glantrians, after all. They will have invitations, which they acquired from you running the starting adventure to acquire them first, where they can also make friends with some of these high-level characters, and they can be brought along as that person's +1, or servant. This lets them hobnob with anybody way beyond their station, and probably somebody who has beef with Viriana that isn't public. For example, use his youngest wife, Waira. She can blame the robbery on one of his other 2 wives in their constant game of court politics. Reach for the Stars is the one with the Brazzers Ferry, although she only appears as an expedition dump early, and does not appear to be inconvenienced or decayed at all despite being decapitated. This is one of the stockiest of stock adventures. A powerful nightmare creature is trying to break into our world, and the party has to break into his house to stop it. Sure, they could just go room by room and kill everybody until they get to the big bad. This would make more sense, but this is a heist adventure. To start, the party will have to find the book that tells them how to get the happy ending, and hope they don't realize they can still accomplish the happy ending with extreme violence. This is a stock haunted house, and you can stick it anywhere. Prisoner 13 sounds like your stock jailbreak, only it's not. You can solve this with stealth, diplomacy, and tracing paper. The prisoner has the key to a dwarven treasure, and you need to acquire this by giving the prisoner what she wants. There is only one place to put this prison, because there's only one prison so epic that it has its own section in the Red Steel box set. Fortanza de Boa Vista, on the colony of the Horn, owned by Texiaris. The prisoners are all from the Savage Coast, exiled outside the Cursed region. Every prisoner has mutated horribly because they're not getting Cinebril. Except for Prisoner 13, who was able to bribe a cleric to remove her curse. Now you have to deal with freak shows in every cell, mini-begging for death. Since it's outside the Savage Coast, at least the party won't need Cinebril. The prisoner is a horrible person and wants the warden's prison list. The key is the tattoo on her hand, and she can be tricked into revealing this. Of course, the bad thing is to kill her or chop off her hand, and the good thing is to get her the book so she can have all of her enemies slaughtered. Or you can just grab her arm and trace the tattoo once you talk her into telling us what the key is. Tockworth's Clockworks is next, and this one finally lets us use one of the Mystara's best villains, a Modrigsward. The original adventure is set in a deep-known city, but the nation of Swerfneblia doesn't exist in Mystara. What we do have is an underground gnomish nation. Or we had, past tense. So the insane gnome is now an insane rot dwarf, like there's any other kind. She's found a city in the fallen nation of Falun that was in her territory, and unleashed her constructs to kill off the kobolds that were bothering her. The gnomish syndicate sees their chance, as one insane dwarf is theoretically easier to kill than 10,000 kobolds. For those keeping track at home, the flaw in that logic is the lone dwarf just massacred the 10,000 kobolds. To enforce the stealth aspect, make the constructs scary. Really scary. Use the mechs from the Mystara creature catalogs for some of the nastier constructs. They are well beyond the party's capabilities. The dwarf will be a tough fight, but fighting her creations is suicide. The gnomes you encounter are survivors of a past expedition, and you can help them as needed. If the party succeeds, the gnomes can rush in and claim what they can before the kobolds return. Remember to change the city so it's been ruined by the kobolds living there, and it's run down. Masterpiece Imbroglio is another stock heist. Very stock. You must get a painting from a manor filled with thugs and bandits. There's not much to this one. Almost all the bad guys are humans or demi-humans. The half-elf does make her appearance as the bad guy, but you'll never encounter her if you stay sneaky. You get to recover the highly magical MacGuffin, but then you have to turn that over to get paid. You can set this adventure anywhere if you can find a manor house there. It doesn't need any conversion past some minor cosmetic changes. So on to the next one, because these adventures are going to get much harder to work with. Axe from the Grave has the party stealing a musical instrument from another tiefling. Some demons are involved in this once, and even more exposition ghosts. Should have counted those as well, because they're almost as common as festivals in the Radiant Citadel. The bad guy's a tiefling, so make him human. He's guarded by another tiefling that's actually an incubus and the employee of the Demon Lord Grazit. Demon Lords aren't welcome in Mystara, so he has to be something else. He's only challenge rating 4, so it's the same as the Baldendar. The Baldendar loses some combat abilities, but gets a lot more in the way of magic. There's a Chasme demon running around, but you can switch those out for Saber Claws if you hate your characters. A good place for this adventure is Irindi, because the School of Art is located there. Vidorant's Vault is a short break into the manor and steal the MacGuffin. What's that make? 3 break into a manor and steal somethings? Like the other 2, you get told what to steal and handed an incomplete map to a mansion. There's a lot of traps, which mean nothing in 5th edition, thanks to the ease that you can get your perception skill up. There's nothing to adapt, it's just human guards and similar. For a kick, place the manor house across the street from the last manor house you robbed. Hell, put them all on the same street. You just go to the next door and rob that house. Or you could just go in stabbing people. It's only 14 rooms and it feels like a dungeon adventure. Shard of the Accursed has you sneaking into a bandit base to return an artifact to undo a curse. It's got another expository ghost, a repeating plot device you'll find in this book. You've got some myconage you need to replace. I suggest you find a bunch of killer plants from the various monster books and make your players suspicious of vegetation. Don't make it too obvious. Have lots of plants throughout the area before they get ambushed. If you don't want to go that far, since this is a tomb, use the giant orc-eating fungus from Orcs of Thar. Nothing much to convert since it's all human bandits, so if they decide to go all Steiner Scout Squad on them, nobody will notice or care. You're level 7 at this point, facing a bunch of 1/2 CR monsters. I don't think the players will even notice as they step on them. Heart of Ashes is similar to the Mystara module's Death's Ride, only without the misleading art of the skeleton warrior riding over the flake of fire on a dragon. Still bitter over that one. You've got a gate to the negative material plane, vacuuming up the region and turning people into tainted monsters. So the first thing people will do is turn to a gang of criminals to run a heist to stop it. I would think this is more of an immediate problem for which you don't put out a job ad. This is an all-hands-on-deck emergency. There's not much to convert here. If you want to treat it like Death's Ride, put it in Norwald. The bad guys are either shadow creatures or corrupted humans. If the party decides to recon in force, they get the MacGuffin, everybody comes back to life, so they can slaughter everybody between you and the thing you need. Then we get to the most memorable of all the adventures, and certainly the most difficult to convert, An Affair on the Concordant Express. This is not set on the prime material plane. That's paramount to the adventure. This is one we're not converting to Mystara. It's very location dependent. It does have a few things that bugged me that we can easily fix. First, you've got a Mind Flayer detective based on Hercule Poirot, as this adventure is obviously based on the Agatha Christie novel. What's the problem with that? He's supposed to be silly. The problem is he's a telepath. And if the party doesn't help him solve the murder, he solves the mystery without them. He doesn't need them. To bring him down to the level that needs the party for help, I suggest making him a GIF. I think GIFs would make a good Hercule Poirot. The party has to get to the caboose to find the prisoner they need to free. For a lark, you can turn him into an avatar of a Mystara immortal. Raven is appropriate. Party at Palisade Hall is the penultimate adventure. You've got to sneak into a party at a manor house and steal the MacGuffin. Again. At least this one has a plot twist. It doesn't even start as a heist. The lady of the house is acting strange and her servants need a third party to investigate it. Don't give the quest target flat out in the opening exposition. That's a significant flaw in this adventure. Again, like the rest of the anthologies. You could have cut the number of adventures in half and expanded on the remaining ones, and you could have actually made them interesting. Let the party watch the host, see her acting strangely, and let them figure out the MacGuffin on their own. There's a hag coven to fight at the end. You can always upscale those to the witches from Rahazia, but don't do that if you've already used them more than once, or else they'll get cliché. Okay, the last one, Fire and Darkness. This is set in a region where the plane of fire is spilling over into the prime material plane, and there's only one place that comes to mind for that in Mystara. We're going to Honor Island in Irindi. This is a vacation home for a powerful Ifrit. The adventure has a tie-in with Planescape, but you can ignore that as the tie-in is minor, and that way you don't have to explain who the Fated are to the players if they aren't familiar with Sigil. You are sent to steal a powerful artifact, the Book of Vile Darkness. This is another adventure where you get the awesome thing, and then immediately hand over the awesome thing. If players are going to acquire an awesome thing in an adventure, let them acquire it halfway through the adventure. That way they get to actually use it before they have to hand it over. It's just a polite thing to do. There's a lot of demons and similar in this adventure, and the Honor Island wizards aren't going to be cool with that. Actually, they're probably not going to be cool with anything, but they will try to melt demons. So grab all sorts of creatures of the elemental plane of fire to stop them. Pyrophores make great guards as long as what they are guarding is fireproof. You can replace the large number of Aranes with these. The Dwargar can be switched out with Azerd or just regular dwarves with fire-retardant beard guards. Replace the Daemons with something exotic. For a mind screw, use the Ord. They are manipulating the Ifrit, and they can disguise themselves as any monster. Only now, the Ifrit has outlived its usefulness. That's all 13 adventures. Most of them are formulaic and suffer from the party getting handed all the essential information at the start. The characters are given a large amount of help, even at the higher levels. The amount of setup that heists usually have just isn't in this book. Go to this manor, steal this thing, here's a map to help. They don't have to recruit any specialists, they don't have to acquire any tools, they don't even have to research the MacGuffin they are needing to steal. Several of the adventures can be solved with violence, but they're supposed to be a heist. You'll need to give the players a reason why they can't simply just kill their way to the goal. I strongly suggest increasing the number and quality of the guards. Make it a really bad idea for the players to get discovered. Failing that, don't make them bandits. Make them good guys that just happen to be standing in the way of the party. The client doesn't want a body count, and that's not just counting the ones that they can find. Usually this is where I tell you what my favorite adventure is, and I will give that to Heart of Ashes because it's one of the more unique. The Concordant Express is fairly memorable, but it's not a heist. It's a jailbreak at best. And it's not much of a challenge for competent players because there's not much to do except to go from one car to the next until they find the caboose. Anybody who's watched any of these reviews before know I am not a fan of anthologies, and this book has increased that dislike. Too many adventures feel the same. The art ranges from average to awful, with a few exceptions. Some adventures feel railroady. Okay, the Concordant Express does get a pass. And many overuse the exposition dump or share similar writing tricks with each other. There's just nothing to get excited over in this book. If this is the last adventure released for 5th edition, it's going out with a wimp. Today's topic is another conversion video, taking the latest official release of the Shattered Obelisk and replacing all the old and played out Forgotten Realms elements with the superior and far more fun Mystara setting. Now we finished what we started all the way back at the beginning of 5th edition. We didn't have much Mystara converted to the new version then, but now we're ready. We're prepared. And we're making this adventure our own. I'm Mr. Welch, and it's time to be afraid. Very afraid. Phandelver and Below, the Shattered Obelisk, was released about 2 weeks ago from the recording of this video. It's 224 pages long, the same length as the Mystara Player's Guide. Amanda Hammond is the lead designer, with a long list of artists and writers attached to it. I looked for the credits to see who originally wrote The Lost Mine of Phandelver, and it was Richard Baker and Chris Perkins. That wasn't easy to find. Strangely enough, Baker was fired from WotC in 2011, and Phandelver came out in 2014. So 5th edition had been in the works long before the D&D Next titles were released, because Murder in Baldur's Gate was released in 2013. Just some weirdness I found doing my research. But enough about me finding weird stuff in the timeline. The book has 2 parts. Everybody will mostly already own the first part. The Lost Mine of Phandelver from the original starter box set makes up a full third of this book, with very few minor tweaks. Instead of going old school and making this part 2 of a series, we get a $60 book with duplicated pages. It wasn't fun when West End Games did it with Star Wars to pad out the pages, and it's not cool now. The old box set was $20 for 96 pages with handouts and dice. They could have done that again with more rule books. Throw in some new dice, and instead of a starter set, you now have an expert set. What I'm saying is this book is massively overpriced for what you get. And my wife hates the cover art for the Friendly Local Game Store Special Edition. They were going for the upside-down vibe of Stranger Things. I get it. And since that has Joyce Byers, I'm willing to cut them some slack, at least on the art. So you don't have to go back to watch my starter set video, because there are a few changes between that one and this book. I'm just going to cover the entire book here. The first thing you will notice is the consent warning on page 12, where Wizards has informed DMs that they can't mutate their player characters without their consent. Ignore that part. In fact, tear that page out and eat it. You won't need it, because we're not going to use Mind Flayers anyway. I've turned my characters into many things over my long decades as a DM. Corpses, stone statues, fish, vapor, ash outlines, smoking boots, platinum statues, Art Deco, Abe Vigoda. It's the risk you take when you play the game. If you don't think you've got players mature enough to deal with an adventure where bad things can happen to their characters, I suggest playing Toon. I didn't put much more thought into that warning, except maybe that it needed mustard. To get into the module conversions, you're going to need a copy of the Mystara Player's Guide. Also, you might want to go grab some of the monsters from the Vaults of Pandius that were converted to 5th edition. Just Google the Mystara Player's Guide. It's over at rpgmp3.com as a free download. You can then take the POD to Lulu for a print version. Yes, legally I can't sell it, so it's free for the taking. There's also an Italian version available, and I would download both to make my peninsular friends happy. Phandelver is meant to be on the Sword Coast, because this is 5th edition Forgotten Realms. It has to be on the Sword Coast. The designers would break out in hives if they set it somewhere in the Moon Sea. Here we are moving the village to near Corringlain, about 250 miles south of where it needs to be overall, but it's the closest I can get without breaking the continuity too hard. As this means the module is going to start in Darrican, we get to go on a friendly purge of not just non-Mystara friendly races, but most demi-humans as well. Darrican is like 97% human. Most towns and villages are entirely human. The demi-humans live in their nations. Humanoids are considered hostile, and the other races are so rare as not to be present. In short, everybody that's not a filthy humanoid goblin-type creature is a human. All the elves, dwarves, and hen are all now human. Darrican gets along fine with the other races, well, the demi-human races, but they don't live in Darrican. We aren't adding in diversity just for diversity's sake. Now let's get through the part you already own, a refresher into the Lost Mine. This adventure starts with the famous goblin fight, though not as good as the Siege of Suskian, but what is? This fight for new players can be pretty intimidating. It's a tough scrum if you don't know how to play. Veteran players, remember how many characters you lost in Keep on the Borderlands? Same thing here, only with far more forgiving death mechanics. You will need to purge this module of the various Forgotten Realms specific factions, because obviously they aren't in Mystara. The Lord's Alliance you can replace with the Diplomatic Corps. You need to include the Knights of Ebony as a potential lead, because that's very important later on with our corrections. The other factions aren't as important. The Adventurers Club might be a good one to include, but there isn't an evil for evil's sake Mystara group like the Zentarum, because nobody's going to join the Iron Ring. There's not much to convert for a good chunk of the starting module. All the monsters are stock bad guys you would expect in a low-level adventure. Bandits, goblins, wolves, things like that. Remember that the goblins will turn on the characters if they show weakness or mercy. The green-skinned wretches will act weak and cute, but then it's sneak attack time if the party turns their back or believes their pathetic cries. Once the characters are cleaned out the caves and the castle dungeons, that's when we start to make our first real alterations. The party will encounter a Banshee, which is rather nerfed because no one's going to throw low-level adventurers into a monster that can TPK them in a single turn. A monster that they don't have any hope of killing at this level. Instead of a Banshee, use a low-level Hag in her place. A Crone of Chaos would be perfect here. It's supposed to be a non-combat scenario. You can still use the Banshee if you'd like, but Hags are the normal go-to for information at a price characters. A Wise Woman would also be perfect here, but you're not in the Northern Reaches, so she might be hard to justify. There's not a lot of conversions for the travel part, except for replacing the Grick with a Decapus. Then you get to Wave Echo Cave, where the bad guy is a drow in a setting without drow. You can just make him an evil elf or a humanoid wizard for better effect. Actually, go with that last one. This concludes the starter section of the adventure. Just one stock dungeon crawl after another. That's usually a bad thing, but this is an introductory module, so give it a pass. Now we're going to talk about the new stuff, the thing that we paid money for, the part that didn't come with a set of cool dice. The original story had a bunch of mind flayers trying to do some stuff in the far realms, real tentacle-inspired nightmare fuel. Tentacles might scare many people, but not me. Then again, I'm not Japanese. We need a better story, a scarier story, a Mystaran story. Mind flayers are gone now, but the far realms are still there. Instead of a bunch of mutated mind flayers, we'll start with a single shadow elf. I know they're supposed to be rare, but in this case, we need her. The single shadow elf went out exploring one day, and after some searching, she found herself standing outside the nucleus of the spheres under Galantry City, the source of the radiance. This should be awe-inspiring for a wizard who has no idea what she's looking at, but she didn't realize how much radiation she was absorbing.
It's not 3 Rondkin. It's 15,000.
She started feeling ill from radiation poisoning in the next few days. She cried out for Raphael, but found another immortal willing to answer her prayers. Eric, the patron of the far realms. The one immortal that gives Thanatos the willies. Eric was thrilled to help the stricken Shadow Elf. All he wanted in return for keeping her from dying of acute radiation sickness was one teensy-weensy favor, and that was to help bring one of the great old ones into the material plane and turn Mystara into a world of madness and death. That wasn't too much to ask, was it? The Shadow Elf, out of her mind in pain and agony, agreed. Once she did that, all of her suffering ended. That doesn't mean he cured all of the radiation burns that covered her skin.
So I'll remove the cause. But not the symptom.
But at least she was capable of rational thought again. We've got to give the Shadow Elf a name. We just can't keep calling her Shadow Elf for the entire video, so let's call her Sorota. Sorota was tasked with finding a better source of the radiance to power the spells needed to open the gate to the far realms. She couldn't use the nucleus directly. It took immortal magic to heal her of the damage she suffered just looking at it for a couple of minutes. Trying to siphon from it would be fatal regardless of any magical protection. But thanks to her exposure, she could now see the radiance and even see who had absorbed it. This is where she also noticed the soul stones, the sacred stones that the Shadow Elves obsessed over, absorbed radiation, which was precisely the opposite of what she wanted. She headed to the surface to try to find people that possessed the power of the radiance. It wasn't easy. She was horribly scarred from her encounter with the nucleus, and she glowed like a Chernobyl rave at night. But at least nobody was going to suspect she was a Shadow Elf. She discovered she had developed the power to control people that she irradiated sufficiently. The problem was if the creatures weren't capable of handling the radiance already, the dosage required for her to control them was lethal. The goblins she encountered gained all sorts of new magical powers under her control, allowing them to do quite a bit of damage before their internal organs turned to soup. Creatures that didn't receive a lethal dose from her had a habit of mutating out of control or rising as irradiated zombies in some cases. This was all well and good for the minion department, but she needed competent help. She found those when she encountered a couple of sorcerers who were secretly disciples of the Radiance. Glantrians who were born infused with magical radiation after their parents had absorbed enough rads. She couldn't control them, their natural resistance to dying of radiation poisoning prevented that. But she could influence them to help her. It was not like she needed to control them. They viewed her as a messenger from the immortals, with her radioactive deformities and all. One of the two disciples was from Crown Guard, and confided that he suspected Brannock MacGregor, Prince of Clantier, knew something about the Radiance. The disciples could detect radiance, and MacGregor's tower glowed with it. They managed to get a message to the prince explaining in coded terms about the Radiance. The vain prince agreed to meet them, confident in his powers and always willing to torture fools for more information on the Radiance. When he saw the Shadow Elf glowing with radiance energy, she had his full attention. She struck a deal with him. He would gain a new path of immortality in exchange for helping them open a portal to another world, where they could harness even more magical energy. Sorota didn't realize that MacGregor was the first Radiance Lich, a creature far more powerful than her. He didn't realize that she was channeling immortal powers. While Eric couldn't control the prince, his influence would take a toll on MacGregor's sanity. The disciples of the Radiance gathered the few brethren that they knew of, and the group formed a cabal devoted to using the Radiance to open up a new realm where they could harness its magic and achieve divinity. Now, we have made this module very Mystaran. The Cabal soon found that another group had first discovered the Radiance and had created the obelisks in response. The obelisks were originally Nithian in design, because every forgotten statue in Mystara is Nithian. The obelisks safely absorb Radiance magic, and there was a ring of them surrounding Glantry and other lands, but nobody remembers who built them because Nithians. Why does the Radiance stop at Glantry's borders? Blame the Nithians. But the Radiant Cabal needed the Radiance to spread, so they needed an obelisk to study. The issue was getting close to an obelisk that would drain the radiance from the environment, and also from them. MacGregor plans to figure out how the obelisks absorb radiance, but reverse it. They don't know the source of the obelisks or how they work. They just know that when they approach them, the obelisk takes all their radiance and magic away from them. Fortunately for them and the plot, Phandelver has pieces of a damaged obelisk that the Cabal can steal. The goblins that raid the village are saturated with radiance magic. Lethally so they all die shortly after the raid, but there's always more goblins to irradiate. They will have a few spells granted to them by the Radiance, giving them the abilities of a third-level wizard. Each spell removes a level of radiation. When they cast 5 spells, they turn to ash. If you want to make radiation especially dangerous, here's how you do it. First, It's not radiance damage, as that type of damage, despite its name, is supposed to represent holy damage. Well, 9 times out of 10. There is one spell where it's radiation, and there's another spell where it's focus light. Wizards never did clarify that. We're changing it to fire or poison, depending on whether it's a physical attack or an aura. Don't pick up that smoking stone, that causes fire damage. Don't stand too close to the glowing half-melted elf, that causes poison damage. Now here's where it gets scary. Radiation damage ignores all relevant resistances or immunities living creatures have, unless it's from a spell or a magic item. A fire giant picks up the glowing rock, and it takes fire damage. A Yuan-Ti stands too close to the glowing Scotsman, he takes poison damage. And gets Scotland the Brave stuck in his head for 1d4 hours. Worse, this damage reduces maximum hit points, because it's acute radiation sickness. This can only be cured with a restoration spell, like 5th edition's quasi-energy drain rules. While you have radiation damage, you also have the poison condition. That will get the party's attention. But the ultimate throwback that the party doesn't know about, rockborn dwarves are entirely immune to the draining effects of radiation. They can't be poisoned by it, and their hit points aren't permanently reduced, just like Kagiyar designed them after the Great Rain of Fire. But the party has an out. Soul stones prevent radiation damage. They even absorb it. Standard soul stones will absorb 10 points of radiation damage before wearing out, and they prevent lingering damage from having any lasting effects. The psionic mind stones and shattered obelisks become soul stones, and their rarity increases the damage absorbed by 10 points per level. If you use the mind stone for its normal ability, it's expended. But a rare mind stone will absorb 40 points of radiation, 10 to start with, and then add another 10 points of absorption for every rarity level. So common, uncommon, and rare add 10, 20, and 30. Soul stones absorb radiation from weakest to strongest, so a base soul stone will eat the radiation before a magical one. However, if it does wear out, the extra damage automatically goes to the next lowest soul stone. They will keep you safe from Brannert's lethally radioactive aura, but only for a little while. Remember that. You will need to create some radiant sorcerers to replace the mind flayers. Start them with 20 radiance points, a level on par with the mind flayers' hit dice. That will be around level 8 for most mind flayers, with the mutated flayers getting replaced by higher level sorcerers. Keep the added flayer powers from their mutations for the disciples. The extra abilities like tentacles and such are now caused by radiation. Add an extra 10 points of rad per level increase. All of these sorcerers are mutated to some degree with radiation poisoning. You can give them masks or cover their face to disguise the radiation burns. Sirota starts with 100 rad, and her 2 sidekicks give him 75. McGregor, of course, is a radiation lich, so he has all the lich powers, but exchange several of his spells with radiant spells as needed. He's got 150 radiance minimum. His attacks do radiation damage without the paralyzation, but if you fail the saving throw, you take the damage again as poison, in addition to the heat damage that it normally causes. Worse, he's got an aura that works like the sickening radiance spell from Xanathar's. In short, it's a 30-foot aura that causes 4d10 radiance damage and a level of exhaustion against anyone entering or ending their turn in the effect, unless they make a saving throw. Change the radiance damage to poison, and there you go. And this aura is always on. Bring soul stones when you face McGregor. You have been warned. Repeatedly. If the party defeats him, he reforms back in his castle, where his phylactery is. He is still a radioactive undead creature with a hatred of all human life, but he will be free from the influences of Eric. He might thank the party later by offering them a merciful death. He does owe them one, and he's a big softy in that regard. Alright, now let's finish the module. The party finds themselves in a dwarven ruin. Originally this was supposed to be Dwergar, but now it's an abandoned dwarven mine from when the Glantrians drove them out. Their dead have been raised as ashen whites from the effects of the tainted radiance. The party is chasing the goblins who raided the town, looking for captives. The other radiated monsters, like the Grick, can be played as is. Remember to turn them into radioactive horrors from the Cold War. Change the psychic wards to the relevant types, as psychic damage is not a significant factor in the conversion for apparent reasons. But magical fire and poison resistance would work well in its place. If you need to bolster the party's defenses, have soul stones randomly growing out of the wall as needed. You need to keep them well stocked with soul stones if they have any hope of surviving this adventure. Now the party gets to chase down the conspiracy. This will become a race against time, as Eric has a master plan in place, and he's maneuvering his pawns into position as the party goes after them. Eric's master plan is to get the Cabal into the Far Realms, specifically the Shadow Elf and McGregor. He can then leech their radiance from them and channel that into a powerful spell that will open up a portal into the Prime. He can send at least one Great Old One through. He can't open the portal on the Prime, as the other immortals would detect his attempts and stop him. Plus, that much radiance will draw the attention of Etienne d'Amberville. But in the Far Realms, only Eric maintains a presence there of all the immortals. He can work in peace without alerting the Council of Intrusion. Sirota and Brannart are just walking radioactive batteries for the Twisted Immortal, nothing else. Every other immortal would try to stop him if he opens the portal, but it would be far too late by then. Even now, with the radiance energy he's already acquired, creatures from the Far Realms are starting to manifest on the Prime. There are a few adventures in the town if the party returns. They have to deal with the increased exposure from the Far Realms. Find a lost child and bring him back. Watch a horribly mutated cow explode into irradiated gray oozes. Play up the body horror, and drop even more hints that this is going to get much worse before it gets any better. The party will have clues on where the missing pieces of the obelisk are, leading to more dungeon crawls. Cue the Shadow Elves. The Dungeon Talhundereth was a dwarven complex, originally an underground temple. This can be traced back to Glantry, or at least before the dwarves were cast out. The temple is filled with background radiation. Not enough to damage regularly, but if you live there for a few weeks, it starts to mess with your mind. Then you mutate. All the creatures the characters will find have been here for some time and are now mutated monstrosities. They will also find a few Shadow Elves looking for their lost father. The elves will not say they're Shadow Elves. They will pretend to be any other type of elf. The characters aren't going to know what a Shadow Elf even is. The elf's father fell under the sway of Sirota, and his soul stones have long since worn out. He's become one of the mutates, while his sons still have functional soul stones that protect them from the radiation. It turns out the obelisk fragments leak radiation, and holding on to them is a very bad idea unless you shield them. If the party helps the Shadow Elves, they give them common-level soul stones to ward off the radiation and explain how they work. These soul stones will not expire above the surface because the stones are magical items. There's not much else to convert here, keeping the non-Mystaran monsters as mutated horrors trying to eat the party, with a disciple of the Radiance in place of the Mind Flayer boss at the end. When the party returns to Phandelven, the town has become even more perilous. Several people are going mad, and a sinkhole has opened in the city where the radioactive goblins are spilling out of. Time for the party to reach the scary part of the adventure. Remember to replace all the psychic attacks with either fire or poison damage from the Radiance to keep with the theme. The further the party goes, the more messed up the caverns and tunnels become as the Far Realms are bleeding through. Eventually the walls become organic. Doors are living flesh that open like maws as players approach. It's not dangerous, but it is pretty gross. It also lets McGregor know where the party is precisely. Demons, devils, and other outer planar creatures found in this adventure become denizens of the Far Realms. Add more tentacles if you need for maximum effect. The Alhoun Mind Flayer vampire is now a heavily mutated Radiance disciple who has acquired a powerful soul stone that allowed it to break its connection with Eric and the Great Old Ones. It's more than willing to talk and will even help the party for all their soul stones. That's not a good idea. But even if they refuse, it's not going to hinder them. It's trying to undo its mutations, not become hostile. The characters are going to fight through many mutated Radiant sorcerers. If the party gets sick of them, then you as a dungeon master have done an excellent job. There's also a lot of mutated humans, empowered goblins, and a lot of weird monsters standing in for things like Nothic, Slot, and similar. But then you get to one of the big bads. In the room where the Elder Brain is supposed to be is Prince Brannart McGregor, the Radiance Lich. And he's not happy to see the party. His mind is muddled, but his powers aren't diminished. Eric has assaulted McGregor since he arrived in this location. The prince's sanity is about to snap, and he has become so hostile and unpredictable that the other Cabal members have left him to his own devices here. This should be an epic fight that the players will remember. No one's coming to help Brannart. He has a bad habit of blasting people that annoy him, and he screams quite a lot. He's so temperamental that even hearing people recreating the Battle of Iwo Jima in a 35-foot square room isn't unusual. It's going to be a tough fight, and probably a deadly one, if the party doesn't have several soul stones. So make sure they've stocked up on them before they get here. Now the party gets to visit the Far Realms. They are on Eric's home turf. And it's getting freaky, like Ralph Bakshi dropping acid freaky. The party will find weird monsters, impossible physics, and you get to use one of H.P. Lovecraft's favorite terms, non-Euclidean geometry. And quite often. There's not a lot of danger in Chapter 7. It's there to put your characters ill at ease more than anything else, because things are about to get very real, or in this adventure's case, very surreal. If the party returns to Phandelven one last time to resupply, they see what fate awaits Mystara. It's a nightmare realm. Everyone present is horribly mutated. The buildings have mutated into eldritch horrors. If you need examples, imagine if David Cronenberg had become an interior designer. Then stop, because you'll need to sleep before you run the end of this adventure. The party dives back into the Far Realms for one last showdown. There are many freaky monsters and a chance encounter with Githyanki. And remember, if one of the party has joined the Knights of Ebony, you're going to have a real fun time with that bit of dialogue. The two groups are well aware of each other and get along as well as a Minotaur at a Matador convention. They can be talked into fighting alongside the party, and the characters will need all the help they can get. But Mystarans do not like outer planar creatures, and this adventure is not helping with that mindset. There's also some flumps, which might lead to some hilarious conversations, because when it comes to good aligned outsiders, Mystarans think of the holier-than-thou Celestials. The characters might be a tad bit suspicious and murdery. An Amethyst Dragon and human ally are looking to get out of the Far Realm, and while the party might be suspicious, at least they know what a dragon is. It will offer to help, but it's unwilling to take the necessary risks to do so effectively. There's an Arcanoloth that serves as an exposition dump, and if you want the party to fight an Aboleth, this is the best place to find one. Then the characters get to the final boss after running around multiple messed up locations and getting covered in more gunk than they thought possible. There are some trapped fiends here that want nothing more than to get out, but they're not willing to fight because death here is permanent for them. The party finds the 3 leaders of the Cabal and any minions that are left, and it's a fight to the death. After that, once they've stopped the ritual, the obelisk is restored, it absorbs all the radiation nearby and collapses into dusk. Everyone is cured of any possible radiation poisoning, and they all live happily ever after. At least until the creature that was behind all of this attacks the party as they try to leave. Keep this fight as is. It hints at the horrors of the Far Realms, and it's like nothing the party has ever faced. They're going to need all the help they can get, especially if they used up most of their resources fighting the Cabal. Good luck! That is the epic conversion of the Shattered Obelisk into a pure Mystaran module. It's going to be a meat grinder, one that the players will remember. If they're lucky, McGregor won't remember them. If they're really lucky, they never have to go back to the Far Realms. As for Eric, if the Entropic Immortals learn what he tried to do, he's getting stuffed back into a locker. Welcome to Mystara, and get ready to leave it, as today we're converting Vecna, Edge of Ruin, for play regarding the known world. At least the parts I can convert, as the major sections of this adventure is running from setting to setting trying to get the MacGuffin, before you get zotted into the next mini-adventure and experience what they have to offer in today's modern D&D. As this is a conversion video, it's primarily for DMs, so it's going to be a spoiler-o-rama. This one is going to be going out of order as it's time sensitive, and after the module's meh reviews, it needs my gentle and loving touch. Don't worry, I'll be working on the fighting styles in the Mystara video as well. I'm Mr. Welch, and that soothing light at the end of the tunnel is just a freight train headed your way. Vecna Eve of Ruin is the latest 5e module created by Wizards. It isn't a greatest hits compilation of classic modules, it's a greatest hits compilation of 5e modules. In short, your characters will be summoned by the Wizards 3 to get the things that form the big thing that will stop Vecna. You embark on a host of mini-adventures that, if they were any more of a railroad, Eberron would put it on a lightning rail. But you have to play them in order because you gain a level after each one, so they scale as you level up. There's an intro adventure to get the party from 10th level to 11th, which is a nice change from always starting world-shattering adventures at level 1. As much as I complain about what I don't like, I will give them props for what I do. Well, it's time to make this book as Mystaran as possible where I can. You start at level 10, as I mentioned, and I would make them Knights of Ebony, the order tasked by the Immortal Council of Intrusion to hunt down and remove extraplanar threats to the planet. In this case, our big bad Vecna sent some of his minions to get arcane knowledge from scholars that he needs for his evil plans. Since he needs arcane lore, we need to put this somewhere with lots of wizards. Instead of Neverwinter, we're heading to Sunsval, where the party is hunting down those interlopers. They don't have to be Knights of the Ebony, but it will establish them as people familiar with the Outer Planes and other settings. It makes for a lot less exposition and as you know moments. If they already know, why are you telling them? The cultists have kidnapped 4 victims from various places around Sunsval and are looking to extract the needed secrets from them. They brought some extraplanar creatures to help them, so don't worry too much about substitutions. They are hiding out in some catacombs beneath the city, or even outside the city. I would run a short investigation into the area to get the players interested in the adventure. so they don't feel like you've just kicked them into a dungeon and told them they already know where the cultists are. They did that a lot with the Golden Heist book. Let them figure it out for themselves. It gives them a sense of accomplishment. Most of the extraplanar creatures here are elemental types, so those are already known in Mystara. We don't have a problem with the inner planes, just the outer planes. There are some undead, but it's mostly underwhelming for a party of this level. The 4 kidnapped victims are a bard, a scholar, an actor, and a wild mage. Change the wild mage to a regular wizard for continuity, and you're fine. Surprisingly, none of them are tieflings or other exotic races, so this is another point for that module. During the adventure, the party will be transported to Evernight, a city in the Shadowfell. Well, we've already got a town in perpetual twilight, I just talked about it. We're headed to the shadow city of Archport in Eadrin. The city is always at dusk, the sun never fully rises or sets. There's a vampire you find in a scary store, but she's just there for an exposition dump. Change her to anything less fantastic if you want to. She's not there for combat. From there, you go to the dungeon and fight more undead and a Sorrowsworn, which for all purposes here we'll call a nightmare creature. It fits the bill and it also ties to the setting. Then the party gets a psychic bond with Vecna for impressing him, and the real module starts. And this is where we derail it. There are significant spoilers now, but if you've made it this far, you want to see how I saved this module, and you don't care how it was originally written. The party gets pulled into Sigil by the Wizards 3, originally Elminster, Mordenkainen, and Dalamar from Dragonlance. Not to be confused with Damodar from the epic D&D movie. Not to be confused with the epic D&D movie starring Chris Pine. Now that you're confused, you won't notice that Elminster and Dalamar are replaced with Tasha, the Queen of Demons, and Illustrial Silverhand, one of Mistress Chosen, and who, as far as I could find, has a single passing mention on page 54 of the Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide in 5th edition. Are we allowed to talk about Skag now? I thought that entire book was memory hold. Regardless, she's in this adventure. Now here's the major spoiler and where the module lost me. On page 42 of a 256-page book. Mordenkainen is secretly Cass, the vampire. The characters have no idea who he is, because he's a Greyhawk character, who was later dragged into Ravenloft. As written, the characters are from Faerun. They would have never heard of him if they hadn't gone plane hopping, unless they somehow knew of the other settings. The Knights of Ebony might have gotten a warning about him, but he's been trapped in the mist, and he's not considered a threat. The module is introducing the primary villain without any lead-up after the module is 80% done. The party gets teleported to the wizards who were wishing for Vecna's plan to fail. How does the party know who Vecna is? He's the guy with the psychic link to them that you must occasionally remind them about, because the book doesn't really go much into it. They get told they must stop Vecna by collecting all 7 parts of the Rod of 7 Parts and assemble the rod in order. When they return, Mordenkainen rips off his Scooby-Doo mask and reveals him to be Cass all along. Who could have seen that coming? Seriously, who could have seen it coming? There's no connection to him in the story up until this point. It could have been Bargle. It could have been Raceland. It might as well have been Old Man Mervyn from A Welsh Werewolf in Shanfar Pushquin Gishko Gero Shondabush Shantasilio Gog. Cass then incapacitates the 2 women, grabs the rod, and teleports away, leaving the party to follow him. That's just lazy. They could have done so much better. Time to break out the plot welding machine. I have got so much work to do. We need to start getting out all the old source material to fix this module. We also need to follow some writing guidelines like show, don't tell. For example, the party is told they're in Sigil, the City of Doors. But this segment takes place entirely in the Sanctum. A building. You don't get to walk around in the wards, hang out with the governors, or take a sneak peek at the Lady of Pain. This building could have been anywhere. Faerun, Night City, Shear Street in Ankh-Morpork, or even 4915 Oakton Street, Skokie, Illinois. Which is a canon D&D setting, by the way, page 29 of the module Immortal Storm, if you're curious. The point is they tell us the module is set in Sigil, but never show us Sigil. Have the initial briefing outside in a cafe to showcase its location. Give the player something to look at rather than a room in a wizard's tower. This leads me to correcting the Wizards 3. Instead of Toril, Orth, and Kryn, we get Toril, Orth, and Orth. Even if Cass is cosplaying Morty, that's still another Greyhawk character. Cass has got to go, we aren't pulling the Scooby-Doo reveal. He'll be back later. Morty is back to being Morty, so Tasha has to go so we can showcase someone from another setting. The new wizard will keep the same purpose, serving as the evil aspect of the 3. We're going to Eberron to grab Sora Katra, the Green Hag. She's charismatic, she's popular, and she's evil to the bone. She's perfect for our purpose. Don't worry about Igwolf, she'll be back soon. She's just off with her baby daddy visiting their little boy later in the adventure. We're not changing the other 2 wizards, though I know what you're thinking. And no, I don't trust wizards to do Mystara justice, but I will smile at the thought they put the King and Queen of Irindi on the cover of the next player's handbook. I know what you're thinking now, and yes, Elminster would have been a better choice for the Forgotten Realms wizard. But then I looked at what they wrote for Alestriel's Silverhand's biography in 5e and compared to what she's been in every previous edition. In this book, she's suddenly gay, complete with a wife. If you get out your copy of pretty much any other book she's been featured in, let's start with page 279 of the Forgotten Realms campaign setting, also by Wizards of the Coast, and just go backwards from all the books from there. You won't find the wife mentioned at all. In fact, Alestriel has been married to many men in the past and has lots of kids. Before people complain about her skin tone, her art has always been all over the place from book to book, so that's not a complaint you'll hear from me. But we can use the wife to fulfill the role that Cass has left behind, that of the traitor, and use the same artifact he was supposed to use. Milena Van Talstuff has never appeared outside this book before. Believe me, I looked. She was made up specifically for this adventure, which makes her perfect for our needs. Cass originally pulled the wools over everyone's eyes with the artifact, the Crown of Lies, which made people believe you no matter what you told them. Now Milena has the crown. She's an agent for Vecna. Alestriel is entirely under her spell, and Mordenkainen and Sora are oblivious, partially because of the crown, and partially they don't know these two. When it comes time to steal the rods, Milena is the one that pulls a Dr. Huey, drops the wards, and lets in the bad guys. Now you have a traitor the party has encountered before, one with a reason to betray the wizards, and the method to do it. She's our Ephialtes. Then moving on to the plane-hopping portion of our adventure, the word to remember is repetition. Many of these adventures are repeated from 5e adventures. Ravenloft has Death House back, complete with Strahd. Asarak is back with a new tomb. There's a casino in Hell. Do you remember the one from the Heist compilation? You're headed back to the Underdark to face more drow, like Into the Abyss. They are recycling ideas for settings far more expansive than the little sliver they got in their own particular book. You need to branch out and showcase these settings' elements, showing what makes each setting different. Pay attention to what each area has and what it doesn't have. Like when you reach the adventure set in Krynn and face the one monster that Dragonlance is famous for. Werewolves. In Krynn, the werewolves are lycanthrope. What do you mean? Krynn doesn't have lycanthropes. The Hobgoblin, the Minotaur, and the Owlbear are all in the monster manual, and yet you will find every single one in the Dragonlance setting. Are you suggesting werewolves plane shift? Not at all. They're fighting in the war. What? In the dragon armies? No, they're lawful good. It's not a question of whether they're lawful good. Dragonlance has never had werewolves. Alright, enough trying to salvage what they gave us. This isn't going to happen. It's time to call out the awesomeness editors. That's exactly what I did. I asked my lore channel friends how to do high-level adventures and show off their favorite location. Wizards has given us a brief glimpse into 6 of the game worlds with Vecna, with Sigil being the alleged backdrop of the Wizards 3. Of the 7 adventurers, Faerun, Avernus, and Greyhawk are Ravenlofts of all variants of things we've already seen. They could be showcasing, I don't know, another domain of dread, Darksun, the Moonsea, or the Great Kingdom, instead of places we already know. This was the book to do that, but they didn't. They played it safe. The Grognards would have loved all the callbacks, and the noobs would have seen what else their favorite locations could offer. It was a missed opportunity. But then I put out the call, and the call was answered. The lore channels gave me their ideas on how to turn stale and repeated adventures epic and fresh. They told me where to place them, who would be the villain, and what monsters we would use. Where there wasn't a lore channel, social media would suffice. I picked the brains of Spelljammer, Eberron, and Darksun players to create adventures that I couldn't have done on my own. Eberron players gave me far too many ideas, so I let them pick. Spelljammer players went for the biggest ship of all time for their adventure choice, and then tied it into getting the party to a future adventure. That's when I decided to drop Avernus for one of the 3 missing settings. Despite being the best setting of all, Mystara wasn't a good fit. Immortals wouldn't sit around while some interlopers try to blow up their planet. That left Birthright and Darksun for the highest level planar excursion. Then the Darksun Reddit gave me possibly the most challenging fight I have ever heard of for 5th edition. When I asked how they expected the party to survive the encounter, they just said welcome to Darksun. My adventures were set. So let's restart with the concept of this book entirely. This is where the Mystara element comes in, as we do what we should have done in the first place. When you tell your players to make characters for this adventure in Session 0, give them a new rule. They are tasked with each making a character from a different setting. No 2 characters can come from the same game world. Let the veteran players pick the lesser-known settings to make it easier on the newer players. Help those fill in their characters to be a typical adventure from the chosen local setting. Anything is legal as long as it can be found in that world. You're not going to see a half-orc barbarian from Kryn or a drow sorcerer from Mystara, but you could have a spelljammer plasmoid providing covering fire for a half-giant from the fighting pits of Athos. There are 5e conversions for all the different settings, and you can find them easily enough, and you all have hardbound copies of the Mystara Player's Guide. Now you've got half a dozen adventurers scattered across the multiverse with no ties to each other. Time to bring them together. This quest starts with all of them being teleported to the City of the Immortals, specifically the home of Simurgh, the patron of not letting the multiverse explode. Seriously, that's his only job. He's assembling a team to stop Vecna, and as Vecna is a god and Simurgh is an immortal, he can't interfere because that would somehow make things worse. The two types of deities don't get along, and by some ancient treaty, they can't attack each other. Vecna is only trying to rewrite the multiverse, not destroy it, so if Simurgh interferes, this would be considered a violation. The Wizards 3 try to cast a spell to stop Vecna, but mortal magic can't affect deities. They should have known this, but something about hubris and thinking they can punch above their weight class because they're archmages. The wish is doomed to fail from the start. Instead, Simurgh hijacks their wish and sends his assembled party to assist the Wizards. The reason why he pulls from every realm is plausible deniability. If he had just sent Knights of the Ebony, the gods would know it's an immortal who tried to stop one of them. Now they have to investigate the pantheons of multiple worlds, and who's got time for that? Plus, if the Mystara character can pull this off, he's got a guaranteed sponsor for immortality, and some extra credit when he tests to see if he's worthy. The party pops in on the Wizards 3 just like the regular adventure. This is where you can use one of my favorite mechanics, personalized character knowledge. These wizards are fairly well known in their own worlds. The Forgotten Realms character might know there's something wrong about Silverhand's spouse, but thanks to the Crown of Lies, they can't put their finger on it. When they go plane hopping, give them a chance to try to remember exactly what's nagging them if they ask. This meeting is brief because the wizards tell the party the entire adventure hook in 3 paragraphs of box text before sending them to the Forgotten Realms for adventure number 1. The original adventure has you fighting drow in the Underdark. Again. The new, more epic quest finds them in Candlekeep, where they have to find out where the sages keep their powerful artifacts of earth-shattering potential. The answer is the sub-basement. That's where they keep the tomes of forbidden knowledge, scrolls of dangerous information, records of potential conflicts from inconvenient genealogies, reports they've had to retract they hope people will forget, and part-time professors that have earned tenure but are more field researchers. In short, the party will need to sneak down there. Then you have a surreal dungeon crawl with ghosts of former avowed, which you can avoid or fool by answering their questions. There's a spectral wraith dragon that serves more as the head librarian. Obviously, this is where a Faerun character will shine. You should allow each of them to show off their home field advantage in their own plane. Traps are almost pointless in 5th edition, but throw in a few to keep the players honest. This is primarily a stealth run. It's a librarian that need to be quiet, though you might have them answering a lot of riddles. Monsters should all be related to the library. Things like living spell books or the bookshelf golems. There are baby cave fishers scattered about, with signs in Gnomish asking you to leave them alone. They're there to provide ink for the books. There is a halfling trap master that combines illusions and magic items for some genuinely terrifying pitfalls. If you're nice to her, she also makes some killer crab cakes, and she will happily share them with the party. The rod is held by one Picaroon the Lorekeeper, a halfling explorer who has spent his time across the multiverse. He knows the dangers of Vecna, and it won't take much to convince him to turn over the first part of the rod. And as you leave, he asks, why didn't you just take the nearby service elevator? Next up is Spelljammer. The original version was a crashed Spelljammer on an asteroid. Nice, but not epic. Instead of some small, insignificant ship trapped in the heart of a dead god, we head to a sentient ship that might as well be a god. It's over a half a mile long, with over 1 million hit points and a small city implanted on its back. It's the ship that gave the setting its name, the Spelljammer. The manta ray with buildings? Its undead former captain threatens it and needs the party to stop him for a future favor. And they will need that future favor. The party arrives and is immediately confronted by Shivax, the creatures created by the Spelljammer to effectively serve as its crew. They have a multitude of forms, and they are designed to do their task. Their task now is to herd the party to go and talk to the ship itself. You need the Legend of Spelljammer for this, but you can find a PDF easily enough. The villain is the Fool, a mutinous former captain who has become a lich to prevent his destruction. Undead are invisible to the ship and the Shivax, so you can see the problem. The lich sold his services to Vecna, who granted him protection in exchange for keeping the rod. The party will have to track down the Fool in one of the most unique locations in D&D. It ends with a massive battle on the ship's bridge, which is made more difficult due to the party being magically hindered from any collateral damage, or at least property damage. The Fool has no such restriction. Kill or drive off the villain, get the rod, and a promise from the Spelljammer for a future service. The point to remember is that the Spelljammer can travel anywhere. It doesn't matter what gods, immortals, or dark powers think. You can't stop the Spelljammer. Eberron is the next stop, and instead of the Mournlands facing lots and lots of Warforged, why not showcase the whole setting? You will need to do that in the City of Towers, Knives, Lost Souls, A Thousand Eyes, the Gateway to Zendrick, and Perdition. We're going to Sharn. It's the largest city in Eberron and one of the largest in D&D, and its diversity rivals that of Sigil. The party arrives near the top of the city, and the rod piece will be at the bottom. The city is built on multiple stacked tiers, kind of like Minas Tirith. They will need to bribe, cajole, and threaten their way into finding the right path. This is where you showcase all of Eberron's unique creatures. You'll have dinosaur-riding halflings on one side of the street, and warforged construction workers on the other. Point out the ludicrous amounts of magic used for mundane means all the time. They will need to figure out who owns the piece, and in this case it's Merrix de Cannith, leader of House Cannith. He's stashed the rod in one of his factories, trying to figure out how to profit from the magic. The factory technically doesn't exist. Less taxes that way. Sneaking into the factory isn't hard, and the reason for that is it's a death trap. Not an Indiana Jones-style Temple of Doom, but the kind of place that gives OSHA inspectors heart attacks. It's one of the last functioning Warforged factories, and those aren't exactly legal these days. The characters will need to make multiple saving throws dodging machinery, avoiding random molten metal pouring on them or being thrown off conveyor belts. This leads them to a lightning rail train leaving the factory with Merrix and the rod. Cue the epic train fight, and the party acquires the rod when Merrix flees. He's not on par with the party in combat and he knows it. He can bargain with the party or just abandon the rod and run. He's not picky. Then it's time to head back to the Spelljammer for that favor. The Ravenloft segment is supposed to take you back to Death House to fight Strahd. Again. That sound you hear is the rolling of the entirety of the Fraternity of Shadow's eyes. Don't worry. Its replacement is one of the most dangerous locations in the Mist, and this is where we add some new story elements. First, you have to get into the Mists. You don't simply walk into the Domains of Dread. Doesn't matter how powerful you are. Unless you're a half-mile-sized artifact and the most powerful Spelljammer in existence. Then you can open up a portal to the Mists to briefly allow the party to get in, get the rod, and get out. But hurry, the Mist will try to kick the ship out of their little prison plane as hard as possible. You've got 2 hours to find the rod. You might want to hurry a little faster when they find out where they are. They've arrived in Clore, one of the more obscure domains. It consists of the shattered remains of failed domains floating in space. Also a black hole that pulls them in once an hour and destroys them. The doomed domain is Cavadius, Vecna's old stomping ground. It's a desolate, broken land that borders Torvog, the domain of Cass the Vampire. The party needs to get to Vecna's old castle, kill lots of undead, and then face the Guardian of the Rod, which should be an undead creature far beyond their capabilities. A trio of Night Stalkers would be appropriate. Remind them that they're on the clock. When the domain above them gets pulled into the black hole, they've got 1 hour left. But they get an unexpected ally when Cass shows up with his undead army and helps the party. The enemy of my enemy is my friend and all. He finds out that they're trying to harm Vecna, gives them the rod, and wishes them luck as they're trapped in his domain. They get back to the Spelljammer, it goes to Plaid, taking a chunk of stone and gases with it, as it exits the doomed plane. Time for the next adventure. Dragonlance has the party helping a bunch of werewolves stop some evil wizards under a temple where the 3 moons hang in the sky. That last bit was about the only thing they got right regarding this setting. Dragonlance doesn't have a lot of common monsters other settings have. According to the designers, Dragonlance specifically doesn't have 3 creatures: orcs, drows, and lycanthropes. It's pretty explicit in their setting books. It does have a host of endemic creatures, and they decided to pick one of the 3 monsters not found in the setting. What you leave out is just as important as what you leave in. They've turned Krynn into another sandbox, the exact opposite of what Hickman and Weiss intended. Time to fix that. The party is going to Sylvanesti, where they find the forests corrupted and teeming with enemies like Draconians and the soldiers of the Red Dragon Army. They must sneak through the forest, gathering allies from the scattered elves. The big bad is Cyan Bloodbane, a green dragon that has corrupted the Elven King. It's a stealth mission, as they're badly outnumbered here. And the bad guys have dragons. They find the Elven Palace, get inside with the help of some gully dwarf slaves, and then get the rod before the dragon finds them. He's not going to fight them, he's a bit of a coward. But the dragons he has under his command aren't cowards. Even at high level, the party can still be squishy. But now they're headed for a family reunion in Greyhawk. The Greyhawk adventure is a dungeon crawl against the Lich Acererak. Again. This place is Vecna's stomping grounds. He's got a lot of power here. He's also got more than a few enemies here. Time for the party to meet some of them. This one's going to be a gauntlet. One of Vecna's biggest rivals is a demigod who has some idea of what's going on. He hijacks the party from teleporting in and sends them to the dungeon to see their plans. Then they run the gauntlet. Ladies and gentlemen, Ayuz, the Lord of Pain, has entered the chat. The party will appear before Ayuz the Old and his entourage, so they can be measured up. They will face drow priestesses, fungal creatures from the Lady of Rot, Zuktmoy, and his mommy and daddy, Igwulf and Grazit. Told you Tasha was going to be back. Ayuz taunts the party and decides if they are worthy. Now it's time for lots of combat. Ayuz isn't a complicated man. Lots of pain and violence, and he's happy. Start with drow warriors. Not regular drow warriors, but Greyhawk drow warriors. What's the difference? Awesome stashes. You need to go into great detail about the facial hair of Greyhawk's Dark Elves is borderline awe-inspiring, and the players can barely bring themselves to hurt the Dark Elves out of fear of damaging their mustaches. After you or Ayuz gets bored with a drow, it's fungal monsters, and after that, Mommy shows why she's the mother of demons by sending some of her nastier ones to fight the party. When the players have had enough, and they're barely alive, Ayuz stops the fight. The gladiator pits should be knee-deep in blood by this point. He's going to be taunting them the entire time. He is a bit of a dick like that. He tells them why he spared them, and then he gives them the rod in exchange for a future payment. He wants Vecna's eye and hand, and not the ones he's already lost.
Congratulations. You're the first to survive the audition.
Now we come to the final rod piece, and we're heading to a casino in hell to look at devils in tuxedos. Okay, that's just goofy, and people complained about Jim Holloway's art. And it's not very epic, even if they have a holographic dragon. Nope, we're going to challenge the party in ways that 5e doesn't challenge parties. We're going to Athos. Dark Sun is the deadliest setting in D&D, and the players aren't going to see this coming. If the monsters don't kill you, the land is more than willing to give it a try. First, you have to change the rules of the game for Athos. Magic has been drained away, so magic items that are rare or higher in quality just stop working. The magic isn't there for them. Weapons and armors revert to a basic +1. You'll also need to remove metal armor. It's 140 degrees here. Every 10 minutes in metal armor gets you a point of exhaustion. Characters will have difficulty understanding Athasian magic, unless they're already from here, in which case they get a pass because of home field advantage. Arcane magic does 1d4 per spell level of damage to the caster when used. Cantrips do a single point of damage. If it's a magical ability from their class, it's 1d4 hit points per the level of what they acquired the ability at. So if they've got a teleport ability at level 13, they take 13d4 damage if they use it. They're feeding the magic through their hit points. This cannot be avoided. Divine magic is reduced in power by half. Half the range, half the duration. If there's a number rolled, half it. You can't summon any form of food, drink, or change the weather with magic. It's not fair. It's Dark Sun. Then we get to the most epic part of the adventure so far. The players find themselves in Ur-Draxa, the fabled lost city. The land where the first Sorcerer King was slain. Now it's a survival check as they discover Dark Sun monsters don't mess around. There's no one to talk to as everyone in this city is long dead, or trying to kill them. The city's not even supposed to exist. They can be attacked by beasthead giants, earth drakes, or Timbo looking for appetizers. Again, they're without much of their equipment, and their magic doesn't work well. Then we get to the main event. Turns out the first Sorcerer King has turned himself into a Dracolich. An ancient Amethysth Dracolich. Not an accurate representation for a Dark Sun monster, but the closest I could get. The party is not supposed to survive this. This is not a monster they can kill. This is one of those times where discretion far outweighs valor. They need to dive into the oily pool that it emerged from, get the shard, and then get the hell out. Don't worry, their equipment will come with them. This is just a reminder that no matter who they are, they're still bugs to someone else. And I hope everyone has decent intelligence saves, because everything I mentioned is psychic. Congratulations, you've got the Rod of 7 parts fully assembled. You head back to Sigil, to the Wizards 3, where you're immediately ambushed by Old Man Mervyn from a Welsh werewolf in Shanfar Pushquin Gish Gogero Shondabush Shantasilio Go Go Gok, who takes the rod and trounces the wizards. Or we have Morty and the rest start some ritual only for Malena to drop the wards and let Vecna's agents in. Only it's not Vecna's agents that show up. It's Cass. He took care of the agents. He used the Spelljammer to escape, being one of those gas clouds that escaped with it. He knows that the rod is the key to hurting Vecna. He can kill Malena, she can escape, or the party can stop her later. Cass has brought with him various demons of greater power, on loan from Tasha to get the rod. Ayuz hates Vecna with a burning passion. The baddies don't automatically incapacitate the Wizards 3 like in the book, but they flood the Sanctum with high-powered minions and concentrate their attacks on the known threats. The party is tasked with stopping Cass and regaining the rod, not because they're the chosen ones, but because they're the only ones not currently fighting a Baylor. The rest of the adventure plays out mostly as written. The party has to confront Cass, deal with at least a weakened Vecna, and there are a lot of demon fights. You get to scrap with a god, a vampiric Dark Lord, put paid to that little traitor, and finally save the multiverse. Vecna is either banished back to Orth, the Domains of Dread, or 4915 Oakton Street, Skokie, Illinois. Your choice, whichever is worse for him. Then retire your characters, wait for the new edition, and pray till you're hoarse that it's better than 5th edition. That's Vecna, Eve of Ruin. He's barely in his own book. Little attention is paid to source material for several adventures, and most are just rehashes. So why did I review it? It means I can design dungeons and correct other people, 2 of my favorite hobbies. And I got to work with my friends on this and make new ones in the process. Nothing like an entire book filled with fetch quests to end an edition on, right? Granted, they didn't nuke the setting like they did with Time of Troubles, the Vecna series from 3rd edition, or that whole Faerun Sundering time jump.